Hidden things. Harry Crow. Harry Crow has just become my most reviewed story, with 2 million less hits than the one it's just surpassed. Taking into consideration I only began this story back in May, that's an incredible show of support for which I can only say thank you. I think the last time I wrote and posted so many chapters of the one story uninterrupted was way back with my very first effort. I promise to finish first year at least before letting my attention wander to other works though. As always, I'll try my best to maintain a weekly posting schedule, whatever I write. Smiley face Robert. Chapter 18. It was a red-faced Harry and Hermione who were sitting in their history class. Professor Hobson had a goblin memory displayer, and a crystal that contained the memory of Centurion Crow speaking from the steps of Gringotts. The player was a black pyramid-shaped object that the crystal slotted into the apex of, projecting the scene in about 1/8 scale, with sound. The scene ended as Ragnick headed back into the bank, all eyes were once more focused on a stoic Harry. That attention was never going to last though, not with the beautiful Professor Hobson in the class. The reason I have been showing this scene to all my classes is not to embarrass a certain pair of Ravenclaws, rather to show history in the making. Now I want to hear your answers to what you thought was historic about this event. As our acknowledged experts, Centurion Crow and Miss Granger will be asked to cover any points we may miss. Marag's hand was first to shoot up, quite an achievement considering all the boys were desperate to please their favorite professor. Hermione was the first non-goblin ever to witness a Centurion ceremony. Do you have a memory crystal with that on it, Professor? Correct, Miss McDougal, and sorry but no. Those ceremonies are wrapped in mystery and secrecy. Perhaps Mr. Crow could tell us something about it after we finish this. Anyone else? Some other suggestions were offered, including Lavender's most expensive collection of jewelry ever worn at the one time by a witch, before Neville had his hand up. I've met Harry's father, Barchoke, and I am tutored in potions by Master Pitsley. We all remember Master Sharkshard's visit to Hogwarts, but I don't think I've even seen a picture of the Goblin Director before. This earned Neville a big smile and a, well done, from Professor Hobson, making him blush. The fact that Mr. Longbottom recognizes so many goblins is practically historic in itself. The point he made though is correct. Until he appeared that day, no one outside Gringotts knew what he looked like. This is Director Ragnarok's first ever public appearance outside Gringotts, and the first time the director has had his photograph taken by a wizard. What have we missed, Miss Granger? Hermione's mind was still stuck on learning that all the classes were seeing the projection as part of their history course. No wonder Cho was drawing her daggers when Harry wasn't looking. This was far more graphic than any photograph. She would need to ask Harry about these projection pyramids. Her mum and dad would be blown away watching this. She snapped back to reality and had an answer already. Well, apart from being the youngest warrior ever to be granted Centurion status, Harry is also the first warrior not goblin-born to achieve this great honor. Once more correct, but not exactly what I was looking for. Okay, Mr. Crow, it's left to you to tell us why this was really an historic occasion. An historic occasion that could one day affect us all. He didn't disappoint. Madam Bones talking with Director Ragnick is the first official contact between the Ministry and the head of the Goblin Nation in over 350 years. This drew a loud reaction from Amelia's niece. What? How is that possible? It's actually quite simple, Susan. The Ministry decrees we must contact them through the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. For Gringotts leaders to officially contact this department would mean we accepted them classifying goblins as mere magical creatures, something I can guarantee you will never happen. Susan Bones at least had an inkling of how the Ministry worked, and wondered how the goblins had gotten around this problem. She asked and Harry once more supplied the answer. Oh, every month the bank clerk with the lowest Gringotts approval rating gets to take a folder full of documents to the Ministry. Since nothing has been done about the past points raised, or complaints made, we are not even sure if anyone actually reads them. Every month now, at least one of those documents will be bogus. A recipe for dragon stew, the best technique for cutting toenails, complete with clippings as proof, that kind of thing. There was even a competition at school once to see who could come up with the best idea. The winner was chosen to be the month's bogus entry. The Ministry think they're fooling us while we're quietly having a chuckle. Goblin sense of humor, which is almost impossible for any non-goblins to see the funny side of. Harry looked in the direction of his friends. Believe me, I have tried. I think modesty is also preventing Centurion Crow from elaborating on a point we touched on. The entire Goblin leadership was standing publicly and squarely behind his appointment to this post. The message this very public display sends out is that the goblins support a child born to a witch and wizard being appointed to one of the highest posts in their nation. That, boys and girls, is history right there. In a very public way, the goblins are showing that they see no difference between us. It is only our attitudes that define differences. Draco was desperate for this professor to notice him, so just had to state what he thought was obvious. Professor Hobson, Centurion Crow is different. He is clearly not a goblin. Okay, Mr. Malfoy, let me ask you this. I'll even open the question up to the entire class. Do you think the Goblin Nation would award a Dementor Centurion status? What about a dragon, griffin, a Acromantula? What's an Acromantula, Professor? Imagine a tarantula the size of Hagrid and you won't be far away from describing an Acromantula. She was interrupted by Ron Weasley falling off his chair, giving Draco a chance to once more compete for her attention. The answer to all of those would have to be no. It still doesn't tell us why Centurion Crow is different. All those things I mentioned come under the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures portfolio, as do the goblins. She loved teaching for this moment, when you could see young minds begin to make connections for themselves. Now if we can see what's wrong with that, why can't the Ministry? The answer is simple, they don't want to. The British Ministry of Magic is one of the few magical governments in the world where sentient magical beings are still treated like mere beasts. She let this sink into the young minds before continuing. My job here is not to cram a bunch of names and dates into your heads, more to get you realizing that history is all around us every day. A very wise muggle actually produced a quote that has kind of become my mantra: those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We are still going to focus on specific historical events, but dig deeper into each in an attempt to discover what was really going on. Only when you understand that, can you hope to avoid making the same mistakes. The young Swedish professor could see that made sense to her students. She hoped the next bit did too. I think one of the main reasons the history syllabus at Hogwarts was allowed to deteriorate to the sorry state it was in is that the ruling governments of the day didn't want their actions studied too closely. Every history course I've ever seen includes some relatively modern events in it. The professor paused, wondering just how far she could take this with first years. She decided this was something they really needed to know. Over a decade ago, magical Britain reached a condition that was a mere step away from civil war. The general belief is that this was fought by purebloods wishing to take what they considered their rightful places and rule the country. Utter rubbish. The Death Eaters were a bunch of terrorists attempting to overthrow a country's legal government, with the rest of the magical world monitoring the situation closely in case they had to intervene. Don't get me wrong, the other governments weren't about to rush to Britain's aid, rather end the problem here before it could spread to their countries. The young professor was used to her classes hanging on her every word. She wondered though who would ask the first question about the next revelation. Propaganda played a large part in the Dark Lord's strategy. Personally, I think he copied a lot of the German ideas from the Second World War. Replace Aryan with the word pureblood and most of the ideas are the same. Hermione's hand was up in a flash, getting a grin from her teacher. Professor, my friends are purebloods, and a goblin. The point is, none of them know anything about Hitler or his plans for a master race. How could this Dark Lord know about it? 10 points to Ravenclaw for getting right to the heart of the matter, Miss Granger. The answer though is surprisingly simple. The Dark Lord is not a pureblood. This caused uproar in the class until the professor held her hand up for silence. When I tell you something, I don't want you to instantly believe me. I want you to do research and actually try to prove me wrong. What you need for that though are facts, not hearsay. She pointed her wand at the board and the name Tom Marvolo Riddle wrote itself. The letters then shuffled to reveal, I am Lord Voldemort. The Dark Lord was nothing of the sort. Being clever with anagrams does not bestow a lordship on you. His mother was an unmarried, impoverished pureblood who died giving birth to her son, but his father was a muggle. Young Tom spent his pre-Hogwarts years in a muggle orphanage. Records of his muggle school attendance and even some report cards still exist. You can check the Hogwarts roll and see he was a Slytherin, head boy too. Neville's jaw matched those of the majority of his classmates, in that it was practically hitting the floor. That was before he turned and spotted Harry sitting there unconcerned. You knew. It's vital that you know your enemy Neville. Professor Hobson had a lot more revelations for this class. Now, having established his true identity, it's important to discover the real aims Tom had. Quite simply, this self-styled lord wanted to rule the world, and would go to any lengths to realize his ambition. Seeing where all the wealth and political power was held, he aligned himself with the purebloods. Not all bought into his claims though, but Tom had an answer for that too. He coined the term blood traitor, classing any pureblood who opposed him as such. Again this drew gasps from her students. Things like this just weren't talked about in mixed company. Traitor is a very emotive word. Even in Muggle Britain, the act of treason could still see you hanged. The Treason Act hasn't been used for over 50 years, but it's still part of their laws. Some of the most eminent magical members of this country were labeled blood traitors, simply because they opposed this maniac. This gave families they had been close to for generations the perfect excuse to stand back and do nothing, while their fellow purebloods were almost wiped out. Families like Bones, Longbottom, Potter, Abbott, and many more, all lost people to this maniac and his followers. There were some moist eyes now as this was history that struck close to home, but Professor Hobson wasn't finished yet. Miss Granger, sorry to keep picking on you, but I need someone with a pre-Hogwarts Muggle education like Tom's to answer this. Can you think of any Muggles who would dress in costumes with masks to victimize a specific group of people? The image popped into Hermione's head instantly. The Ku Klux Klan, they promoted white supremacy. A flick of the professor's wand and a Klan figure was drawn on the board, alongside a Death Eater. Aryan supremacy, white supremacy, pureblood supremacy, are we seeing a pattern here? Tom Riddle is an immensely powerful wizard, and also a very clever one. Taking what he had learned from both sides of the magical divide, he fabricated an entire persona. Here was a wizard who had nothing but almost ended up ruling Britain. No wealth, take someone else's, no old family name, make one up, no blood status, who's to know? He set wizard upon wizard for his own gains and almost wiped out a way of life. Pansy nervously raised her hand and spoke when asked to. Professor, aren't you afraid what could happen to you for saying this? Miss Parkinson, when you're afraid of the truth then you're living a lie. These facts are taught in most of Europe's magical schools. Should Tom or his followers attempt to return, I for one will be standing against them. I will do so of my own free will, though it doesn't help that your ministry would have me reporting to the same department as Centurion Crow here. Now for homework. She stopped because a hand had shot into the air. Yes, Miss Brown. Professor, you said when we were finished, we could ask Harry about the Centurion ceremony. Are we finished? Henrika Hobson had thought the material she was covering today might have been a bit advanced for these students. She was very pleased to see she had reached most of them, though Miss Brown's attention was clearly focused elsewhere. The young professor glanced toward Harry. Centurion, I am not asking you to reveal any secrets, but could you tell us anything, even about the position of Centurion? This is merely a request, please don't feel you have to. Professor, I would hate to trivialize one of the most important history lessons we've ever had. It's quite all right, Centurion, I think the class would appreciate ending the lesson with some lighter material. Harry glanced around the classroom, seeing some tearful and frightened faces. The professor invited him to the front of the class and he went. The position of Centurion is an ancient one. They existed long before the Roman armies used the term for a squad commander. It's not really a fair comparison since I don't have a squad of warriors. Professor Flitwick mentioned Order of Merlin and Muggle knighthoods, neither of which is really close. The medieval knights of old are probably the nearest things I can think of to compare a centurion with. We live our lives by a strict code of honor and our blades are always ready to defend the nation. Tracy wanted to confirm what she was hearing. Are we talking about Knights of the Round Table here, Harry, King Arthur, that kind of knight? Well, Merlin was a friend of the Goblin Nation, as is Hermione, so I don't think that should be too surprising. This had his best friend blushing as all eyes were now on her. In magical Britain, any comparison to Merlin was a great honor. Lavender though had another question. Do you wear a suit of armor too? I carry my armor with me at all times. Goblin armor is different from the suits you'll see dotted around the castle. Harry suddenly realized everyone would now want to see it. He shook his head before making his way back to his desk and kicking off his shoes. When the robe came off and landed on the desk, Professor Hobson interrupted. Centurion, just what are you doing? I assumed the class would want to see my armor. I like these shoes and this shirt. I destroyed a few before getting the hang of this. My practice tunic is dragon hide and can cope with the transfiguration. As he unbuttoned his shirt, the witches were now ogling Harry's exposed torso, but not for long. His armbands suddenly started to expand. A metallic lattice began to spread over Harry's body like a second skin. In a matter of seconds, golden chainmail armor covered every square inch of his body, with only his face still exposed. A Hogwarts uniform wasn't designed to let armor grow under it. Shirts tend to rip unless loosened, and shoes burst at the seams. Terry was looking at Harry in awe. Can you still fight in that? It looks dead heavy and cumbersome. He glanced toward Hermione. Should we give them a demonstration? I've never fought in a skirt before. You might have to one day. An enemy won't allow you time to change clothes. Henrika established control of the situation immediately, wanting to know exactly what was being proposed before it went any further. Just what are you suggesting, Centurion? Sorry, Professor, I should have asked your permission first. I'm teaching Hermione how to use a sword. I was suggesting a quick practice to show how my armor performs as I fight, with wooden practice swords of course. Hermione took her goblin shield out her pocket, expanded and slipped it onto her arm, just as the bell rang for the end of class. This drew groans of disappointment from the class, though Harry did supply an answer to Terry's question. The armor isn't really heavy though, it is taking a bit of getting used to. It feels a bit like moving in water at the moment. I use it in our sword practice and am building up to wearing it while running. I hope to have it mastered by the Christmas holidays. Speaking of holidays, Centurion, I'm hearing you might have just changed my summer plans. Sorry, Professor, that was not my intention. I know you'll be busy at the start, but you would be more than welcome to join us near the end of it. Why, thank you, Centurion, that is a very generous offer I might just take you up on. I can just as easily write lying on a beach as stuck in an underground room. As Harry was putting on his robe, he once more received jealous stares, but this time from the boys. He could feel Hermione bristling with indignation on his arm as they left the class, though had no idea what he'd done to deserve it. Neville gave him his first clue. Are you really going to spend part of the summer holidays with Professor Hobson, on a beach? Harry decided to go with his usual approach, the truth. As you've just seen, Professor Hobson is a brilliant teacher. To lure her to Hogwarts, my father had to offer something she couldn't get elsewhere. The professor will be spending her holidays with us in Gringotts. Hermione stopped walking at this, causing Harry to inquire what was wrong. Her reply of nothing, clearly wasn't right. I thought you'd be pleased, this is what you wanted. Harry, if this is more goblin humor, I'm not seeing the funny side here. I thought we agreed it had to be an outsider, someone who could highlight the differences. I also thought she did a brilliant job of that just now. Harry, you're not making any sense. My father got permission from the director to allow Professor Hobson to stay with us, while she studies our culture before writing a book on goblins. It was only this unique opportunity that convinced her to leave her last school and come to Hogwarts. She will spend the next few summers at Gringotts. It was like watching a light switch on for Hermione as she realized just what was happening. A broad smile spread across her face as she once more started walking with Harry. Are we okay? Of course we are, Harry. I'm really sorry about that. I was just being silly, but we talked the problem out and got it sorted. I think it was watching the rest of the boys practically fall over themselves to please Professor Hobson, and then imagining her coming on holiday with us. I said I was being silly, didn't I? Here was the information Harry was missing, and he was soon smiling himself. Hermione Granger being silly, I don't believe it. It's Professor Hobson's Veela heritage that has all the boys tipping over themselves. It doesn't affect goblins. This raised a number of questions for Hermione, but she chose to leave them for later. The young witch felt she'd made enough of a fool of herself already today. The jealousy had engulfed her without warning or any real cause, on either Harry or the professor's part. She was getting used to other students hitting on Harry, but Hermione thought it may have been triggered by the fact she could never hope to compare with the stunningly beautiful professor. The very idea of being on a beach with the blonde witch sent shivers of dread through her young body. A smiling Harry on her arm was quickly banishing those thoughts away, and showing them for what they were, pure silliness. They reached the Great Hall and had hardly sat down when they discovered just how quick the Hogwarts rumor mill actually operated. Roger appeared to have been delegated to ask the question that every male Ravenclaw suddenly wanted to know the answer to. Harry, did you really invite Professor Hobson on holiday with you? Again Harry went with the truth. She's working on a project for my father over the holidays. Since we'll be on a beach, I didn't see anything wrong with inviting her along too. One of the sixth-year boys shouted down the table to Harry. Is your father looking for anyone else to help with the project? I'll work for free. This generated some laughter, though Roger summed it up perfectly. Merlin, Harry, if you thought you were popular before, this is going to eclipse everything. What's getting out of Snape's potions class compared to time on a beach with Hottie Hobson? There was no laughter this time, just a lot of wizards letting their imaginations run away with them, and a lot of witches scowling at them for doing so. That Harry sat unconcerned chatting with Hermione and Padma over lunch settled the last of his best friend's nerves, and left Hermione wanting to hug the life out of him. There were no smiles in the private conversation Harry had later that night. Getting Goblin suspicions confirmed by Hogwarts meant that there was now a fair bit of planning to be done. The twins were rather upset when they discovered their eldest brother was in the castle but would miss the game against Slytherin. Sorry guys, but I am working. If the game's still going when our lesson finishes, I'll certainly be there to cheer Gryffindor on. They both looked to Harry for help, only to be disappointed. Sorry too guys, training comes first. Your brother is a brilliant teacher and we need all the defense training we can get. Bill led the four friends out the hall just as the Quidditch captains were calling on their teams to make their way down to the pitch. The door of the classroom had hardly closed when Harry turned to his three friends. I'm sorry for deceiving you like this, but there is no lesson today. There's a mission I must carry out inside Hogwarts, and, with the entire school out at the Quidditch pitch, this is the perfect time. Hermione was on him in a flash. This obviously has to be secret, but please tell me it's not dangerous. Cursebreaker Weasley and I are going to look for something. The only danger we can see is the possibility there may be some magical traps around the object, something that he deals with on a daily basis. Oh good, that means we can come and help. Bill started laughing. Quote ellipsis. And that is why I don't gamble with goblins. Harry here wanted to bet me that would be your response, but I wasn't buying into that. While this was greeted with a smile from Hermione, Padma wanted to know exactly what they were signing up for, and just what they were looking for. The item is the Diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. This drew gasps from the two female claws. Padma found her voice first. I'll say this for you, Harry, you don't do things by half. Spotting Neville's confused appearance, Padma helped the Gryffindor friend out. It's a tiara, Neville, something like the one Hermione wore to the Centurion ceremony. Our Harry here is conveniently ignoring the fact that it's been lost for centuries, and believe me, people have been looking for it. The Centurion here expects to get his hands on it while a school Quidditch match is taking place. Rather ambitious, don't you think? This drew a smile from Harry. Not if you know what room it's in. Apparently, though, the room is vast and full of junk. We can split into 2 teams of 3, but only Cursebreaker Weasley is to go anywhere near the item. This again drew Hermione's attention. Why, is it dangerous? It could be. The last person to handle it was Tom Marvolo Riddle. We're taking no chances, and it will be sent straight to Gringotts to ensure it's safe. Neville had a couple of questions of his own. Is the castle okay with you removing it? And how do you make 2 teams of 3 when there's only 5 of us? Hogwarts told me where it was, Neville. Harry didn't need to answer the next part as Professor Hobson entered. Hermione couldn't stop running her free hand up and down her new robe. Harry had been so sure they would want to accompany him that, not only did he invite Professor Hobson along, he had protective dueling robes made for the 3 of them. Like Harry's tunic, they were all made from dragon skin. Her other hand was of course on Harry's arm. That they had stopped and Harry was currently talking to a stone wall had Hermione slightly worried. She should have known better. Hogwarts, your champion needs access to the Room of Hidden Things. A large oak door appeared to melt out the stonework and they entered a cavern full of everything. This was where Bill took charge. Padma, Neville, you're both with me. Everyone get your dragon skin gloves on, and be very careful. If you see a tiara, do not approach, and under no condition is anyone to touch it. Henrika, send up red sparks if any of your team spot it and we'll come running. Let's do this search in an orderly fashion so that, should we run out of time today, the search can continue when the next Quidditch match is scheduled. Hermione's eyes were scanning the vast cavern, and not just for a tiara. There is hundreds of years worth of stuff in here, some of this could be valuable. Harry noticed her eyes were fixed on an old bookcase as she said this. Yes, and some of it could be dangerous. This is a mission, Hermione, you need to focus. She nodded in understanding as they began to search the part of the room assigned to their team. Professor Hobson playfully nudged her before asking in a conspiratorial whisper, is he always this intense? Oh no, Professor, this isn't Harry being intense. Wait until we meet a troll, then you'll see intense. Henrika was laughing at the young witch's comment. That was until she discovered Hermione wasn't joking. Perhaps she should have studied her job description more closely before accepting this post. Bill was beginning to think they would have to wait until the Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff match at the end of the month before resuming their search when a spray of red sparks lit the roof of the chamber. The trio quickly headed in the direction the spell had been cast from. The other team was standing well back, heeding Bill's warning, but Padma headed straight for it. Harry and Hermione were physically holding her back while Bill scanned the area. It's emitting a powerful compulsion charm. I want everyone further back. The 3 friends and Professor Hobson soon had Padma out of range, earning an embarrassed apology. I'm sorry, I just don't know what came over me. How come I was the only one affected? Harry answered while watching the Cursebreaker work. Hermione's bracelet would protect her, as would my armor. Neville's got his mind on other things. Neville was standing beside Professor Hobson with a goofy grin on his face, enticing giggles from both girls. Though stopped as Cursebreaker Weasley appeared to have disarmed any traps, he reached out and grasped the legendary item. As he put it into the container he'd brought with him specifically for this purpose, it was then slipped into his bag. As they were leaving the room, they found the Grey Lady and the Bloody Baron waiting on them. Harry immediately bowed to both. My lady, your mother's diadem has been found. It will be taken to Gringotts where the disgusting taint will be removed from it. Once restored to its former glory, it can make a triumphant return home. The ghost smiled for the first time in living memory. Hogwarts is very pleased with the actions and deeds of her champion. A burden I have carried for centuries will soon be lifted. The House of Ravenclaw is in your debt. There can never be a debt between us, my lady. That I am considered worthy for the house your mother founded is all the payment I will ever need. Bill was glancing around anxiously. Harry, I think I should get this out the castle at once, before a meddling old headmaster pokes his crooked nose in. Henrika agreed. Go, Bill, I will escort them back to the Great Hall, and cover should anyone inquire why we're up on the 7th floor. Bill left, but Helena had one more surprise for them. Young champion, the room you have just left has the ability to become whatever you request. It's getting rather cold and dark to be running outside at the hour you both do. The room can provide you with somewhere light, dry and sheltered to run. You mean the room can change to whatever I want? It's the room of requirements, so called because it can change to meet the user's requirements. You just need to tell the room what those requirements are. Harry bowed deeply once more. That truly is a gift beyond measure. I offer you my thanks, Lady Helena. The Quidditch match was over and the Great Hall was full by the time they made it down. From the celebrations coming from the Gryffindor table, it was easy to see how the result of the game had gone. Neville was in no danger of being teased about missing the match. Walking into the hall in his new dueling robes was not the reason though. It was the blonde professor at his side that halted any inclination to tease. Even the Quidditch-obsessed Oliver Wood would admit spending the morning with Professor Hobson was preferable to watching a mere school game. Minerva was sitting in her school apartment, drinking a cup of tea while reflecting on the busiest and most revolutionary term she could remember at Hogwarts. That this revolution could be laid at the feet of a green-eyed Ravenclaw was beyond doubt. Revolutionary was really the only word to describe the effect he'd had on Transfiguration. It was still a week to the Christmas holidays, yet her first years were already well into second-year Transfiguration tasks. That they didn't use any of the prescribed spells, or the specified wand movements left her unsure of what the future held. Here was a class who would ace the practical tests but all fail the written papers, simply because they didn't use any of the prescribed coursework. They spent their time studying and practicing the actual magic involved, rather than writing essays on procedures they didn't use. Since even the slowest in the class were now well ahead of where they would normally be on her usual teaching schedule, what possible grounds did she have for objecting? Not that Minerva had any intention of doing so. The new history course was also having a big impact on the school, as was the professor teaching it. Henrika had earned Minerva's respect by standing toe-to-toe with Dumbledore and not backing down an inch. He'd quickly demanded she stop teaching the students about Voldemort, only to be refused in no uncertain terms. I'm here to teach a curriculum pre-approved by my employer before I started. I will not have my students failing exams because the headmaster decides I should not pass on the relevant information to them. I would also like to point out that neither you nor Hogwarts are my employer. I work for the Lily Potter Foundation. Should you wish to change anything, you would need to contact them. I believe the foundation is currently administered by Gringotts Senior Accounts Manager, Barchoke. Minerva couldn't help but smile at that memory, or the effect that name had on the old wizard. Albus had stormed away after that. Thwarted again was the phrase that came to Minerva's mind. She had also noticed the young witch keeping the company of William Weasley when he was in the castle, much to the chagrin of the students. Phileas was also walking just a little bit taller with the prominence his house was currently enjoying. The head of Ravenclaw was also crossing swords with the young centurion in an effort to teach him how to fight with blade and magic at the same time. He proclaimed Harry's control of both was growing at an exceptional rate. Even Severus was less dour than usual. With Severus, that was probably as good as it was going to get. His acceptance of Harry as Lily's son seemed to have done wonders to his demeanor. The Weasley twins leaving his potions class would also go down as a red-letter day for the head of Slytherin. Even Albus appeared to have temporarily curbed his attempts to manipulate the lad. Perhaps his continual rebuffs were finally beginning to take their toll. Minerva doubted it though, and thought next week's presentation to Centurion Crow at the leaving feast would at least be entertaining. That white owl of Harry's was always delivering mail, so his father would be well aware of what was happening. The Gringotts' presence now in Hogwarts was also considerable. Albus appeared to think he was dealing with a young boy who could be easily swayed. He didn't seem to take into account the support team Harry had around him. Minerva would also consider that support team now contained 3 Hogwarts heads of houses. A knock at her door was just about to prove her wrong. She found a rather nervous Severus standing there. Can I come in a moment, Minerva? I have a rather delicate matter I would like to discuss with you. Minerva invited him in. Rather than try and guess, she waited on Severus bringing the matter up. Just as well, they would have been Dumbledore's age and she still wouldn't have guessed correctly. I have something I would like you to pass on to Centurion Crow from me. Seeing that picture of him taking those flowers to his mother's grave, and then setting up a foundation in her name, set me thinking. As you know, Lily and I were as close as he and Miss Granger, before I ruined it. What I do have a years of memories that I feel her son should have. I arranged a lot of photographs I had of Lily into a small album. I would really appreciate it if you could pass them on to her only child. Minerva had to sit down at that revelation. Of course I will, Severus, that is very thoughtful of you. I perfectly understand why you wouldn't have any pictures of Harry's father. Would you mind terribly if I added some to your gift? Severus took a moment to think about Minerva's offer before nodding. As long as he didn't have to see them, that was something he could live with. He handed over the leather-bound album that had an embossed lily on the front before bidding Minerva a good evening. Rita Skeeter wasn't having a good evening. She wasn't having a good anything anymore. She had stood firm at her questioning by the DMLE, claiming a journalist had to protect their sources and methods. Her lawyer had charged a fortune to point out that Rita hadn't broken any laws, or at least they couldn't prove that she had. Those bastards at the Prophet had dropped her quicker than the presses could print extra copies announcing that very fact to the world. With no one else now willing to employ her, Rita was sitting in the corner of the leaky cauldron. All alone, and nursing a drink at her own pity party. Her party was gate-crashed by a wizened old goblin with an exceedingly gruff voice. You can sit there for the rest of your life feeling sorry for yourself, or you can pick your skinny ass up and get back at the bastards who did this to you. Rita sharply snapped back at the old goblin. I don't recall asking for your opinion. A smile with many missing teeth now greeted Rita. I wasn't offering my opinion, I was offering you a job. This instantly focused her attention, as did the small sack of money Whitefang dropped onto the table. You possess an ability to obtain information no one else can get. The person I'm working for would like to see you use that ability on certain targets. He even has a project that involves writing. You interested? The money rapidly disappeared into Rita's robes and she was soon following Whitefang out of the pub. Thanks for reading. Goblin Ale. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, I don't own these characters and my writing certainly couldn't be considered canon. If my efforts don't fit your idea of what a Harry Potter story should be, I can only offer my apologies and make a suggestion. Writing your own really is the only way to ensure the story progresses exactly the way you want it to. It also gives the rest of us something to read. Chapter 19. Harry entered the Great Hall for the leaving feast, and walked right into a storm of protest. The reason for this storm wasn't hard to ascertain. Harry was in his dress tunic and carried his helmet under his arm. A blue cloak cape, trimmed in bronze, completed his ensemble. Hermione was of course on his free arm. The source of this tropical depression of protest wasn't too difficult to spot either. The robes the headmaster was wearing would probably be deemed as too outlandish by Elton John. Mr. Crow, that is not proper Hogwarts uniform. It's Centurion Crow, and this is proper attire for someone of my station to receive an award. To dress otherwise would be to demean both the award and the occasion. Dumbledore wasn't so easily swayed. He tried a different tactic. This award is being presented to you as a Hogwarts student. Surely school uniform would be more appropriate for this occasion. When I was offered this award, it was presented to me as being a school occasion. On arrival though, I can't help but notice the Minister of Magic is here, along with the press. Your inclusion of these outsiders alters this event to a formal occasion, which requires formal dress. Your alternative is to ask the outsiders to leave and then I would gladly change. You can't have it both ways, Headmaster. Harry gave a rather wry smile at the dilemma he'd just dropped on Dumbledore. In anticipation of you changing the conditions of the award presentation, I dressed appropriately. Albus decided to put his foot down. After all, this boy was a mere student and he was the headmaster. I'm sorry, but I must insist you go and change. We will hold the beginning of the feast until you return. From previous experience, he should have realized how well this tactic worked on Harry. Albus discovered his mistake pretty quickly. I am also sorry because, if my dress uniform is unacceptable, I will of course leave, though I won't be returning tonight. For a centurion to receive an award in the presence of a national leader, and not be in the proper uniform could be construed as an insult. Therefore, it is with regret I must decline your award. The first flash of the photographer's camera captured forever Dumbledore's expression as he was once more publicly told, no, in his own school. He also had no idea things were about to become much worse as his planned positive publicity perished right in front of his twinkling eyes. Harry had plans for a ceremony of his own design. Hogwarts, your champion begs an audience. The four house ghosts made their way to the front of the hall as Harry donned his helmet. He then reached into his bag that Hermione was carrying. Master Flitwick, could I have a moment of your time please? The diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw was sitting on a blue and bronze velvet cushion that Harry held in his outstretched arms. The tiara captured light from the hall and reflected it back in a kaleidoscope of colors as Rowena's fabled diadem majestically sparkled on its journey to the front of the now hushed hall. He knelt before the ghosts and offered the diadem up like a royal crown. What was lost has been found, what was tainted has been cleansed. Your champion returns this precious artifact to its rightful home. The great bell of Hogwarts rang out once more. This though was no dong of doom, here was the sweet chimes of celebration that spread throughout the entire castle. The Grey Lady made no attempt to hide her delight. Hogwarts is jubilant at your achievements, young champion, as am I, Professor Flitwick. Can I ask you to accept my mother's diadem on behalf of her house? We will make arrangements for it to be publicly displayed so everyone can have a chance to see it, before it returns to its rightful place in Ravenclaw Tower. Albus stood there, still as any statue, as the press practically fell over themselves in their desire to ensure they missed no detail of this unbelievably historic event. That this story was not the one they originally thought they would be covering mattered not a jot to them. It was glaringly obvious though that this wasn't a view shared by the minister. Cornelia's complexion almost matched his famous bowler hat as he sat there experiencing the worst thing in the world for a politician, being totally overlooked and ignored. What was really concerning Albus was the bold and reckless move of broadcasting this event to the country. He knew exactly what Harry meant by tainted. Here was the Horcrux that must have been hidden inside the castle, hidden right under his nose for all those years. He considered this a reckless move, very publicly providing the Dark Lord with proof at least one of his Horcruxes had been discovered and destroyed. That this had all happened in his school, again without his knowledge, worried Albus a lot more than the bad press they would get for Harry refusing his Hogwarts award. Dumbledore was actually hoping that, in the furore over the diadem's return, this little fact may be overlooked. Albus almost overlooked Harry's next move. Even as he watched it though, the headmaster wasn't sure if he actually believed what he was seeing. Harry approached the staff table and bowed deeply. Potion Master Snape, it is our custom that a precious gift should be reciprocated in kind. I could never dream of matching the gift you gave me and can only hope you'll consider this worthy. A slim but obviously ancient book passed between the two. The normally sneering persona of Severus Snape vanished like a wisp of smoke. This version wore a look of wondrous astonishment, currently matching the one displayed by Harry's still speechless head of house. Severus was also struggling for words. Where? How? This was thought lost forever. How in Merlin's name did you find a copy of this? A smiling Harry was reminding himself to thank Master Pitsley the next time they met. Like the diadem, sir, it's all a matter of knowing where to look. This had given Severus the time needed to regain his composure. He respectfully stood and performed the centurion salute before replying. Centurion, to the both of us, the subject in question is precious and irreplaceable, but this is still a priceless gift. I thank you and think she would be very proud of the young man her son is becoming. Harry took no insult at being described as a young man, instead accepting the compliment in the spirit it was offered. He sincerely returned the salute. That is more than enough for me, sir. I wish you a Merry Christmas. He strode past Dumbledore once more, not even acknowledging the headmaster before offering his arm to Hermione and leaving the feast supposedly being held in his honor. Padma and Neville were hot on their heels, with the vast majority of their classmates deciding to show their support and follow on behind. Harry was heading for the room they now used when training in the morning. Harry asking a corridor wall for a room in which to hold their Christmas feast saw some funny looks heading in his direction. These were followed by gasps of astonishment as a door simply appeared. This was nothing though to their reaction upon entering the room. It sparkled and shone like some fairy tale ice palace, thankfully without the expected severe drop in temperature. The massive table constructed of this, warm, ice was rapidly filling with food from the Hogwarts kitchens. The barrel of ale immediately caught Hermione's attention. Is that what I think it is? My father sent it with Cursebreaker Weasley. He figured that since you loved it so much, our friends probably would too. It's been hidden in the kitchen since last weekend. You knew what the headmaster was going to attempt today. Hermione offered this more as a statement than a question. I have my sources, Hermione, and those sources warned me what he was up to. He didn't want it known that the Sorting Hat was passing what went on in Dumbledore's office to Lady Helena, keeping Harry one step ahead of the headmaster's plans. Padma was standing there with her mouth open. This looks nothing like the room we were in the last time. You should see it for our training in the morning. It's brilliant. Hermione, I don't care if the room was dripping with diamonds and gold. Nothing will get me up at that time to do exercises. Harry was busy inviting everyone else into the room. Grab a seat and help yourself to some food. Neville, Terry, Michael and Anthony, can you guys give me a hand dishing out some goblin ale for everyone? Terry just about summed the rest of the first year's thoughts up. Merlin, Harry, you certainly know how to throw a party. I was sure you would have something up your sleeve, but all this and ale too. Really impressed, mate. Hermione didn't want Harry getting a bad reputation. She decided to set everyone straight before rumors started to spread. Goblin ale is non-alcoholic. It's also the best thing I've ever tasted. Soon everyone was sitting and the goblin ale was passed around. They were all waiting to start and looking at Harry for permission. Hey, I'm not Dumbledore. No speeches here, just tuck in. So they did. McGonagall couldn't find the rest of the first years anywhere. All the ghosts would say was that they were still inside Hogwarts, perfectly safe and eating dinner. She walked with her Gryffindors from the Great Hall back to their tower. Curfew was approaching and she wanted to see her missing first years in the dorm before retiring for the night. She heard her 5 lost cubs long before laying eyes on them. They were laughing, joking and apparently saying goodnight to some people. They entered through the portrait hole and weren't perturbed in the slightest by her presence. In fact, the 2 girls couldn't wait to tell her what they'd been up to. Oh, Professor, you should have seen it. Harry spoke to a wall and then this wonderful room just appeared. It was gorgeous. We had a fantastic party. Harry even brought goblin ale into the castle. It's a bit like butterbeer, only much better. Neville was quick to defend his friend. There's also no alcohol in it, Professor. Did you have a good evening? Only years of practice stopped Minerva from smiling. She did have a stern reputation to maintain after all. Apparently, not as good as yours. Now I want to see all of you heading for bed. The express leaves directly after breakfast. With a chorus of, yes, Professor, a group of happy children headed up the stairs. Minerva was sure Albus would see this as evidence that Harry was gathering followers around him, just like a certain Tom Riddle had done all those years ago. Everyone else could see the situation for what it really was, an enigmatic young man making friends with his peers, but the headmaster could not accept the obvious explanation. Albus was worse than any pit bull sinking its teeth into something. When he got an idea in his head, there was just no letting go. The only first years not at the alternative feast were Malfoy and his diminishing band of cronies, and of course Ronald Weasley. This meant there was a mixture of all houses at the party, and every blood persuasion she could think of. Minerva couldn't get over that every single one of them had all voluntarily walked out of the Great Hall, trusting that Harry would have made alternative arrangements. Add to that the lad was spending Christmas in his best friend's Muggle home and Harry seemed to be going for inclusion, rather than exclusivity based on any form of blood status. They were all heading for their respective dorms when Harry leant into Hermione and spoke softly enough so that only she could hear. I need to speak to Susan Bones, and pass on a gift from my father. Can you stick close and not ask any questions? Hermione agreed at once but had a suggestion. Would you prefer me to ask her for a quick word? Harry's smile was all the answer she needed. Susan wasn't sure how she ended up staring into those intense green eyes from close range, but Harry mentioning her Aunt Amelia soon had her focusing on the matter at hand. Could you pass a message on to your aunt? This is very important and can't go anywhere near official channels. My father would like to speak with her at her earliest convenience. Harry handed over a small inlaid lacquered box. If your aunt enters Gringotts wearing this brooch, she will immediately be taken to see my father. This will save her having to draw attention to herself by asking for him by name. Please accept this brooch as a gift to the House of Bones, without obligation and irrespective of whatever your aunt decides to do. Susan recognized the language being spoken here, and also replied formally. On behalf of the House of Bones, I'm honored to accept this gift in the spirit it was offered. It was only then Susan's control slipped. Can I open it and take a look, Harry? Of course you can. Hermione thought that's how she must have appeared when she first opened the box containing her bracelet. Susan's eyes nearly popped out her head before she quickly shut the box again. Oh Harry, it's simply beautiful. I'll speak with Aunt Amelia the instant I get her alone. I assume this is something to do with her being head of the Auras. I'm pretty sure that's the case. All I know is my father wants to urgently speak with her. When he uses words like urgent, it must be important. We better get a move on too, otherwise we'll be out after curfew. Thanks again, Susan. They were walking quickly to Ravenclaw Tower. Hermione thought it would be all right to ask a question now, since it was just the two of them. Do you really not know what's going on? No, which has me slightly worried. You must have noticed, letters from my father are not written in English. Even with that security though, he wouldn't take the chance of writing it down. That brooch will tell Madam Bones this is serious. A gift like that to House Bones is not to be sniffed at. Her wearing it into Gringotts will alert every goblin Madam Bones is under our family's protection, and see her service improve 100%. My father will probably fill us both in later. The journey home on the express couldn't have been more different from the one that delivered them to Hogwarts. Gone were the 2 lonely children reaching out to one another. In their place sat a young witch and goblin who were sharing the compartment with their friends. This time, there was no searching up and down the train looking for the boy who lived. Everyone on the train knew who Harry Crow was, and Hermione Granger too. Now, when someone popped their head into the compartment, it was to wish them a good holiday and Merry Christmas. When it was once more just the 4 of them, Harry broached a subject he'd been struggling with. Padma, I know that, like me, you don't celebrate Christmas. I wanted to experience the full thing though, so I asked Cursebreaker Weasley to explain it to me. I love the idea of getting small gifts for your friends. This met a wave of protests that Harry only stopped by holding his hands up for silence. Hey, this matched the only written reference we could find to these customs. We could understand the gold bit, it was the frankincense and myrrh that had us really confused. Harry was once more interrupted, but this time by Hermione almost choking with laughter. Every time she looked at Harry it would start again, only him offering his handkerchief allowed the witch to get control. Thinking she must look a sight was enough to do it. Anyway, before being so rudely interrupted, Hermione showed her maturity by sticking her tongue out at him. I was about to ask for your help with a problem. It wasn't the gifts as such that caused the problem, rather who to get them for. You 3 were of course top of my list, then I hit problems. I got our Ravenclaw year mate sweets, but it was Parvati that gave me the biggest headache. He now had 2 young witches staring intently at him, which left Harry wondering if he'd gotten it wrong again. She's not just Padma's sister but her twin. I feel quite bad that we seem to have monopolized all Padma's time, and now she's spending the holiday with us too. I've gotten Parvati a gift, yet I'm trying to avoid there being any misunderstandings why I did it. I'm still not 100% sure what I got wrong that morning after the troll, but Parvati's tears were real enough. I need help in avoiding a problem like that again. Padma glanced toward Hermione and her smile gave the unnecessary permission. She leaned over, hugging and then kissing Harry on the cheek. Harry, that is so thoughtful, thank you. If you want, I could give it to her and avoid any problems. It was a relieved Harry who reached into his bag and handed a wrapped present to Padma. She left to find her twin sister. Harry pulled another package out his bag and handed it to Neville. We won't see you until after Christmas, so I think it's best to give you this now. Neville opened the package to find a small goblin-made sheath knife. It had an ivory handle and a 3-inch razor-sharp blade, all enclosed in a reddish dragon hide sheath. It can be used to take plant cuttings or preparing potions ingredients. It's brilliant, Harry, thanks a lot. Hermione was smiling and shaking her head at the same time. Harry, you continually surprise me. He smiled back at her. That's a good thing, right? Ginny was waiting with Bill on the platform, her new dress not quite long enough to hide the fact her knees were shaking with nerves. As the bright red engine pulled the carriages into the station, it took almost the same amount of Herculean effort for Ginny to remain standing by her brother's side. The desire to hide behind Bill was practically overwhelming the young witch. The students soon began pouring out from the carriages as hundreds of witches and wizards in high spirits erupted onto the platform. Ginny was focusing all her attention on spotting one particular student. Being the youngest of 7 children meant Ginny already had a well-honed ability for watching everything that was going on around her. Being the smallest, and female, saw her continually ignored and overlooked, thus providing even more opportunities for her to develop this skill. Living in the same house as Fred and George, this could also be considered a necessary survival technique. She soon spotted the smartly dressed boy with long black hair, the witch on his arm helping Ginny confirm his identity. She also noticed the Indian witch and another wizard who were remaining close. A stunningly beautiful Chinese witch practically ambushed the group as she attempted to claim Harry's attention. Even from this distance, Ginny could see her ploy was doomed to failure. Harry's body language had instantly shifted from relaxed to stiff formality, and both witches in his company clearly resented this intrusion. The little scene was soon shattered by the speedy arrival of another witch. This one had an entirely different interpretation of how an ambush should be carried out. She raced up to a clearly unsuspecting Harry and threw her arms around his neck. A quick greeting was followed by a kiss on the cheek. She rapidly disentangled herself before cheerfully greeting the rest of his friends and then dragging the Indian girl, who could only be her twin sister, away. Whatever the Chinese girl had planned, this clearly unscheduled intrusion destroyed her play as effectively as a brace of well-hit bludgers. She quickly mumbled something before departing, a distinctly unhappy witch. Saying a much more heartfelt goodbye to their other friend saw the pair start to make their way toward them. Even now though, the number of people who warmly greeted the pair as they passed was impressive. A redhead witch, who was clearly more developed than little Ginny Weasley, waving and smiling as they passed each other also had the effect of allowing Ginny to finally say goodbye to her fantasy. Ginny wasn't sure if she even had the right to claim it as her fantasy anymore. It was painfully obvious most of the witches who got off the train harbored strikingly similar fantasies of their own toward Harry. She wondered how the girl on his arm coped with all the clearly unwanted attention. Ginny knew her Weasley temper would see her wanting to curse anyone who so blatantly flirted with someone she considered as hers. It was too late to hide now, they were here. A greeting to her brother was followed by the most gorgeous pair of eyes focusing on her, and Ginny finally understood Harry's popularity. When this boy focused his attention on her like that, Ginny's insides totally melted. She forgot all about the fame, wealth and deeds. Here was someone you just had to get to know. Hello Cursebreaker Weasley, this must be the sister you were telling me about. Hi Harry, Hermione, yes this is Ginny, and she'll be going to Hogwarts in September. Ginny was suddenly faced with a hand held out in front of her, not necessarily the one she wanted though. Ginny was learning firsthand, no pun intended, how Hermione coped with all the witches chasing Harry, and also that here was a witch who she didn't want to cross. Hi Ginny, I'm Hermione. Bet you're desperate to get to Hogwarts. We'll look forward to seeing you there. Don't worry too much if you're not in Ravenclaw, we have friends in all 4 houses. Even in the short time she'd been watching them, Ginny had already noticed that the only way to get near the real Harry was through this witch. Even with the Indian twins, you could easily see which one Hermione approved of. She quickly held her hand out and shook Hermione's. I would like that, a lot. My brothers tend to forget I'm there sometimes. Her hand was soon in Harry's and Ginny's battle now was not to hyperventilate. Well you're welcome to join us anytime, we've always room for more friends. Ginny's blush might have been bright enough to stop every train in King's Cross but her wide smile warmed Bill's heart. He'd known all along this was a gamble but this time he was betting on a goblin. Harry had said exactly the right thing. Ron's arrival threatened to ruin the moment but Bill managed to convey with a glare just how much trouble Ronnie would be in if he opened his big mouth, and the moment passed. Padma's arrival saw her introduced to Ginny too, before she apologized to her friends. Sorry Harry, I thought I had it covered. Parvati must have opened her present the moment I left and decided she really had to thank you personally. It is a beautiful scarf and she'll probably never take it off. She does understand why you gave her it though. My parents were pleased too, and rather keen to meet you. Could we arrange that for some time later? No problem Padma, I'm glad she liked my gift. Bill took the opportunity this presented to offer some thanks of his own. Speaking of gifts, please thank your father for me Harry. He provided a portkey so our brother Charlie could travel from Romania to spend Christmas with us. You can't imagine how happy my mother is that the entire family will be together over the holidays. It certainly made her Christmas. The arrival of the twins instantly introduced some of the chaos they were rapidly gaining a reputation for. This time though, all present thought the chaos was unintentional. Hey everyone, hi little snitch, what brings you here? That dress tells me you're not here to greet your handsome twin brothers. Ouch. Ginny's shoe had connected with Fred's shin. Horrible twin brothers more like. Hermione's laughter stopped the assault becoming more serious. Oh Ginny, you're going to fit right in. We'll look forward to seeing you at Hogwarts. Let's go guys, Mum and Dad will be waiting and the car's probably on the meter. As the trio was leaving, the Weasleys all heard Padma address Harry. Please tell me you had no idea what that last bit meant either. His shake of the head surprisingly appeared to reassure the young witch. A pair of eyes with a lot more experienced at observing people than Ginny's had also carefully watched events on the platform unfold, but with far more sinister motives and intentions. Lucius was looking for potential victims to pass the diary on to, and had quickly discovered he was spoilt for choice. His plan called for the chosen victim to be one of two things, either a person close to the boy or someone holding a grudge. He preferred the first option, imagining Crow's distress as someone close to him became enveloped in darkness, but wasn't prepared to cross anything out at the moment. The Chinese girl fawning over the boy and being spurned put her on the list of possibles, as did the youngest Weasley practically passing out when meeting the boy. Lucius well remembered her brother threatening to blow his head off, and her father was also near the top of his shit list. The young bones bitch was also clearly on friendly terms, and simultaneously getting back at her aunt would be a really sweet revenge. That particular choice of victim would certainly have to be classed as a high-risk strategy though, one that could easily come back to bite him on the arse. Amelia Bones was no fool, something that would have to be considered before making his final decision. His three closest friends would clearly be Lucia's best bet, though each came with their own particular problems. The mudblood would surely cause Crow the most distress, but Lucius was loath to admit he wouldn't have a clue how to even find her, never mind slip the diary into her possession. She wasn't being discarded just yet, but that particular outcome would require a great deal more luck rather than his careful planning. Longbottom would practically fit into the same category. Augusta was renowned for never letting her grandson out of her sight. The Indian witch was one he would need to garner more information on, and his source just walked up to him. Come Draco, time to go home. The young Indian witch in question was currently congratulating her friend on how she'd handled the Weasley situation. Now that it was just them, Hermione was free to rant. It's bad enough having older witches hanging over Harry, now I'm going to have to put up with younger ones making doe eyes at him too. It could be worse, Hermione, at least it's only witches hanging over me. Harry's face as he made the remark had both his friends laughing. It was a happy trio who made their way through the portal to what was another world for two of them. Bill wanted to know how his sister was feeling. I'm fine, Bill, though no thanks to these jokers. I can't wait to get my wand and then a few people are going to see some payback. This started Bill laughing, or rather the fear in his twin brother's eyes did. I know some good curses, Ginny, and promise to teach you before you head to Hogwarts. At least it seems as if you've made some friends before you get there. Ginny's blush was back in full force. I thought he looked good in that picture on the front page of today's Prophet. He's far more handsome in real life. Oh, I think I'm going to be sick. Bill was in like a shot. He'd worked too hard to get Ginny to this stage to let anyone's jealousy ruin it now. That's probably because you've been eating like a pig again, Ronnie. Harry's on the front page of the Prophet for returning a priceless Founder's artifact to Hogwarts, and you're still on probation for another 6 months. If your sister wants to make friends with them, that is her business. Any Weasley who has a problem with that will have to take it up with me. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on her at Hogwarts. Fred was trying to atone for his earlier screw-up with his sister. Hey, Harry's a friend of ours, why would we have a problem with that? Yeah, we heard he held a great party last night for all the first years, except Ron here. Why would we have any problems with the boy who got us out of Snape's class? Sorry about earlier, Ginny. Her smile let them know they were off the hook. When Percy had finally said goodbye to his girlfriend, the Weasleys portkeyed to the burrow. Padma was lying in bed trying to get her head around the things she'd seen, things the Grangers took for granted. Harry had never tasted Indian food, so they all decided that's what they would have tonight. Out came a menu and choices were made. It was the next bit that blew her mind. Simply by picking up something called a telephone, their order was soon delivered to the house. Here were dishes her mother would work all day to prepare, sealed in containers and delivered right to your table. As if that wasn't enough of a jolt, discovering that the same service was available for most of the world's cuisines by simply punching different numbers into the telephone almost put her into shock. A light knock at the door saw Hermione enter. Everything okay, Padma? Hermione was sitting on the bed beside her before Padma had sorted out her reply. I'm beginning to appreciate just how big a shock it must have been for you, and even Harry, entering the magical world. Thank goodness staying in Crawley comes without the drama that you two provide in Hogwarts. I think we could all do with a break from that. Your mum and dad are great too. Harry fairly gets on well with them. Her friend's slight blush was still there, even behind the wide smile. Mum simply adores Harry. The fact that he has me exercising and learning defense put him straight into Dad's good books too. I'm glad you like it here. Apart from that surprise weekend with Harry, this is the first time I've actually had friends staying. Well snap, this is also the first time I've ever stayed with friends. Both girls hugged at that before Hermione headed out the room. Padma couldn't resist a parting shot before her friend left. Are you now going to tuck Harry in? Hermione though was getting used to her friend's teasing, and decided to tease right back at her. I don't think that's a good idea. Last time I did that, we ended up spending the night together. Good night, Padma. She went to bed with a satisfied grin on her face. Hermione though Padma's look of utter shock was worth the grilling that would surely follow tomorrow. Padma was desperate to ask Hermione for details, but the girl was long gone before she got her brain back in gear. Apart from experiencing a whole new world, she was finding her friend was this whole different girl away from Hogwarts. Padma wanted this holiday to be an experience, and so far she was anything but disappointed. Amelia Bones was also having a new experience. Walking into Gringotts wearing her new brooch saw her approached at once and led straight to Harry's father's office. No queuing, no surly teller, just courteously accompanied where she needed to go. After the introductions, Barchoke immediately got down to business. Let me start by apologizing for involving our children in this. Unfortunately, I didn't really have any other options. Circumstances have provided me with proof of major corruption at the very highest levels of the Ministry of Magic. I really had nowhere else to turn. Amelia was instantly on guard, wondering just what game was being played here. Can I see this proof, and ask how you came to have it? We were carrying out an investigation about an entirely different matter, and this just fell into our laps. Barchoke had removed a folder from his desk and now slid it across to a wary head of the DMLE. She cautiously opened the folder and felt as if she had been physically struck by the photographs displayed there. Barty Crouch was sitting having dinner with his son, a son who supposedly died over a decade ago. Barty Jr. had clearly aged from the young man she remembered, but his identity was undeniable. The picture of him laying on a bed before being covered by an invisibility cloak was particularly telling, and somewhat explained how he could be kept hidden for so long. I must ask how you obtained these pictures, and why. Barchoke had expected nothing less. We employed Miss Skeeter to investigate the trial of Sirius Black. Mr. Crouch was instrumental in this process. In her own inimitable style, she practically fell over this deceit. He deliberately didn't mention Sirius' innocence, or even lack of a trial. If Amelia Bones was half the witch he thought she was, discovering Sirius never received the due process of law should see her heading back to Gringotts, if only to find out just what the hell they were up to. There was also a danger of pushing too hard too soon. One terrifying revelation at a time would do for now. We were as shocked as you clearly are by this development, but left unsure who to approach. Whether Mr. Crouch was working alone in getting his son out of Azkaban was our main concern. That this feat has never been achieved before suggested there were others involved, and left us second guessing what our next move should be. Had we contacted the wrong person, his son could simply disappear and relations between our nations could disintegrate to an all-time low. Amelia understood that would be her main problem, how to catch Barty in the act without tipping her hand. One sniff of an investigation and Barty Jr. would never be found. How the hell was she then supposed to organize a search for a dead man? These pictures alone wouldn't be enough to bring Crouch down. All he would have to do was claim they were faked and ask for further proof. Without that further proof, they were screwed. This led Amelia to ask the obvious question. What is your interest in Sirius Black? This Barchoke was able to answer with total honesty. We recently discovered he is Harry's godfather. Amelia's, oh shit, was in recognition that her task just got even more complicated. Apart from the goblin involvement, throwing in the names of Sirius Black, James and Lily Potter and of course the boy who lived just dictated she was going to have a very busy Christmas. Thanks for reading. A pair of bones trumps a pair of Bartys. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, I neither own Harry Potter nor profit in any way from my writing here. That people take time out of the day, or night, to read my efforts is all the payment I could hope for. Chapter 20. Christmas Eve with the Grangers had been planned to the last detail. After breakfast, they were all heading into London to spend the day sightseeing, with definitely some shopping along the way. Harry slipping Padma some spending cash would have gone unnoticed if the girl hadn't threw her arms around him in thanks. Dan and Emma were intending to pick up the tab for everything today though, having saved a small fortune by switching their banking to Gringotts. They began at the Marble Arch end of Oxford Street, admiring the Christmas lights and the stores. By the time they were having their lunch in a fast food outlet at Oxford Circus, Padma and Harry had been supplied with multiple items of Muggle clothing from the many stores they had stopped in. Padma was a bit like a kid in a sweet shop. Her eyes never stopped moving as she attempted to take everything in, while Emma was still struggling with the concept that all their shopping was currently stored in the book bag Harry wore. Hermione and Harry were delighted to be eating burgers. It meant that they could still hold hands while having their lunch. The crowds on Oxford Street made the usual activity of walking arm in arm really difficult. Hermione solved the problem by grabbing his hand. Both had enjoyed the contact, and the only time they had been separated since was when one of them went into a changing room to try on clothes. The sightseeing shopping continued down Regent Street to Piccadilly Circus. From there it was a short hop to Trafalgar Square and the biggest Christmas tree in London. The antique nativity scene in the glassed-in display also took some explaining before they headed off down the Strand. Somerset House is a magnificent building, seeing many uses in its 450-year history. It could be argued that one of the worst uses was as an inland revenue office. Nobody likes to pay taxes. There could be no argument though that the group was seeing it at one of its best today. An ice rink filed the lower courtyard, with sparkling lights, hanging decorations and a beautiful Christmas tree all adding to the strikingly festive sight. There were small decorated huts selling wares and a large cafe spread along one entire side of the rink. It was to here Dan and Emma gravitated while Hermione dragged her two now reluctant friends toward the skate-hire kiosk. Both parents sipped their hot chocolate while watching the trio take to the ice. Hermione had skated since she was about 7 so had no trouble on the slippery surface. Harry's grace and athleticism seemed to help as he soon mastered the basics of staying upright. Poor Padma though appeared to spend more time on her bum than actually skating. Now that Harry was mobile, he and Hermione each took one of Padma's arms and the trio were soon making their wobbly way around the rink. The three friends who later ran up to Dan and Emma all wore that look only achievable by kids having fun in the cold: red cheeks, sparkling eyes and wide smiles. After more hot chocolate all round, they then made their way over to Covent Garden where Dan had already reservations booked at a lovely Italian restaurant. It was a happy and certainly full bunch who caught the train back to Crawley. It was on the train home Hermione asked a question that had just occurred to her. Mum, Dad, are we going to church tonight? Emma and Dan had talked this over, and decided to give it a miss. No honey, with Harry and Padma not celebrating Christmas, we were. Dan never got to say any more as Harry interrupted. Excuse me, Dan, please don't change your normal celebrations because of us. We would both be delighted to come along, that's if we're allowed. Hermione squeezed his hand, since it was still held in hers. Everyone's allowed in church, Harry. We usually go to the midnight service on Christmas Eve. Do you really want to come? It was actually Padma who answered. I certainly want to go. I hope to experience as much of this way of life as possible. Plans were quickly made to go home and just chill for a few hours before getting ready for church. Hermione was soon advising both her friends what clothes they had bought today would be suitable for the occasion. An occasion they were now all looking forward to. Amelia wasn't looking forward to telling Susan she was going to be working over Christmas. She had really missed her niece since the young witch left for Hogwarts, and was not happy about missing Christmas with her only family. That had also been her dilemma when arranging her response to those photographs. Amelia needed people she could trust at her side but also required the entire situation to be kept ultra quiet. If someone had a spouse and kids, keeping it quiet that they had a mission on Christmas Day would be so much harder to do. Gossip like that would be all over the ministry in no time. This led her to take the potentially dangerous decision of keeping her team small. She was banking heavily on the element of surprise. Amelia had no intention of telling her team of just 4 Aurors what they were going to be doing, not until they were ready to leave on the actual mission. The head of the DMLE understood she was putting her career on the line here. Barty would demand, and certainly get, her head on a silver salver if she didn't pull this off properly. They needed to catch Barty Jr. or she was ruined. That the same convicted, and supposedly deceased, Death Eater assisted in placing 2 Aurors in the permanent spell damage ward of St. Mungo's was all the motivation Amelia needed to undertake this high-risk plan. Frank and Alice Longbottom never got the chance to sit and have dinner with their boy. She fully intended that the Crouch father and son would both pay for their crimes. She had also taken Barchoke's answer to heart and did some quiet digging herself into the trial of Sirius Black. Amelia was astonished to find absolutely nothing. She didn't want to alert anyone until they had both young and old Barty wrapped up, but Amelia certainly intended looking into the matter further once that was achieved. A quiet word with Minerva regarding Barchoke's character had produced a surprisingly positive result. The Hogwarts deputy headmistress answer of, a devoted father who would do anything to help and protect his son, was rather unexpected. She needed to know just how Sirius Black fitted into this picture, and exactly what the goblins were actually after. They were making their way home from church, an occasion Harry and Padma had thoroughly enjoyed. I really liked the nativity play, it helped explain things I was struggling with. The children seemed to have such fun doing it too. The mischief was twinkling in Dan's eyes as he couldn't resist a gentle jibe. Didn't Hermione tell you, Harry? She made her acting debut in the church nativity play a few years ago. Dad, I was 6. This memory had Emma smiling. Yes, but even then Hermione knew what she wanted. She was cast as one of the 3 wise men, but insisted it should be a wise woman. Any teasing to be done and Padma wanted to be part of it. She did decide to cut Hermione a break though. It could have been worse. Hermione. That wee boy who was supposed to be a sheep spent the entire time waving to his mum and dad. I had to bite my lip to save from laughing. Harry also came to his best friend's rescue. Well, I would love to have seen Hermione in the play, and think she was right about the wise woman bit too. Emma thought this was really cute, but Dan liked his mischief. Oh, don't worry, Harry, we have plenty of pictures of Hermione in the play, along with hundreds of others you should see. Dad was soon followed by the sound of laughter. This looked like being a very merry Christmas in the Granger household. Harry was wakened by a hyper-excited Hermione bouncing on his bed. I know we weren't going to exercise today, but I woke at our usual time and am far too excited to go back to sleep. Merry Christmas, Harry. She bent and kissed his cheek at that, causing both of them to blush. Unsure of what to say, Harry fell back on routine. You want to practice swords in the back garden? By way of an answer, Hermione gave him a hug before shooting out the room to change into appropriate clothing. Dan was dragged from his slumber by the unusual sound of thwack, thwack noises emanating from the back garden. He hauled himself from his nice warm bed to look out the window. He was still standing there 10 minutes later when his wife's arms snaked around his waist from behind. Her Merry Christmas went unanswered. He couldn't take his eyes off the daughter. I can't believe that's the same girl we sent off to school in September. She seems to have grown so much. Probably because she has, mainly in confidence. I think she's going to grow into an outstanding young woman, with friends who will be there for her throughout the journey. They watched fascinated as the pair swapped between defense and offense, probing for weaknesses in their opponents. Hermione had always been a willing pupil at anything she put her mind to. Watching the concentration on her face as she parried and shielded Harry's attacks was something to behold. It was compulsive viewing and kept both Grangers at the window until they were finished exercising. Now it was time to get breakfast ready before they settled down for presents. Susan was also up early. She wanted to have some time with her aunt before they both had to leave. She was heading over to spend Christmas Day with her best friend. Hannah's parents knew from long experience not to ask too many questions as to why her Aunt Amelia had to go into the ministry today. Harry had told Susan his father wouldn't have used the word urgent if it hadn't been very important. A sense of urgency would be the best way to describe Auntie since her return from Gringotts. The young Hufflepuff had watched with the rest of the class that day Harry had taken down Lucius Malfoy. She had no doubt both Harry and her aunt were on the same side. Susan knew she was being selfish, but she just wished the good guys could at least get Christmas Day off. Surely that wasn't too much to ask. The friends were taking turns passing out the gifts they'd gotten for each other. Padma started the proceedings and Hermione now found herself the proud owner of an ultra-brightly colored Indian silk wrap skirt. Harry received a toy armored knight figure, resplendent on a toy horse. This saw him laugh with pleasure before telling Padma he loved it. Hermione was incredibly nervous over her gift to Harry. What do you get for your best friend who's the goblin who has everything was such a strange request. She was practically unique in facing a problem like this. Harry had unwrapped her present and was now staring at it with an expression she didn't recognize. Hermione couldn't take the suspense anymore and started to babble. I didn't know what to get you. The clothes seemed too impersonal. Then Professor Snape went and stole my thunder. Do you hate it, Harry? Hermione had gotten him a lovely shirt and a nice pair of black jeans. It was the book on top though that held all his attention. She'd christened it, the Book of Hermione, because that's basically what it was. Here was his best friend in all her glory, from an infant right up until they had their picture taken on the steps of Gringotts. Each picture had at least a paragraph explaining the where, when and what was going on in the picture, all in Hermione's beautiful handwriting. The amount of thought and effort she had clearly lavished on this gift just blew Harry away. He raised his eyes from his gift to see Hermione almost hyperventilating with anxiety. His wide smile soon put a stop to her fretting. It's fantastic, Hermione, I love it. Padma also really liked her jeans and t-shirt from Hermione before they moved on to Harry's presents. A silver Ravenclaw eagle charm on a chain of the same material was much admired and appreciated by Padma. Emma was ohing and ahhing over the pyramid Harry had given her and Dan, without having the slightest clue what it was. Oh mum, that's wonderful. Did you include that memory crystal Professor Hobson showed us, Harry? That, and a few others. I thought your mum and dad might like to see inside Hogwarts. This earned him a hug from Emma as he nervously waited on Hermione opening her gift. The witch in question was also nervous. The parcel was long and quite heavy. Her hands were shaking as she stripped back the wrapping to reveal a sword. It was a bejeweled work of art that was certainly shorter than Harry's, and Hermione didn't know quite what to say. Padma gave her time to recover. I'll say this for you, Harry, you have definitely got your own sense of style. Most boys giving jewels would have them mounted in a necklace or at least earrings, not embedded into the hilt of a sword. Practical and beautiful at the same time, it fits our Hermione perfectly. She's a friend of our nation and is entitled to wear her own blade. The last non-goblin to own a blade like that was Godric Gryffindor. Hermione had unsheathed her sword and was twirling the weapon around, looking to see if her name was on the blade. It was an embarrassed Harry who answered her unasked question. They wouldn't put an unmarried female's name on the blade, rather wait until her name changed after her wedding. Harry, it's beautiful and feels amazingly balanced in my hand. Spotting the concerned looks her parents were wearing, Hermione tried to put their minds at rest. Dad, goblin females learn to use weapons purely so they can defend themselves. They aren't allowed to become warriors or fight in a war. I am so glad to hear that, Hermione. It's a beautiful gift, but also deadly. I hope you'll be careful with it. As usual, it was Padma who tried to lighten the mood. I'm now going to have to walk around Hogwarts with two of them carrying swords. I suppose that beats being woken up by listening to them practice first thing in the morning. Can neither of you two give normal a try? Both her friends smiled at her gentle teasing, knowing that she was deliberately making light of a situation that could have become awkward. Hermione thanked Harry for her gift, before showing her parents how to operate the goblin viewer. They were bowled over by the scene from the steps of Gringotts. Barty Crouch was on his knees in front of the fire, talking to Amelia Bones on the flue. Apparently some Bulgarians had been partying and almost started a riot in the leaky cauldron by offering celebratory toasts after one of them cast the dark mark. The problem was they spoke very little English, though one of them managed to communicate enough to claim to be the son of the Bulgarian Minister of Magic. They really needed to interview them before the situation escalated into an international incident. Barty could clearly see Amelia was at home, and her Christmas was being ruined too. He had just agreed to go into the ministry when the windows suddenly imploded. Barty whirled around and froze in surprise as Amelia Bones jumped through the shattered frames before firing a stunner at him. Shaq, go. Your team upstairs while we sweep down here. Auror Tonks, keep that flue connection open and monitor the situation. Amelia and Mad Eye were in full Auror garb as they rushed through the downstairs portion of the house. For Amelia, arriving in the kitchen and seeing the table set for two was a big boost. The head of the Aurors swiped her hand over each of the chairs and felt elated when it smacked into something solid. She closed her hand over the invisibility cloak and dragged it off, much to the distress of a now sobbing house elf. Barty Crouch Jr., you are under arrest. Amelia then stunned the unresponsive wizard for good measure before producing magic-inhibiting cuffs. Mad Eye, get Shaq and Gawain back down here, and make sure Barty Sr. is going nowhere without us. Tell Tonks to head for the ministry and wait for us there. I want these two questioned today before anyone can interfere. Amelia could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was getting too old for this shit. Jumping through blasted-out windows was a game for younger Auras, but it had worked perfectly. Seeing two Amelia Bones had frozen Barty for the second they needed to take him out. She'd noticed Mad Eye hit him with a stunner too as they passed. All her team now knew what was at stake here today and were determined there would be no slip-ups. Phase 1 had been a resounding success. Now all they needed to do was discover just how far the corruption had spread in the ministry. They weren't out of the woods yet. They could all still find themselves without jobs before the new year if enough of the wrong people were implicated in this. Dan and Emma were sitting enthralled as they watched the kids' potions class. Both had done their fair share of chemistry labs as they went through university, but this was something else. Yes, they were using cauldrons, but the precision needed for the ingredient preparation and brewing was a million miles away from making a pot of soup. Here was a branch of magic they could understand, sort of. They were interrupted by a couple of Gringotts owls delivering a rather large book that contained details of the Potter properties. This had Hermione really excited. Oh wonderful, now we can look through your houses and start planning where we want to go this summer. Padma couldn't help but notice the Potter crest on the front of the book. She was also a Purblood and the hat didn't sort her into Ravenclaw for nothing. Harry, how can you access these? Don't you need to be head of your family first? The hush that descended with that question worried Padma. Guys, you know I can keep my mouth shut. This is obviously something you don't want made public. Padma, you know we trust you, but this just brought up something I hadn't thought of. How to invite you and Neville on holiday with us, without alerting the world that I've taken on my head of house. Does this mean you've made your choice, Harry? No, Padma, it just means that I'm the only one who can make that choice. My father didn't want anyone attempting to gain control of me, with the Potter family ring on my finger. That can't happen now. I won't say a word, Harry. This drew a smile. I know, Padma, I have no worries about that. Now that you do know, can I have a word with you, in private? Emma watched as Harry led Padma out into the back garden. Here was her first chance since this morning to talk to her daughter alone. You okay, love? To say the least, a rather unusual present Harry got you. Her daughter smiled back at her, not for a goblin mum. I know it's easy to forget, but that's who Harry is. His most prized possession is his knife. It never leaves him. Its sheath is charmed to be invisible so you can't see it even when he has his sleeveless tunic on. She glanced over to where Moonlight was lying on his back, amusing himself by swiping at one of the lower baubles on the Christmas tree. He got my birthday absolutely perfect, and my sword is practically a work of art. Would you like to bet it's worth a small fortune too? Both had stopped as Dan now joined them in staring out the window. Whatever Harry had said to Padma, she was clearly upset. Harry opening his arms and the now sobbing witch throwing herself into them was puzzling too. It finally hit Hermione just what was happening here. Damn. Hermione, care to enlighten your poor, ignorant parents just what the hell is going on out there? I'm only guessing, Dad, but Harry told Padma he was head of House Potter, then asked for a quiet word. Whatever that word was, Padma is clearly distraught, though not upset with Harry. Since the girl was currently clinging to him as if her life depended on it, their daughter's analysis was hard to refute. It still didn't tell them anything though. Please tell us something we don't know, Hermione. I'm only guessing, Mum, but I think Harry's just told Padma he's turning down the marriage contract her father offered. What? They're both only 11. I know, Mum, for blood customs means Harry has to deal with the situation as soon as possible, once Padma knew he was head of House Potter. She obviously didn't know her father had offered her hand in marriage. That's barbaric. It's different from what we believe, Dad, but it's their custom. Don't some Muggle cultures still have arranged marriages today? We come across differences like this all the time between us. Using words like barbaric doesn't help us understand our friend's point of view. I certainly don't want you arranging a husband for me. It doesn't mean I'm going to lose my friends because their parents might do that for them. Hermione felt her mother's arms wrap around her. When did you get so wise? When I was 6, and had to wear that stupid costume. All three smiled at that, and watched the young man comfort his friend in the garden. When he finally led Padma back into the house, she flew right into Hermione's arms and the two girls held each other tightly. I didn't know, Hermione, I swear I didn't know. It's okay, Padma, it was easy to see you didn't. Hermione could feel the tension leave her friend at that. Harry was brilliant with me, Hermione, that could have been really terrible but he made everything okay. He really is something, hold on to him. We'll all hold on to each other, Padma, we're all friends. Harry approached both girls, unsure of how his actions would be received. Are we okay? He suddenly found himself with two witches holding on to him. Of course we are, Harry, now we can have our Christmas dinner and then figure out where we're all going on holiday this summer, also how to get Padma and Neville there too. Oh Harry, I just remembered something, my father really wanted to meet you. It makes more sense now, though I can't figure out why he offered me instead of Parvati. The blush on Harry's face told its own story. He offered betrothal contracts for both of us. Harry didn't answer the particular question but wasn't fooling anyone. Providing he doesn't know I'm now head of House Potter, I can refer all matters like that to my father. Emma had a question she was dying to ask, well actually a few questions. Is it customary for the girl not to know that her father had offered a betrothal contract on her? Padma answered as best she could. I don't really know, Emma. For blood society is very male-dominated, and even more so where I come from. My father's word is law in our household. To disobey him would bring shame to our family. At least I now know why he so readily agreed to me coming here. The mother tried not to let her shock show at that. Thankfully Dan appeared as horrified as she was with this news. The Granger household was most certainly a partnership, not a dictatorship. I was just wondering if some of these girls who kept approaching Harry knew they were offered as betrothals by their fathers. That would certainly explain some of the more persistent ones. Do you know if they are, Harry? Sorry, Hermione, I only glanced down the list once last summer, and the names meant nothing to me at the time. I only remembered Padma's because they were twins. My goblin upbringing dismissed that option immediately. This sounded something that Dan wanted to hear. Why would your upbringing automatically rule that out? Glares from his wife and daughter soon had him explaining further. I'm not attempting to be judgmental here, just gather information on different cultures. Goblins only have one mate, Dan, and that mate is for life. My father's wife died in childbirth, with his baby son passing soon after. He wouldn't even consider taking another wife, no goblin would. This drew a smile from the dentist. Those views are pretty close to the ones we hold, Harry. That was the only reason I asked. Hermione has entered this whole other world where everything appears different. Like you, we're trying to understand as much as we can about those differences. Emma thought the entire day needed rescuing to get back to the fun they were having. One of those differences is Christmas dinner. I'm pleased and also terrified that I'm cooking the first Christmas dinner for both of you. She was laughing at this but still rather nervous. She'd asked Hermione if her friends had any special dietary requirements, only to be told they ate whatever was in front of them. It would soon be time to see if that was true. Cornelius was not a happy minister. Only Amelia telling him that if he didn't come to the ministry immediately, he may not be the minister much longer, got him up from his Christmas dinner. There was no Christmas cheer as he greeted his head of DMLE in her office. Amelia, this better be good or you could find yourself back on an Auror patrol. Cornelius, if we don't get this right, both of us could be out on our ear by the new year. She handed him one of the pictures Barchok had supplied, and watched the color drain out his face. Is this genuine? Since I have both of them currently in our cells, the answer would have to be yes. Watching the Minister for Magic panicking was not a pretty sight. We have to contain this, Amelia, it could bring down the ministry. I totally disagree, Minister, containing it could cause us a lot more problems. I was given that picture by a goblin. The goblins have no bearing on this, who cares what they say? The boy who lived, especially since he calls the goblin who gave me this father. After Cornelius had taken a much-needed seat, Amelia explained what they had already discovered. We immediately questioned the prisoners using truth serum. I needed to know who else in the ministry was involved in this. Thankfully, the answer was absolutely no one. Barty's dying wife extracted a promise that he would get their son out of Azkaban. It was her who took her son's place and died in his cell, still under the influence of Polyjuice potion. Barty has since kept his son in line by repeated use of the Imperious Curse. The minister let out a huge sigh of relief. Crouch's guilt was undeniable, and the ministry were mostly in the clear. That was until the obvious question hit him. How and why did this photograph end up in goblin hands? Barchok told me they were carrying out an investigation into the trial of Sirius Black. I did some quiet digging myself and couldn't discover anything. Questioning Barty gave me the answer. I couldn't find anything because there was nothing to find. Sirius Black was sent to Azkaban without a trial. That wasn't what worried Cornelius, rather the reasons behind the goblin investigation. Did you ask why they were inquiring about Black? I did, and you won't like it any more than I did. Amelia went over to a sideboard in her office and poured a couple of brandies from the decanter she had there. She handed one to Cornelius before giving him the bad news. Sirius Black is Harry Potter's godfather. The minister was grateful for the brandy. It fought off some of the icy chill that had just crept up his spine. Please tell me you have some good news for me, Amelia, or at least some idea how we get ourselves out of this one. My Susan told me what happened at the leaving feast. I'm surprised you let Dumbledore con you into that, Cornelius. This change of tack threw the minister. What do you mean? Harry may attend Hogwarts, Cornelius, but we heard from Dumbledore's own lips that the boy will have nothing to do with him. He was trying to use your presence to ingratiate himself with the boy. Harry's answer was predictable to anyone who even slightly knows the lad. It also was no surprise to me that the rest of his yearmates followed him out of the hall, or that he had made provisions for them doing so. Are you saying Albus was using me? Albus Dumbledore uses everyone for his own ends. That the famous boy who lived won't even be in the same room as him must be driving the old coot crazy. The goblins declared Dumbledore persona non grata over a decade ago. Harry may consider himself a goblin, but he also has his own personal reasons for doing the same. I don't want to see the ministry pulled into Dumbledore's mess, and think I know how to avoid it. Amelia laid out the basis of her proposal. We play everything in public, and strictly by the book. This would also include a public trial for Sirius Black. She held up her hand to stop the minister's expected protest at that course of action. On Halloween, Black had 2 goblin visitors. The security guard ensured they signed in and out. The names were Barchoke and Old Crow. It would appear Harry not only visited his parents' graves on Halloween, he also slipped off to visit his godfather in Azkaban. This information was hard for Cornelius to believe. The boy who lived was in Azkaban, and we weren't informed. He kept his hood up and spoke gobbledygook. He wasn't recognized as anything other than another goblin. What we have to recognize though is that they have been at least one step ahead of everyone, no matter what some people have tried. The logs show they spent over an hour with Black. It can be no coincidence that they then started an investigation into how Black ended up in Azkaban. We're dealing with the results of that investigation today. Amelia, surely you're not suggesting Black is anything other than guilty. I really can't imagine him expending all this effort just to get Black's Azkaban sentence legally confirmed. Neither of us had anything to do with him ending up in Azkaban, but we've just been given the perfect opportunity to align your ministry firmly on the boy who lived's good side. You call an emergency meeting of the Wizengamot for tomorrow. I'll get Black and the boy here. Let Harry and his father see justice being done, and whether Black is innocent or guilty doesn't really matter in terms of the ministry's relationship with the boy. It's win-win for us. Cornelius was finally getting it. If Black is innocent, we get to set him free, and share no blame in him being sent there. If he's guilty, then we can ask the boy's opinion on an appropriate punishment. Both Crouches should really face a Dementor for their crimes, and the ministry can claim its tough new stance on law and order is paying dividends. Are you sure you can get the boy here? That shouldn't be a problem. What I need you to do is avoid telling anyone, especially Dumbledore, just what we're up to. Let's keep to an official statement that an emergency has arisen that needs to be dealt with immediately. Dragging out the 2 Crouches should satisfy them on that count. After their trial, we can announce the irregularity that's now been thrown up and try Sirius Black directly after the Crouches. It was a pensive Minister of Magic who agreed to Amelia's proposals. The minimum amount of notice that can be given for an emergency meeting is 2 hours. I'll send out notification first thing in the morning and set the meeting for 10:30. Will you be able to accomplish everything you need to do in that time? Amelia was thinking of sending Shaq and Tonks to Azkaban to collect Black. Mad Eye and Gawain could take it in shifts to sit on the prisoners while she headed for Gringotts. We should manage. I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your Christmas, Cornelius. It should be quite the Boxing Day. After a lovely dinner, they had all sat around the table and studied the Potter properties. Dan had liberated a giant children's map of the world out the loft and temporarily had it hanging in the dining room. It had once adorned Hermione's bedroom wall in the daughter's younger years. That same witch currently had a handful of color stickers and was placing them on the map at Potter property locations the group really wanted to visit. The problem was, even being really choosy, they already had 6 stickers on the map with about half the book still to go. Harry, I now understand why my father offered both my sister and I as brides. The Pattles would be classed as quite well off, but Merlin, this is something else. The extent of the Potter wealth has never been made public, always only hinted at. Seeing proof of it here is kinda overwhelming. No wonder there's a lot more betrothal contracts with your name on them out there. This was confusing to Emma. Is it really all about wealth, Padma? Well, to my father, he values breeding, power and wealth. The Potters are an ancient, respected family. That gives them a lot of power, without even taking into account their incredible wealth. People like Malfoy want you to lick their boots and acknowledge them as your betters, yet they couldn't muster even a tenth of what Harry would seem to have available. The boy in question was actually getting embarrassed at the way the conversation was turning, and attempted to change it back to happier subjects. Let's leave blood politics out of it tonight, Padma. I'm having too much fun looking through things my family own. My mum and dad might even have visited some of these. Now who wants to vote on a private island in the Maldives? Emma's hand was actually shaking as she pulled the book over toward her to see this one better. Hermione was already putting a sticker over the islands on the map. Everyone halted what they were doing as there was a knock at the kitchen door. Dan left but was soon back with Barchoke. It was greetings all round before the goblin got down to business. Harry, we're going to see your godfather tomorrow morning. Hermione was soon at Harry's side with her arm around him and her head resting on his shoulder. Even the thought of you visiting Azkaban scares the life out me, Harry. Barchoke gave a deep, throaty chuckle. Don't worry, Hermione, we're not going anywhere near Azkaban. Harry and I are heading for the Ministry of Magic. Sirius has a trial in front of the Wizengamot tomorrow. A loud whoop from Harry saw Hermione hoisted into the air, and also earned a comment from Padma. Okay, forget all about giving normal a try. How about letting me in on what's going on? Christmas Day was just like all the other days of the year for the inmates of Azkaban. Festive was not a word that could ever be used to describe the atmosphere on the island. There was also a distinct lack of cheer. All that was about to change for one inmate. The cell door opened and Senior Auror Shacklebolt performed his duty. Sirius Black, you're coming with us. You will be tried for your crimes in front of the entire Wizengamot, and under the influence of truth serum, tomorrow morning. The haggard figure's reply was somewhat unexpected. About bloody time. AN thanks for reading. AN2 posting this slightly early to save some of my readers having to get up in the middle of the night. Disrespecting your elder. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, JKR owns Harry Potter. I write purely for fun and it's free. Anyone wishing professional standards of writing should go and buy one of her books. Poa is my favorite. Chapter 21. Albus was in a foul mood as he entered the Wizengamot chamber. His Christmas had been anything but merry. He tried to use the holiday to sway Hogwarts staff over to his way of thinking about the boy who lived, with absolutely no success. All had robustly rebuffed his ideas, with Professor Hobson getting so angry she began shouting at him in Swedish. Even Severus had point-blank refused to put his fledgling relationship with the boy in jeopardy for the sake of the greater good. Now the Chief Warlock found himself summoned to a meeting, with not the slightest idea what was on the agenda. This was adding to his bad mood, a bad mood he intended to lighten by sharing it around. It was way beyond time that Albus reminded people he was the most powerful wizard in the country. The most powerful wizard in the country was ready to blow his top after spotting Harry and his father sitting in the front row of the public gallery. Watching Miss Bones join the pair left Albus feeling that he wasn't going to enjoy today either. If Cornelius had started listening to Amelia Bones, then Albus anticipated trouble. There was just no give in the stern witch. She tended to see things in terms of black and white or, even worse, lawful, unlawful. Seeing Amelia arrive in the chamber, alongside the minister, just seemed to confirm his worst fears. Albus decided to get this show on the road. He stood and banged his gavel to bring the chamber to order, not even trying to hide his displeasure at the situation he found himself in. Fellow Wizengamot members, I bid you welcome to this emergency meeting. Normally I would now announce our agenda, but, since I haven't been informed of why we've all been ordered here, I must now pass you over to the one who called this meeting. Please take the floor, Minister Fudge. The minister slowly rose, knowing every eye was now on him. Cornelius understood this was his moment to shine, and intended to make the most of it. Fellow Wizengamot members, I would first like to apologize for disturbing your holiday, and for the secrecy that surrounds this meeting today. I can assure everyone of the necessity of both, and I am confident you will agree with me when you discover why we are here. This emergency meeting is all about justice, and that's what I intend to see carried out here today. Auras, bring in the prisoners. Senior Auras Shacklebolt and Robards led both father and son Bartemiuses into the chamber, a chamber that had descended into uproar. A cannon blast noise spell from Amelia got everyone's attention. We will have order here, and we will see justice done. This ministry has nothing to hide and all your questions will be answered before we even consider passing sentence. I think the entire chamber recognizes that one of these prisoners has already been convicted of heinous crimes. I feel no need to rake over that painful ground again here today. That judgment and sentence still stands. Amelia watched as Augusta Longbottom regained control of her emotions, and nodded her thanks for that. This would be painful enough without having to relive Frank and Alice's torture. That nothing was going to be swept under the rug seemed to appease the Wizengamot, for now. They would wait and see how things went before passing judgment on the Crouch family. Shaq applied the truth serum to Barty Sr. and led him through the story of how his son came to be chained into the seat beside him. The chamber listened, enraptured as the tragic tale of an embittered man and loving mother descended into criminality. Barty brought his story right up to date by informing the chamber about Amelia Bones jumping through his destroyed window on Christmas Day before stunning him. Susan was sitting there feeling 10 feet tall with pride at her aunt's deeds when Harry leant over and whispered to her. Sorry for ruining your Christmas, it couldn't have been any fun on your own. Oh, that's all right, Harry. I was with Hannah, and this is what Auntie does. I wouldn't have it any other way. Amelia now opened the questions up to the chamber, though Shaq would still be asking him of the prisoner. Hearing that a couple of people had stumbled on the secret over the years, only for Barty to obliviate them, was a discovery that stripped any last semblance of sympathy away from the man. That he'd kept his son under the Imperious curse for the last decade meant Barty Senior's fate was well and truly sealed. Barty Jr., having been held under an unforgivable curse since stepping out of Azkaban, didn't really have anything to add to the proceedings. As no one really wanted to hear him spout Dark Lord dogma, he was sentenced as an escaped prisoner from Azkaban. Both he and his father were to have a kiss by a Dementor administered before nightfall. This time it was Susan's turn to lean over and whisper to Harry. I think I would rather be thrown to a dragon than face a Dementor. At least with the dragon, it would be over with quickly. As the father and son were being led away to face their sentence, one of the members asked Amelia a question the head of the DMLE wasn't sure she wanted to answer. With Barchoke and Harry sitting there though, she was trapped into providing one. Madam Bones, how did you come by the information that led you to raid the Crouch residence on Christmas Day? Our friends from the Goblin Nation provided some quite compelling proof of just what was going on in the Crouch residence. Albus was on his feet, knowing that goblins always expected to be paid. Can I ask just why the goblins were interested in wizarding affairs? Actually, that leads us nicely on to the next part of our proceedings. It has come to the Ministry's attention that Barty Crouch was the main force behind a wizard being sent to Azkaban without a trial. We intend to right that wrong here today. Dumbledore needed all his experience not to let his dismay at this development show, knowing at once exactly who the wizard was Amelia referred to. On a point of order, I must advise that this emergency session doesn't currently have a mandate to. Harry didn't need the spell the director used on the steps of Gringotts, the anger in his voice clearly discernible as it reverberated throughout the chamber. Point of order, where was this love of the law when you ordered Hagrid to deny my godfather his rightful possession of me? When you left a baby on a muggle doorstep? When you employed Voldemort to teach at Hogwarts? Harry ignored the shouts and gasps at his use of that name. Where was this love of the law when you attempted to blackmail my new defense tutor? Harry then addressed a chamber that was agog at these accusations. Sirius Black is my godfather, yet this is the same man that supposedly served both me and my parents up to the Dark Lord. I demand the right to know if this is the truth. Who in here would deny me that right? Dumbledore was aghast at Harry's knowledge, and the ferocity of his verbal attack. He tried to stall for time. Harry, this is not something a child needs to hear. Sirius Black is. My name is Centurion Crow, and I am no child, old man. If Sirius Black is found to be guilty, I would have no hesitation in demanding satisfaction and killing him myself. Now, as Chief Warlock, aren't you the one charged with seeing justice done? Or, like Headmaster of Hogwarts, is that just another title you hold but have no intention of fulfilling the job requirements? The minister stood at this point and took over. I personally invited young Harry and his father here today to see justice done. Regardless of his crimes, Sirius Black should still have been afforded a trial. When pureblood wizards can be thrown in Azkaban, with no hearing nor any right of appeal, it begs the question of who could be next. Cornelius knew he had them now. If this fate could befall one pureblood, what was to stop any of them being the next victim? It was time for the minister to do a bit of grandstanding, especially since he made sure the press would be here. My ministry were not involved in this injustice. Furthermore, it will never play a part in a witch or wizard being sent to Azkaban without a trial. If that is the kind of minister you want, then you got the wrong wizard when you elected Cornelius Fudge. Auras, bring in the prisoner. The same rules apply as last time. We will allow questions from the chamber once the truth about that evening has been established. Mad Eye and Tonks led Sirius into the chamber, ensuring he was secured to the supplied chair before administering the Veritaserum. Albus was desperate to object on any grounds possible, but Alastair Moody's presence robbed him of all the opportunities he could think of. It would be an incredibly stupid person who brought Mad Eye's honesty into question, especially where supposed dark wizards were concerned. The chamber expected someone who had spent the last decade in Azkaban to be rather the worse for wear. In that sense, Sirius didn't disappoint. What did surprise them was the wide smile and manacled wave of greeting in the boy who lived's direction. Sirius proclaiming under truth serum that he was neither the Potter's secret keeper nor a Death Eater fairly got the chamber talking, and the press offering thanks to DeSales that they were present here today. The entire chamber sat enthralled as Sirius was led through his story. Of how he became uneasy that Halloween evening, and that unease turning to panic as he couldn't find Peter. Panic becoming horror as he arrived in Godric's Hollow to discover the closest thing to family he had in the entire world murdered. His world shifting out of kilter when Hagrid refused to hand his godson over, and his need for revenge on the betrayer, eventually leading to him being illegally incarcerated in Azkaban. The chamber had listened earlier as tragedy saw a wizard, trapped by circumstances, continually break the very laws he once so passionately championed. Now circumstances appeared to have colluded to see this innocent wizard lose a decade of his life. No one knew quite what to say. Harry though had a question he would like to hear Sirius publicly answer. Minister, would it be possible to ask my godfather just who cast the Fidelius charm on my parents' home? Cornelius was not the only person who wondered why Harry was asking the particular question. He was the one who voiced his puzzlement though. Simple minister, our research shows that this charm is extremely complicated to cast, and requires a lot of power from the caster. I doubt if there are many in this chamber who could successfully perform the charm. This appeared to upset a toad-faced woman who let her displeasure be known. I would like to know what you're implying by that remark. I would also like to know why this chamber is allowing goblins to interfere in the affairs of wizards, something I'm sure was against wizarding law the last time I looked. Harry took umbrage at this witch's attitude. You clearly don't know anything about goblins, madam. We never imply, rather ask questions and investigate until we get to the truth. On the Halloween evening of 1981, despite being protected by a Fidelius charm, my parents were murdered. My godfather was soon placed in Azkaban while my godmother now resides in Ward 49 of St. Mungo's. I ended up being abandoned on a muggle doorstep by Albus Dumbledore. Cornelius was watching this and thinking how right Amelia was. The boy obviously considered Albus poison, and the minister would have to be careful not to become tainted by association with the Hogwarts headmaster. Now you may think that's a lot of hard luck for one person to have, but here's where we hit a problem. My godfather was in Godric's Hollow that night yet clearly denied his rights, by Dumbledore's orders. My godmother was one of the most respected auras the ministry had at the time, yet again her rights were ignored. Both my godmother and godfather were available to me on that evening, yet Albus Dumbledore took it upon himself to decide what was going to happen to me, and you all stood back and let him. This was met with utter silence as Harry held them all accountable for what had befallen their savior. He then turned his attention back on the witch who'd asked him the question in the first place. We are well aware goblins are not allowed to interfere in the affairs of wizards, but we are allowed, and certainly intend, to investigate fully wizards who commit crimes against goblins. Does anyone here doubt crimes were committed against me? On discovering my godfather was innocent, yet received no trial, we began investigating the people who put him in Azkaban. It was as simple as A, B, C, Albus, Bagnald and Crouch. It was this same investigation that discovered Crouch's deceit, and allowed my godfather the trial we've just witnessed here today. Mad Eye then asked Sirius the suggested question, only to be disappointed when he didn't know. I was more concerned with making sure the rat would be well hidden. I wasn't there when it was cast and never thought to ask. The witch was back at her snarkiest, her attempt at a sweet innocent voice fooling no one. I hope that answer satisfies our goblin friends. She actually managed to make the word, friends, sound like the worst contagious disease in the world. Absolutely not. I am very suspicious of the supposed coincidences that happened around me that night. Just like I'm suspicious of Flamel's stone being hidden in Hogwarts, and Voldemort being employed to teach there the very year Harry Potter was scheduled to arrive. I can also assure the honourable lady we will get the answers we require, and that I applaud Minister Fudge's tough stance against those breaking the law. Harry sat down at that to mixed reactions. The toad-faced witch was fuming, quite a few others appeared concerned at what these goblin investigations might unearth. The minister though wore a wide smile as he continued the proceedings. Is there anyone in this chamber who has the slightest doubt Sirius Black is an innocent man? Cornelius was well aware by asking the question in this way, anyone objecting would have to publicly declare themselves. In a vote, they could have cast their opinion in secret. Since there are no objections, I declare Sirius Black a free wizard. Madam Bones will investigate this matter further, including a recommendation for recompense over wrongful incarceration, and report back to this chamber at the first meeting of 1992. A warrant shall be immediately issued for the arrest of Peter Pettigrew. His order of Merlin is of course revoked. I declare this emergency session over and would like to thank everyone for attending during this holiday period. The manacles were removed from Sirius and he stood as a free wizard for the first time in a decade. He looked toward his godson, who quickly got the nod from his father. Susan giggled at Harry's visible glee. He actually vaulted over the balustrade, separating the spectators from the court, and was soon wrapped in Sirius' arms. Here was a belated Christmas present for the press corps. A picture of the boy who lived hugging an innocent Sirius Black was a sure thing for the front page. It might even rate a special edition all on its own. Albus had skin that would put Teflon to shame. He really believed none of the allegations that Harry had just made could possibly stick to him. While the rest of the chamber bore witness to a touching reunion, Albus just saw opportunity knocking, an opportunity he intended to exploit at once. He quickly made his way over to the celebrating pair. Good to see you free, Sirius. I will certainly support any measures you take to regain custody of your godson. Sirius was nowhere near his peak physical condition, which was probably just as well. If he had been, the punch that hit Albus Dumbledore would probably have killed the old wizard. Even in such poor shape though, there was 10 years of hate and anger behind the blow. The physical blow was totally unexpected, and caught Albus unawares. He stumbled back a couple of steps before falling on his bum, sitting there with his nose gushing blood. An enraged Sirius Black was towering over the downed Dumbledore. You sanctimonious, conniving old bastard, stay the fuck away from my godson or you'll have me to deal with too. The flash of the photographer's camera was the spark that finally ignited Albus's temper. Who did this ungrateful whelp think he was shouting at? Some stray mongrel cur. The indignity suffered sitting here on the floor was even more painful than the nose he was sure had crunched under that fist. His wand was out and moving before really registering with the chief warlock what spell he intended to cast. The surge of light that followed made the photographer's flash appear like a mere twinkling Christmas tree bulb, temporarily blinding nearly all of the chamber's occupants. As their vision returned, the sight that greeted them left most of them wondering if the flash had affected their minds too. A golden boy who lived was currently standing over Albus Dumbledore, with a glowing sword point pressed against the older wizard's chest. You'll have to excuse my godfather's abruptness. You see, unlike me, he doesn't think the great Albus Dumbledore would actually curse an unarmed man. I know you better. Albus had no answer, he had no words. The stump of wood he was holding in his hand was also telling him he now had no wand, his brain though refused to process that information. The elder wand could not be destroyed, it just couldn't. The flash when Harry sliced through Dumbledore's wand was unexpected, as was his sword glowing for a moment. What was familiar though was the feeling of power now running through the blade, it felt similar to his beloved knife. If Harry could cast a spell with his sword, he would see Dumbledore tied up in restraints, like that incarcerous spell curse breaker Weasley was teaching them. No one was more surprised than Harry when thick ropes shot out of the sword of Gryffindor, and secured Dumbledore's arms to his torso. He certainly hid his surprise better though. Mad Eye had seen the lad prepare to take action and was moving until that flash sent a pain right through his skull, his magical eye not reacting fast enough to the sudden tremendous increase in light levels. As both his eyes recovered, Alastair discovered he couldn't move. Well, not without taking a goblin blade through his right kidney. Take it easy my warrior friend, both of us have seen more than enough bloodshed. Let us carefully weigh up our options, before allowing another precious drop to be unnecessarily spilled. This was said so quietly that only the two of them could hear it. What are you proposing, sir? My son will not harm anyone who doesn't attack him first, let us see how this plays out and then shake hands, warrior to warrior. Mad Eye was unsure about this. You've got the drop on me, why would you give up that advantage? Neither of us are fools, we wouldn't have lived this long if we were. I also think you are a man of honor, though if I'm wrong I'm positive my son will avenge me. The grizzled old Auror was left questioning both his eyes as the lad cast a spell, wordlessly and with a sword, wrapping Dumbledore up like yesterday's leftover turkey. As Harry turned to talk to Black, Mad Eye slowly raised his empty hand. That's quite the boy you've got there, no one gets that good without a massive amount of trainin'. Barchoke's blade had disappeared as he shook the Auror's hand. My son is a dedicated warrior, his appointment to Centurion status was earned entirely on merit. Moody kept his ear to the ground and had heard of this lad's feat of taking down a fully grown mountain troll. There were also whispers circulating regarding his encounter with Lucius Malfoy. Alastair was honest enough with himself to admit he'd taken both stories with a pinch of salt, not anymore. The lad's movements had been fluid and lightning quick, he could have sliced Albus open if the lad wanted to. Yes, he was undoubtedly young but clearly carried himself with a maturity that was way beyond his years. With Bones influencing that idiot Fudge and this lad on board for the fight, not forgetting that sneaky goblin father of his, Moody felt better about their chances than he had in years. Shit, he was almost optimistic. His glance at Albus filled him with regret. The old wizard's time was over, he just didn't know it yet. Albus Dumbledore's policy of blanket forgiveness really stuck in the ancient Auror's craw. Burying your people while letting the murderers walk free was no way to win a war, and Alastair had always known their war wasn't over. Sirius made his way over, with his arm on his godson's shoulders. A godson who sheathed his sword and lost the golden armor. The now free wizard had known at once what Dumbledore was attempting, and had enjoyed slamming that door, and his fist, firmly in Dumbledore's face. He now intended to publicly end any speculation on the matter. The knowledge that Harry and his adopted father already had it covered just added spice to the mix. It was great to be free and be a marauder again. Barchoke, I would like to thank you for the wonderful job you have done in raising my godson. I would also like to say publicly that I have no intention of disputing your position as his parent and guardian. I do hope you will allow me to play some part in his life though. The goblin bowed to the ragged figure before throwing something else into the mix. Lord Black, our door will always be open to you. There are things I am ill-equipped to teach my son. I'm sure he would rather learn them from his godfather than some tutor I hired. Amelia and Susan joined the conversation at that point. Not if all his tutors are like the one you arranged to teach history at Hogwarts, Miss Hobson. I understand the young professor has made quite the impact since arriving at the castle. Harry, I was really impressed by your armor. I've never seen anything like that before. Susan spoke before realizing what she was saying. I now see what you mean about your tunic adapting. The red-faced young witch was then left to explain her comments to a group of smirking adults. Harry showed us his armor in Miss Hobson's class. He had to loosen his shirt or it would have been ruined. This was like manna from heaven for Sirius. Discovering that his godson's life wasn't all training fairly put the twinkle back in his eye, as did noticing how this young witch was eyeing up his godson. Let me see if I've got this right. You got your shirt off in front of a hot young teacher and all the girls in your class. Your dad would be so proud of you, while your mum would probably give you a clip round your ear. Sorry to disappoint you, Sirius, but I kept my shirt on. I did offer to duel while in full armor, but the bell beat us. I have improved my speed since then. It was Amelia who came back for more. I was wondering if that armor was commercially available. It makes a dragon hide vest appear pretty lame in comparison. Harry was well used to dealing with inquiries like this from his friends. He understood there was no insult intended, although Madam Bones had practically stumbled into one. Centurion armor is exactly that, ma'am, armor for centurions. It can never be bought or handed on to someone else, but must always be earned. For someone not of centurion rank to wear this armor would be an instant death penalty, much like you have set penalties for witches and wizards who use unforgivables. I understand your interest, Madam Bones, but centurion armor is sacred to our nation. My son is quite correct, Madam Bones, though slightly modest. I don't believe the ministry has similar positions to that of a centurion. It's almost like a cross between a warrior and an ambassador. In any war, you will always find centurions at the front of our nation's warriors. In times of peace, leading by example and promoting goblin values is one of the main roles in life. Sirius still had his arm on Harry's shoulders and could feel his godson stand that little bit straighter at his father's words of praise. Well, I have to say this is bad planning on your part, Harry. If you'd gotten me out a couple of days sooner, there would have been an extra Christmas present for you yesterday. Barchoke could see the twinkle in this wizard's eye and thought this was the kind of person his son needed to be around more. Harry needed to learn to relax a little. Since he's spending Christmas with two girls, Sirius, I don't think he would have missed a present from his godfather too much. Speaking of those girls, I'd better get him back there. Hermione and Padma are sure to be waiting, dying to know every detail. He chuckled to himself watching Harry now squirm under his godfather's gentle teasing. Sirius, with Harry spending the holiday at the Grangers, you are more than welcome to stay with me. I would also prefer if our healers could have a look at you. If nothing else, they have excellent nutrient potions you could certainly benefit from. Sirius readily agreed to that suggestion. Anything would be preferable to Grimmauld Place. He didn't know it was possible to feel elated and exhausted at the same time. Today had already taken a lot out of him. As the trio were making their way out the chamber, an idea hit Harry. Sirius, how would you like to give your godson the best present ever? This intrigued both adults until Harry very quietly explained what he wanted. Sirius's loud roar of laughter was the first to pass his lips in over a decade. Dumbledore sat and watched as the goblin effortlessly accomplished what he could not. Black left in their company, clearly more than happy to go along with them. Calling Sirius Lord Black would also halt any other attempts to remove Harry from Gringotts. A blood lord in their corner just legitimized Barchoke's claim on the boy. He'd been released while a healer had repaired his nose and cleaned away the blood. Albus was beginning to wonder if the stain on his reputation would last a lot longer. He'd known about those deadly blades of Harry's, yet made the same mistake again of letting the boy get too close, and paid a very high price. He didn't even want to think how a picture of a golden armored, snow-white tunic-wearing boy who lived standing over him with a sword would look. All Albus's thoughts were centered on the two pieces of wood that were now just that, two pieces of wood. The Elder Wand had been his ace up his sleeve when facing Voldemort. Now their entire world was resting on the boy being able to take down the darkest wizard in centuries. Albus was glad there was still most of the holidays yet to go. He reckoned it would take him longer than that to figure out where he went from here. In stark contrast, Cornelius was prancing about like a peacock. The ploy of being open and telling the truth had drawn public praise from the boy who lived. Now there was a Christmas present gold couldn't buy. With Harry gone, Emma shooed Dan away to watch some sport on the telly so she could spend time with the girls. It was heartening to see Hermione and Padma so close. Their daughter never had a close friend before meeting Harry. They both obviously missed him, but Emma was beginning to understand the dynamic in the group, especially as Padma told a few tales from Hogwarts. Both Hermione and Harry were pretty serious kids. Padma seemed determined to lighten the pair of them up a bit. Hermione had been teased before, of course, but not like this. There was nothing malicious about Padma's teasing. It was more gentle barbs in an attempt to get her friends to blush. Hearing that Hermione was now teasing back was practically a relief for Emma. Her spending the night with Harry jibe had her laughing out loud. Padma's story of how some of the witches had turned their attention onto Neville, and how they dealt with it, had Emma laughing once more. It did raise some concerns with the mother though. I just don't understand what all the rush is to find a boyfriend. Kids who are not even into their teens shouldn't be worrying about potential husbands. While Hermione agreed with her mum, she tried to explain what Padma had told her in a way that might make sense. Mum, you and Dad met at university when you were studying dentistry. How many universities in Britain offer that course? Oh, at least a dozen. Why? In magical Britain, there are no universities, no primary schools, just Hogwarts, nothing else. Apart from a few who might be homeschooled, the students that we meet there are the total population of witches and wizards our age. Emma now had a new concern. No further education. Where do the doctors, lawyers and the hundreds of other people you need come from? When you decide on a career, it's almost like an apprenticeship program. You learn the basics for owls, then you have NEWTs to qualify for whatever career apprenticeship you want. St. Mungo's trains its own healers, the Ministry of Magic has a wide variety of jobs and there's always private firms too. Even Gringotts employs and trains a few witches and wizards. Emma was starting to get some idea of just how rare it was to have a witch in the family. She now understood that Hermione's year group had been conceived and born during a war the Grangers were thankfully unaware of at the time, thus resulting in their smaller than usual number of students. That there was only one magical school for the entire country was mind-blowing. One hospital, one government building, one center of commerce and only one magical village. With families living practically in isolation, was it any wonder they went a tad mental when they all got together at school? It still sounded a bit like a cattle market to the mother, but she was learning from her daughter not to voice those thoughts. What do you think of this, Padma? She took a moment to ponder before answering her friend's mother. I think being friends with Harry has had a big influence on all of us. We know he has a big decision to make before he turns 17. I know the way he's handling it has certainly had an effect on me. Harry's determined to see what different cultures have to offer before even considering making a decision. That's not something I had thought possible before. There's an entire world out there I know nothing about, and I'm in Ravenclaw because I love to learn. Maybe in a few years I'll start worrying about finding a potential husband, before my father finds one for me, but I intend to enjoy myself with my friends until then. Would your father really do that? Emma realized that was a stupid question straight after she asked it. Her father had already tried to arrange a marriage for both twins to Harry. If there isn't a wizard my father approves of at least dating me by the time I'm 17, then he will take the matter out of my hands. That's assuming he hasn't already offered me to someone else. That this was totally alien to the Grangers went without saying. Hermione had already stated though that she had no intention of losing her friendship with Padma over the matter. Mum, I've noticed in the magical world that couples seem to marry younger than non-magicals probably would. Harry's parents married right after graduating Hogwarts, so did Neville's. My father was almost 30 when his parents arranged a marriage contract with my mother's family. She was 17. Padma's casual acceptance of the situation was something both Granger girls were really struggling to deal with. Harry's arrival soon had the girls racing to meet him, desperate to find out how the trial had gone. His detailed and lengthy explanation had the rest of them waiting on tomorrow's prophet being delivered. Amelia was sitting with her niece, enjoying a lazy breakfast and smirking at the prophet. The theme the two front-page pictures appeared to have in common, apart from Harry being in them, was that both would have been considered unbelievable less than 24 hours before. It was hard to decide whether the boy who lived hugging Sirius Black was more shocking than a golden Harry holding his sword on a bleeding Albus Dumbledore. The newspaper then went to great lengths to explain the history behind each picture, accurately and honestly reporting exactly what had been said in the courtroom. Amelia wondered if this new standard of journalism was as a result over goblin complaints about their catastrophe in the cemetery story, or simply that yesterday's events didn't require any sensationalizing. The actual facts of the matter were easily sensational enough on their own. Amelia was about to discover that, as far as her niece was concerned, the answer was neither. The white owl that flew to Susan was easily considered more sensational news by the young witch than anything the prophet had to say. That's Harry's owl, urged. Her hands were trembling as Susan removed the note from the gorgeous owl's leg. Her eyes nearly popped out her head and she was almost hyperventilating as Susan explained the note. Harry was sorry I didn't get to spend Christmas Day with my family. He blamed himself for you having to work. Harry's offering to make it up to me with a muggle shopping trip, with Hermione, her mum, the Patil twins, and Hannah's invited too. Can I go? Just looking at how excited her niece was over this opportunity meant there was no way Amelia could say no. Susan squealed before diving for the flu, only to come rushing back to speak to the owl. I'm just going to check if my friend can come too. I'll be back in a minute and then could you take my answer back to Harry? Amelia smiled as her niece shot back out the room to contact Hannah. Mrs. Granger was certainly going to have her hands full, taking 5 young witches shopping. The burrow may have been full to capacity but it was unusually quiet. That was a situation that could never last for long. The Daily Prophet was laid flat on the table as the entire family crowded around, all trying to read it at the same time. In the hubbub created by 9 Weasleys all then attempting to get their opinion across at the same time, no one noticed the rat slipping out of Ron's pocket. The Prophet was also being devoured, along with breakfast, at the Granger household. Both activities were disrupted by the arrival of a Gringotts owl. The majestic bird flew straight to Harry. His reaction on reading the note was even more extreme than the young witch who received a letter from him. Harry was on his feet, jumping up and down while punching the air in loud celebration. Not even Hermione had seen him this demonstrative before. Good news, Harry. The best, Hermione, simply the best. Harry had to take a couple of deep breaths to calm down slightly before he could give his best friend a proper answer. Remember I told you Sirius inherited a house from his family, and wanted us to spend some time there. His family were rather dark so my father offered Gringotts services to sweep the house for any dark items. I can't quite believe it but they found another item tainted like the diadem. That taint has also been dealt with. That's good, but I don't remember you being this excited when we found Ravenclaw's diadem. Oh, that's not why I'm so happy. Sirius was apologizing for the lack of birthday or Christmas presents while I was growing up. I gave him a suggestion of how to make up for it. He's giving me the best present I could wish for. Everyone now wanted to know just what that present was. Harry didn't keep them waiting. My godfather can do something for me my father can't. Lord Black can officially refuse all the betrothal contracts on his godson's behalf. Sirius is going to wait until after the holidays to send out the letters, just in case Padma's father decides she should then have to go home. This news was met with 4 blank faces, leaving Harry to wonder if he'd done something wrong. Hey, is that okay? Padma and Hermione sprang out their chairs and were soon cuddling a relieved Harry, leaving Dan to chuckle. I think that means it's okay, Harry. And thanks for reading. Shooting, shopping and shit happens. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, I write purely for my own enjoyment, making no money from this venture and claim only my imagination as my own. I always strive to be original but, given the amount of HP fan fiction out there, almost everything has probably been done before. Chapter 22. The group portkeyed into Gringotts where Barchoke warmly greeted them. They were also welcomed by a bathed, barbered and certainly more becoming Lord Sirius Orion Black. It's a pleasure to meet you all, especially Harry's friends. It was difficult not to tease his godson, since he was standing there holding a witch's hand, but Sirius managed to resist. He'd spent hours chatting with Barchoke about their favorite subject and had quickly discovered how close Harry was to a certain Miss Granger. Sirius was desperate to discover more about his godson. I understand you all have plans for today but was wondering if we could have dinner together tonight. I've hired a private room from Tom in the Leaky Cauldron and we could spend an hour or two getting to know one another this evening. Dan and Emma thought this was a brilliant idea, with the 3 kids all showing great enthusiasm for the plan too. It was quickly confirmed as a date. He then addressed his godson. I know you're meeting more of your friends today, Harry, please invite any of them along that want to come too. The more the merrier has always been one of my mottos. Barchoke then handed Emma an envelope thick with cash. Harry wanted the shopping trip to be on him. I know you already bought my son practically a new wardrobe, and both of us are really grateful for that. Today though, we'd like it to be our treat. Emma was left with no other option but to graciously accept before they headed off to the Leaky Cauldron, where the rest of their friends would be joining them. Neville and his gran, the formidable Lady Longbottom, resplendent with her signature stuffed vulture hat, were already in the pub. That their friend didn't rush straight over to greet them alerted the other three there was something else going on here. His gran marched over and bowed to Harry. Centurion Crow, the House of Longbottom would like to thank you, your father and the Goblin Nation for righting a great wrong. Our house is in your debt. Harry understood it wasn't polite to interrupt someone in a situation like this, but he felt compelled to do so. Madam Longbottom, please don't. I told Neville back in September he was the nearest thing to family I have, there can be no talk of debts between us. That was also my godmother the Death Eater attacked, goblins look after family Madam Longbottom. My friends and family call me Harry, I would be honored if you would do the same. There was a hint of moisture in the proud old witch's eyes as she stared at the young man in front of her. Thank you, Harry, I can see Neville has made some good friends in his short time at Hogwarts. My godfather has invited us all to dinner here tonight, we would certainly be delighted if you and Neville could join us. One glance at her grandson was all she needed to know this was something he really wanted her to say yes to. Neville had been missing his friends so Augusta quickly agreed. This seemed to be the cue that Neville had been waiting for. He dashed from behind his grandmother to greet his friends. Ramrao Patil exited the flue to see one of his twin daughters in the company of potentially two of the most powerful young wizards in Britain. That his other daughter, still wearing her gift from Harry, was also joining the group for today pleased him greatly. Hearing that they were invited to meet Lord Black for dinner tonight was a golden opportunity that couldn't be turned down, he and Smeeta would certainly be taking up that offer. Discovering mere minutes later that Madam Bones and her two charges would also be joining them had Ramrao's head in a spin. Since their move to Britain, the Patels had constantly faced hostility from the country's pureblood elite. They guarded the patch jealously, and it had been made very plain that he and his beautiful wife were not wanted. Their twins were like both halves of his beloved wife. Smeeta was as serious as Padma or as flighty as Parvati, depending on her mood and the circumstances. That they didn't get invited to parties and balls because they weren't British was just another form of bigotry as far as the Patels were concerned. That his wife loved parties and dancing was the only reason that their snubs bothered him. Every day, Ramrao woke and thanked both their families for bringing Smeeta into his life. He loved his wife more than life itself. He also loved his daughters, and that was the main reason he had offered the betrothal contract to Harry Potter. The wife of Lord Potter could be of any descent or blood purity, the Lady Potter would demand respect. That both his girls now owed this young man a life debt was something that he might bring up later at dinner, but not before talking it over with Smeeta first. He may be the voice of the Patil family but only a fool didn't listen to good advice, and his wife always gave good advice. That Padma's friendship with these people saw the Patil family invited to dinner amongst this exalted company was not lost on her father either. That his daughter was clearly very happy was also something he wanted to encourage. He wished everyone well before heading home to talk over these developments with his wife. That there would also be muggles, and perhaps even goblins at this dinner too bothered the head of the Patil family not a jot. Outside the pub, the group split along gender lines. Dan was taking both boys to his club for a few hours while Emma loaded the girls into a Harrods-bound taxi. Emma decided it would be better containing the young witches to the one store. In London, that meant Harrods. They could easily spend the day there, with the menfolk meeting them later for lunch. The instant the group entered the store, Padma had to take her twin aside and try to talk her down. Parvati was so excited, there was a real danger of her releasing accidental magic. Quote ellipsis. But Padma look, just look. I see it Parv, but you need to calm down and then we can both enjoy it. We've got hours to shop before meeting the boys for lunch. Then more shopping before heading back and having dinner with everyone. It was really comical to watch her sister's eyes almost bulge out her head. You mean we can actually buy some of this stuff? Padma, I don't have any of their money. This drew a smile from her twin. I do, and Harry's father gave a pile to Emma for our shopping too. I was going to get some perfume for Mum, and maybe slippers for father. Will you help me chose? This was exactly the right thing to say. Parvati had Padma by the arm and was dragging her deeper into this Aladdin's cave of treasures. Hannah and Susan's jaws were practically on the floor too, drawing a giggle from Hermione. Probably just as well Parvati doesn't know this is only one floor of the store. It was Susan who recovered first. You mean there's more? There are 7 floors. Mum, we're going to head up to the fashion section. Will you keep your eye on the twins? Hannah was also recovering from the shock. Mrs. Granger, just mention fashion section to Parvati, she'll be along to join us in a flash. Hermione led both girls over to the escalator, drawing another comment from Hannah. Now this is what I call a moving staircase. Why can't we have these kind at Hogwarts? Hey, you should give being in Ravenclaw a try. We've to climb up to the top of that tower umpteen times every day. Hermione led them unerringly to the right department, and watched their chins hit the floor again. Harry's father gave my mum cash to pay for this today. So, anything you see you like, just sing out. This was way too much for Susan. What if you like it all? Hermione's giggles once more rang out. Let's go and have a look at some tops, unless you want to check out the lingerie section before the boys get here. Dan led Harry and Neville into the child-friendly diner on Harrods' 4th floor, only to be mobbed. Well, only for Harry to be mobbed by 3 exceedingly happy young witches. Parvati had her arms wrapped around Harry and kissed him on the cheek, before passing the bewildered boy onto the redhead. Thank you, Harry, thank you. This place is simply amazing. Neville was chuckling at his friend's discomfort. That was before a hyper-excited Parvati gave him the same treatment. What was that for? I didn't do anything. I didn't want you feeling left out. Following that same logic, Susan and Hannah hugged and kissed Neville too, after Harry though. Emma slid out the booth to the table next to it where Dan joined her. Harry was soon sitting between Hermione and Padma, while Neville found himself squashed into the other bench seat between Parvati and Susan. Both were sitting very close, using the excuse they needed to squeeze up so Hannah could fit on the seat too. Hermione asked Harry how he got on at her father's club. His frown signaled not too well. It was okay. We spent ages learning safety protocols, then had to wear earmuffs and special glasses, all to put a few holes in a piece of paper. I was kinda expecting more, if that makes sense. Hermione realized that, after some of the spells they had been learning from Professor Weasley, shooting paper targets would seem a tad tame. I'll ask Dad to give you a demonstration of just what guns are capable of before we head back to Hogwarts. It's not just paper targets you can put holes in, and from a far greater distance than you can cast a spell. Harry left that for now, keen to discover how their morning had gone. He'd loaned Hermione his bag, and that was the only reason they weren't currently drowning in shopping. He'd actually thought about getting Hermione a bag of her own for Christmas. He liked carrying her books though, so scrapped that idea. Emma ordered a range of starters, burgers and shakes all round. Both parents couldn't contain their smiles at the sight of the daughter sitting eating lunch amongst her friends as they all caught up with each other. That they were witches and wizards didn't matter to the two dentists, that they were Hermione's friends was all that counted. Neither would admit that they had practically given up on this ever happening for their daughter. It was a blessing Sirius had hired a private room. The youngsters hit the leaky cauldron like a tsunami, their excitement and exuberance sweeping everything in their path. It was a knackered and somewhat relieved Emma and Dan who trailed on behind them. Of the 7 kids they'd been in charge of, 4 of them had never set foot in a muggle shop before, with Harry and Padma faring only slightly better on the experience scale. The Granger parents felt a bit like a sheepdog must at the end of a hard day working in the hills, ready for their dinner and then curling up to sleep. Seeing everyone else was already in the room, Emma attempted to apologize. Sorry for being late everybody, the store was still open and we practically had to drag this lot out. It was said with a smile as all the guests could see their charges had really enjoyed themselves. Amelia Bones headed straight to Emma and offered her a chair. You have the look of someone who could use a drink before dinner, what would you like? Oh, a glass of red wine would be lovely right about now. The words had hardly left Emma's mouth when her requested drink appeared on the table right in front of her. While she was contemplating how that happened, Amelia had more to say. I want to thank you for what you did for the kids today, it's easy to see they all enjoyed it. I don't know how you managed to keep an eye on them all day. It was easy, Auntie, we were only in one store. Providing we didn't leave it, and trust me we didn't want to leave it, we could look about at all this amazing stuff. The information Susan had missed telling was supplied by Hannah. This one store was bigger than all of Diagon Alley put together. It was 7 stories high and sold everything from entire kitchens to pairs of knickers. I've never seen a shop sell a complete room before. At this, Emma had to intercede. The girls did hit the lingerie section. I tried to ensure their purchases were all age appropriate but don't know if things differ in your society. You might want to check what they bought first. A stunningly beautiful Indian woman, wearing a gorgeous pastel green sari, was now beside them. If there was even the slightest doubt of her identity, this was dispelled when Emma spotted the gift in her hand that she'd seen Padma and Parvati pick for their mother. Hello Mrs. Granger, I'm Smita Patil and I would like to thank you for what you've done for my girls. I know Parvati likes to push the boundaries so I will be checking her purchases, please don't think this in any way reflects on you. Padma can't speak highly enough of both you and your husband, and I really am so grateful for the opportunities you've given her and Parvati. Emma was up and shaking her hand in greeting before they were then joined by Augusta. With Hermione currently unloading and distributing the day's shopping amongst their charges, the 4 ladies were taking this chance to chat before dinner. Ramrao had been chatting with Lord Black and Barchoke, that was until the main party arrived. Sirius instantly made a beeline for Dan Granger. The twins' father then heard the impossible, a goblin chuckling with laughter. You'll have to excuse Lord Black, he's not quite himself yet. Since gaining his freedom, he's been beside me at every spare moment, desperate to find out more about his godson. This is the second time Harry has stayed at the Grangers and he really couldn't wait to talk to Dan about it. Both Hermione's parents are fond of my son, that makes them people Sirius absolutely wants to get to know. I'll need to see Hermione about adding him to their wards. Recognizing that no snub was intended, Ramrao asked a question that had troubled him. I wondered about those wards when Padma told us we would have to contact her through Gringotts. Can you ward a Muggle house? The director made Hermione a friend of our nation. That, and my son staying there, allows the building to be warded. As you will appreciate, Dan and Emma would be helpless against even something as simple as malicious mail. Normally this would not be a problem, but this is not a normal situation. Hermione's friendship with my son is now known nationally. My son also has enemies from the last war that the ministry didn't deal with. Neither of us were prepared to take the chance that those enemies might go after a soft target. This was a development Ramrao had not thought of. As he watched his wife standing chatting with the other women, and his girls gathered with their friends, it was almost as if the goblin read his mind. Padma and Neville may not have appeared at his side in the Prophet, but you can bet the wrong people will know how close they both are to my son. Longbottom Manor sits behind strong and ancient wards, but I am unaware of what level of protection you have on your home. I really never thought about this, and our home just has a very basic set of wards around it. If my family is in danger then it's not a matter of cost, more important to me is how quickly a secure set of wards can be arranged. As I said to Dan and Emma, this is more of a precautionary measure. If Harry were to stay at your house, my daughter's friends are welcome to stay anytime. This was all Barchoke needed to hear. Let's go and have a quick word with Dan and Sirius. There was something about Dan Granger that Sirius instantly liked, apart from the fact he was looking after Harry. There seemed to be an ease about the man, an ease that disguised a steely center. As an Auror, you needed to know your partner would stand by you and have your back when trouble called. Sirius was getting the impression here was a man you could count on. That he was also giving the marauder teasing material to use on his godson was another big plus in Dan's favor. Sirius had heard from Barchoke that Harry had been pretty broken up when discovering he was innocent, yet still had to stay in Azkaban. Hearing that his godson spent the night cuddling into Hermione for comfort was ammunition that was begging to be used. That the girl in question was also this man's daughter granted Harry a stay of execution, for now. Barchoke and Ramrao's arrival saw the goblin's proposal quickly agreed upon, though that wasn't quite correct. Ramrao did object, until Dan's laughter stopped him. Good luck with your argument. Emma and I tried the same, and lost, the argument that is. I certainly sleep sounder with the knowledge my family is safe behind these wards. This ended the argument and arrangements were made, though both married men inserted the proviso that they would need to speak with their wives first. The kids finally had their shopping sorted into piles of those famous green bags. The size of those piles surprised even Emma. I suppose that is the only downside to a magical bag. You don't realize just how much you've bought. It was a flabbergasted Amelia who summed up the other parents' mood. I can't allow you to pay for all that. Please let me at least make a contribution. Amelia, the only thing Dan and I paid for today was lunch. Harry wanted the day to be on him, and his father gave me the cash. I still have some left to hand back. I just needed a seat first. Barchoke waved her attempt to return anything away. Please pass anything left to the three of them. They can spend it over the rest of the holiday. This was a golden opportunity for Sirius to solve another of Harry's problems. He didn't hesitate. Living up to his more the merrier motto, the Marauder waded right in. Speaking of holidays, as Harry's godfather we can now access the Potter properties. His father and I are planning on seeing Harry spend most of the coming summer exploring some of these, with the Grangers of course. I would like to invite you along for part or all of the holiday period. The large smile on Harry's face was all that Sirius was focusing on. He didn't notice anything else. Harry, Hermione and Padma are currently working on a summer itinerary. Once that's settled, we can then sort out details of who's interested and when. It was an even more excited bunch who sat down to dinner, all the younger members clearly wanting to spend some of the summer together. Sirius was sitting across from Harry. Watching his godson be happy with his friends was helping Sirius' recovery almost as much as those wonderful goblin potions. It also wasn't hard to spot the hierarchy within his group of friends. Harry clearly thought Hermione was in a class of her own, and treated her as such. Barchoke had said they were inseparable. Sirius now got to see this phenomenon firsthand. Padma and Neville obviously came next. Again, his information gleaned from Harry's father was that they had been friends since their first week of Hogwarts, and only gotten closer since. The Marauder reckoned their friendship with Padma must be really important to them. He could see no other reason for Parvati being there. Perhaps being in this company might eventually round off some of her more annoying habits, like emitting nerve-jangling squeals of joy at the smallest thing. Sirius was sitting next to the girl's father, a man who clearly had something on his mind. If you don't ask Ramrau, I won't know what answers you're looking for. Forgive me, Lord Black, I realize this is not something one brings up at the dinner table. I was wondering if there were any other duties you were taking over concerning House Potter. Ah, I see. Ramrau, I will give you the information you're looking for, if you can promise it won't leave House Patil. That promise will apply until I get around to dealing with the entire matter, probably about the end of January should do it. Receiving a quick agreement, Sirius told the concerned father the truth. My godson has been raised as a goblin and, while I would much rather not have spent the last decade in Azkaban, I have absolutely no problem with Harry's upbringing or his father. Goblins don't use betrothal contracts, believing their children should choose their own spouses. Harry has asked me to give a negative reply to every betrothal contract with his name on it. As his godfather, I aim to respect his wishes. It wasn't hard to see the disappointment in the father's face. Sirius attempted to make up for it. I found that the friendships I made at Hogwarts were the strongest of my life so far, and a blind man could see those four close. I have no way of knowing what will happen as the years go by, I just know it won't include a betrothal contract. This actually did cheer Ramrau up. A blanket refusal meant his girls were being treated exactly the same as every other witch, and Padma was clearly close to these two boys. It was strange to see the quieter of the girls being the one who was the center of attention, something Parvati was clearly struggling with. He was sure Smita would have picked up on this, and would be having a chat with her when they got home tonight. Sirius though wanted there to be no misunderstanding of his role in Harry's life. Ramrau, I'm Harry's godfather, but it will be to his father he will look for advice first, and that's the way it should be. I'm trying to build a role for myself here. The best that I can hope for is a favorite uncle, something along those lines. My role will be to assist Barchoke and Harry in any way I can. This is Harry's decision, backed by his father and carried out by me. Thank you for explaining that to me, Lord Black. It also helps explain something I have been struggling with. Your godson saved both my daughters' lives, yet refused to acknowledge a life debt. Padma explained that goblins always help their friends and family, therefore there could be no debt. I am finally beginning to get my head around this extraordinary young goblin. Sirius let out a sigh. If you've done that, you're way ahead of me. It seems no time at all from when I was berating James' attempts to change Harry's nappy. I went from that to the young person we see before us. It's not the time locked in Azkaban I mind so much, more the years it cost me with my godson. Dan was sitting on Sirius's other side, and had heard every word. Why don't you come and stay with us over the new year? It would give you time with Harry, and allow us all to get to know one another better. Since moving all our banking to Gringotts, we can now afford to take a longer holiday at the summer. Dan glanced knowingly across the table. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of each other over the coming years. Sirius was overcome at the kindness he was being shown here, and since being set free. That this kindness was not related to him being the new Lord Black, rather because he was Harry's godfather, just made this kindness that little bit more special in the Marauder's eyes. He nodded acceptance before his voice would work again. I'd like that, Dan, I'd like that very much. The dinner guests had graduated into 3 groups. The 7 kids were easily the largest, and the loudest. The ladies all formed another group, the occasional bout of laughter informing the room that they were having a good time. The menfolk stood back, surveying the room while chatting about Sirius' day in court. Both Dan and Ramrau were desperate to hear every detail from Barchoke and Sirius. Those prophet pictures were iconic. It was almost 10 before goodbyes were said and everyone headed home. Getting ready for bed, Dan could see something was troubling his wife. Like husbands the world over, Dan hoped it wasn't anything he had said or done. What's the matter, love? Are you angry at me arranging Hermione and Harry to stay a night at Padma's, or asking Sirius to stay here? What? No, why should I be? That will allow the Patils house to be warded like ours, and Sirius is clearly desperate to get to know Harry better. It was just meeting Simta Patil. Why, what's wrong with her? That's my problem, absolutely nothing. I was all set to dislike a woman who could allow her daughters to be traded away, only to discover I couldn't find anything to dislike. She is a charming, witty witch who loves her husband and adores the girls. That shouldn't be possible. Her parents chose Ramrau as her husband, yet they're as happily married as we are. I don't know how Hermione copes with this every day, it's just so different. I know what you mean, love. I enjoyed Ramrau's company too. I noticed he was studying Harry and Neville, but, as the father of two girls both boys are friendly with, who can blame him? I overheard a discussion where Sirius told him Harry will be rejecting all those betrothal contracts. I must say, Ramrau seemed to take it well. This led to Emma shaking her head. Discussing the possible marriage of your 11-year-old daughters is not a conversation you expect to hear at dinner, or ever. He tried to cheer his wife up with some gentle teasing. So you don't want me to start negotiating with Barchoke and Sirius to get Hermione betrothed to Harry? Ha ha, that might actually be funny, if I didn't think our daughter would suddenly change her mind about betrothals, and can you see Harry turning her down? Dan achieved his aim of cheering his wife up. The fact she was now laughing at his pained and panicked expression was an entirely different matter. Hermione was having her best holiday ever. She'd never had friends before, never mind have them stay over. Sirius's arrival had also brought a lot of laughter to the Granger household. The man was a bigger kid than his godson. That same godson was currently holding her hand as she showed both Harry and Padma around Crawley. This was something else she would normally avoid like the plague, going into Crawley without her parents. She had put those dark days behind her though and was enjoying showing the local sights to her friends. It was now time for Harry and Padma's first trip to the cinema. Hermione thought they would both get a kick out of the Addams family. As they waited in the queue, the hated voice that Hermione hadn't heard for 6 months was like a hard kick to the gut. She should have known things had been going too well. Oh look, Granger's parents must have gone to rent a friend for her Christmas. A packy and a poofter, I suppose that's all you're worth. The despised chorus of derogatory laughter that followed these witty insults triggered an automatic response from Hermione, sending the young witch straight into her shell. That was until Hermione felt Harry squeeze her hand, and remembered she was no longer that lonely and scared little girl. Who's the comedian, Hermione? Clearly not someone who knows you very well. This stopped the laughter of the 5 boys who had approached them, though one had a comment to make. Oh look Big D, it can talk, and I didn't see Granger pull the string at his back. Harry had never seen the acne-cursed boy before, but recognized the type. In any gang, there was always one who would instigate trouble, usually while standing safely behind others. The sarcasm was fairly dripping off Padma's answer, not intimidated in the slightest by the odds they were facing here. She wasn't about to take that particularly hated insult from anyone. Oh Hermione, why don't you introduce us to the local wildlife? Do they actually have names, or just numbers on their collars? Hermione was drawing courage from having her friends beside her. She was finished giving in to bullies. Padma, Harry, meet Dudley Dursley and his friends. I used to go to school with them, and they make Ron Weasley seem intelligent. Well, coming up with the nickname, Big D, must have taken a lot of effort. He also looks as if he eats as much as Weasley too. Hermione was delighted by the support Padma was giving. Something about this though had made Harry stiffen beside her. Hermione looked at her best friend to see his eyes boring into Dudley. She'd seen that look before, it was usually followed by his knife being drawn as he got ready for battle. While the group of boys were figuring out if these bitches had just dared to insult them, Harry asked a question. Dursley, your parents wouldn't happen to be called Vernon and Petunia, would they? Hey Big D, your fame has spread. The pretty boy has heard of you. This generated some laughter but just increased the intensity of Harry's stare. There couldn't be too many Vernon and Petunia Dursleys, with a son about the same age as him. He asked one more question to be certain. Did your family used to live in Little Whining? Oh shit Big D, you've got your own stalker. The putz with the plooks seized any opportunity to escalate the argument. Yeah, just a pity your stalker's gay. Shit, his hair's longer than my sister's. Harry had never mentioned his family by name, but his questioning was just a little too specific for the Dursleys to be anything other than his hated aunt and uncle. Hermione also knew the Dursleys, and had no problem believing they would do that to a baby. Dudley Dursley had been the bane of her pre-Hogwarts life, yet his parents refused point blank to see their son as anything but a perfect little gentleman. Neither little nor gentleman were words that could really be associated with the obese bully. At this particular time, Hermione couldn't give 2 hoots for Dudley and his gang. She was far more worried at how her best friend would react to this meeting. Hermione swung in front of Harry, with both hands now placed over the arm where his knife was stored. Harry, you can't. He used his other hand to tenderly tuck a lock of hair that had fallen onto her face back under her woolly hat. Hermione, you don't have to worry about me. Dudley is about our age, he had as much say in his parents' decision as I had. This eased Hermione's worries greatly, but she could still see Harry was up to something. He gently brushed past her before holding his hand out to Dudley. Lord Harry James Potter, pleased to meet you, cousin. Both girls were now looking on in amusement at the confusion on Dudley's face. He had no idea how to deal with this. Hermione also knew that the Dursleys were the worst kind of social snobs. Harry introducing himself as Lord Potter was priceless. Oh, to be a fly on the wall when Dudley told his parents of this meeting. Cousin, I don't have any cousins. My Aunt Marge isn't married. Your mother and my mother were sisters, that makes us cousins. Dudley wasn't having any of this. My mother's sister married some drunken freak. They died in a car crash he caused. You're full of shit. This was a little too much for Harry. His attitude certainly hardened. Lily Potter, used to be Evans, was my mother. She and my dad were murdered when I was just over a year old. I was sent to your house to live, but your parents didn't want me. Looking at you, I have to think I certainly got the best of the deal. Please thank your parents for me. Sit boy seized his chance. He really is full of shit. Why would a lord hang about with a loser like Granger? Are you going to let this sissy get away with that Big D? This asshole deserves a kicking, walking into our manor and trying to pull a stunt like that. Harry really didn't want this to turn into a fight. Dudley had played no part in his parents' decision to reject their apparently only nephew. This mob may be the local bullies, but he was a centurion. There was a massive difference between them. The choice was soon taken out of his hands. Dudley's growl and then speed of movement practically outposted his intentions. Get him. Dudley's meaty fist swung, and hit nothing. Harry had moved to the side and hammered his knee into his cousin's thigh as the fat boy stumbled past, putting Dudley down with as little damage as possible. The next boy attempted to put the boot into Harry, only to have his foot caught while his standing leg was then swept from under him. Harry continued his spin, his still outstretched leg now catching a third boy in the groin. As the fourth decided to scram, Harry heard a scream from behind him. Turning made Harry's blood boil. The Acne warrior had whacked Hermione in the face and was now trying to run away. Padma may refuse to exercise with them, but it didn't hinder her any. She'd pounced on his back like a wildcat. Padma was spitting and scratching like one too. Harry caught up in seconds, kicking right through the back of this bastard's left knee. He went down screaming in pain, Padma's weight on his back causing his face to kiss the pavement hard enough to break his nose and some teeth. Harry helped Padma to her feet and then they both dived back to Hermione. She had one hand on the cinema wall supporting herself while the other was covering her mouth. There was blood seeping between her fingers. Harry's jacket was often placed on the ground as Padma helped Hermione to sit on it. She was obviously in pain, but the shock of someone actually punching her was also having an effect. Harry was sitting next to her, wrapping Hermione in his arms. I'm sorry, Hermione, I had him tagged as the least dangerous of the bunch. I can't believe he did that, far less think he was going to get away with it. Hermione's mumbled, he's done it before, saw Harry having to grab Padma, she wanted to go and have another hit at the git. Hermione was surveying the scene of devastation displayed in front of her. Dudley was attempting to get up but appeared to have no control over his right leg. Jake was flat on his back and groaning while Johnny was curled up into a fetal position, clutching his groin. By far the worst was Tony, his leg appeared to be lying at an unnatural angle while his nose was bleeding all over the pavement. The siren indicated they were going to have to give the cinema a miss, it looked like someone had phoned the police. Thanks for reading. Radioactive spiders and green-eyed goblins. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, I don't own these characters and my writing certainly couldn't be considered canon. If my efforts don't fit your idea of what a Harry Potter story should be, I can only offer my apologies and a suggestion. Writing your own really is the only way to ensure the story progresses exactly the way you want it to, it also gives the rest of us something to read. Chapter 23. Dan opened the door to find a policeman standing there. His female counterpart was helping the three kids out the back of the police car that was currently parked in the drive. Seeing his daughter with a bloody cotton pad held over her mouth had Dan moving before the constable could even speak. Mr. Granger, may we have a word? Constable, I insist you both come inside. Just give me a moment to see my daughter is all right first. Harry was standing beside Hermione, with his arm protectively around her shoulder. Dan made no attempt to move the lad, instead gently lifting Hermione's hand away from her mouth. The burst lips and damaged teeth had him practically growling in anger. He tried not to let it show as he led the group inside. The three kids sat on the sofa with Hermione in the middle. Her mother was soon kneeling in front of her with their first aid kit. The policeman introduced both himself and his colleague, as PC Murphy and WPC Johnston, before supplying information on what had happened. There was an altercation outside the cinema between these three and a group of 5 boys, all involved were around the same age. We would like to ask some questions and thought this would be a more comfortable situation, rather than dragging everyone down to the station. Your daughter also refused any treatment, saying both her parents were dentists. The WPC then took over. Counting your daughter, there were 5 injuries, one of which was serious enough to require hospitalization. Because of their age, we have asked them nothing more than names and addresses. Both Lord Potter and Miss Patil gave this address too. Dan didn't understand why Harry had used his title, or the name Potter, but was just going to play along. Both Harry and Padma are friends of my daughters from school, all 3 attend the same private boarding school in Scotland. They are spending their Christmas holidays with us. This is Harry's godfather, Lord Black. Are there going to be any charges here? Do I need to call our lawyer? PC Murphy shook his head. At the moment, this is just a preliminary investigation. You are welcome to call your lawyer, but that's not really necessary at this point. As Emma was cleaning Hermione's mouth, Sirius could see his godson's barely contained rage. He would bet his fortune the boy now in the hospital was the same person who injured Hermione. Harry, can you tell us what happened? We were waiting to go into the cinema when a group of 5 boys approached us. They immediately began hurling insults. I hope you didn't rise to them. Dan would hate to think his daughter had gotten a sore face because of some taunts. No, Dan, I discovered one of them was actually my cousin. I offered to shake his hand. They took this as some kind of insult and attacked. The one who hit Hermione was behind me. I'm really sorry. WPC Johnston was noting all this down. Would the person that struck Miss Granger be Mr. Dillon? This saw Emma explode. He hit you again. We shall be back round at his parents tonight. Mrs. Granger, you might want to leave that for now. Mr. Dillon was taken away in an ambulance. I don't think his parents will be home anytime soon. Can I ask if any of the 3 children practice some kind of martial arts? It was Dan who answered the policewoman's question. Harry runs to keep fit, but the only sport I know he practices is fencing. He's also teaching Hermione the basics. PC Murphy then asked the question they really needed the answer to. Can you tell us how Mr. Dillon came to be injured so badly? Harry shrugged his shoulders. If this Dillon guy is the person who attacked Hermione, pure bad luck. Padma jumped on his back and I swung a kick at him. My kick tripped him up, and he hit the ground with Padma still on his back. Your kick dislocated his left knee. Can I ask how you dealt with the other 3? Witnesses are all saying you made it look very easy. As Dan said, I fence. That doesn't help you in a fight, not one without a sword anyway, but it does really sharpen up your reflexes. I didn't use any special fighting techniques, I was just quicker than they were, especially Dursley. Hearing that name, along with the other assholes, was enough for Dan. Constables, there is some well-documented history between my daughter and these boys, though this is the first time it has involved the police. St. Andrew's Primary School should have all the records. My wife and I were certainly down there often enough complaining about the bullying situation. With Hermione now at boarding school, we assumed the harassment problems would stop. It would appear we were wrong. Hermione now had tears rolling down her cheeks, though not from the pain in her mouth. They thought things would just be the same as before, they didn't reckon on my friends standing by me. I've never done a thing to Tony, yet that's the second time he's punched me in the face. No one doubted Harry's conviction when he declared it wouldn't be happening a third time. This brought WPC Johnston back to an earlier point. Was Mr. Dillon the boy you claimed was your cousin? No, that was Dursley. Was there any animosity there? No, not from me. Dursley didn't even know I existed, so not from him either. Well, not because of that anyway. His parents apparently said mine died in a car crash, a crash my drunken dad caused. Sirius was ready to storm out and find the Dursleys, but Harry stopped him. Sirius, my father has already taken care of it. The documents the Dursleys signed ended any and all claim on me. They stopped being any family of mine there and then. The WPC continued her questioning. You said your parents died, yet mentioned your father. I was adopted when just over a year old. I usually go by the name of Harry Crow. The Dursleys wouldn't recognize that name, so I used the one I was born with. My adoptive father is one of the top bankers in the City of London. Please let us know if we need to contact his lawyers. PC Murphy didn't want to get caught in any crossfire between the police station, a couple of lords, and any lawyers a top banker would know, especially over a preteen scuffle in the street. Since there was no hint of any kind of weapon being used, and the only injury requiring hospital treatment would seem to have occurred accidentally, he was pretty confident of the outcome. I don't see our superiors wanting to take this any further. Individuals may want to press charges, but I think that then would become a matter for lawyers and the courts. What we have heard here matches statements taken from others in the cinema queue. The five boys approached and flung a few insults these three didn't physically respond to. Lord Potter here was seen to hold his hand out, just as the large boy was observed throwing the first punch. Because of their ages, all of them will be taken home by a constable and their parents informed of what happened today. They will receive an official warning over the matter, and find themselves now having their future behavior would be all the action we would intend to take on this incident. WPC Johnston put her notebook away before saying any more. Personally, I agree with Lord Potter. I can't see those boys bothering Miss Granger again. Crawley isn't exactly a large place. All their peers will soon know what happened. 4 of them ended up on the ground as the 5th ran away. I don't think they will be bullying anyone for quite a while, and we will be watching to ensure they don't. As Dan showed the constables out, Emma was going for their coats. We'll need to take you down to the surgery, love. There's too much damage for us to fix at home. I would like to thank you two for standing by Hermione again. Hermione's voice was slurred, but it was to Harry she aimed her words. This is not your fault, Harry. You've taught me to look after myself, and how to deal with jerks like that. Then I went and broke the first rule. I was too busy watching you. I never even noticed him until the punch hit me. He always was the sneakiness of the bunch. You and Padma made sure he won't be doing it again. I took my eye of him too. I should have been watching out for you too. Padma was having none of that. We take extra defense lessons every week so we can look after ourselves, Harry. Professor Weasley will give us hell when he hears what happened. Hermione and I are more than a match for him. We simply weren't paying attention. The very first thing the professor taught us to guard against. Dan was putting his coat on before adding his own views. The Dillons are every bit as obnoxious as the Dursleys. They won't take you putting their little angle in hospital lightly. We can expect a visit before too long. Sirius was spoiling for a fight. Let them come. I hope they bring the Dursleys with them. Sirius, I think we should let my father in on this. Gringotts can help, and our healers will easily fix Hermione in minutes. My portkey can take us all there. Dan and Emma both knew how much work, and pain, would be involved in fixing Hermione's injuries. Stitching the inside of your daughter's mouth before attempting to repair broken teeth was not their idea of a fun evening. The group headed for Gringotts. Albus felt as if he'd been punched in the mouth. Alastor Moody was in the castle and he didn't even know about it. What's more, it was obvious the old Auror wasn't here to see the Hogwarts headmaster. Albus accidentally came across the group leaving Minerva's office, with Phileas clearly involved in the discussion too. Bill Weasley is a good place to start, but they will eventually need more. When they reach the stage where they're ready to learn how to fight dirty, tell the lad's father to contact me. Alastor, what are you doing in Hogwarts? Leavin'. That was all the answer Albus got as the group pushed past him, leaving the headmaster to wonder just how far his star had waned. That picture in the Prophet had seriously damaged his reputation, and focused people's attention on the allegations Harry had made. This situation would take a bit of recovering from, but he had one thing on his side: time. Harry was only halfway through his first term and Albus needed to learn from the numerous mistakes he'd made since the lad entered the castle. He was also casting envious glances around him at the successes inside Hogwarts, in an attempt to emulate them. Severus's gift may not have both the Hogwarts potions master and Harry on the best of terms, but at least it signaled a cessation of hostilities between them. At this moment in time, that was the best Albus could hope for from Harry. Personally, handing the lad something that belonged to James Potter should at least start the healing process between them. He was also loath to admit that Hogwarts' new history professor was a stunning success. Albus may be loath to admit that fact. It didn't mean he wasn't going to attempt to copy the feat. Hiring a famous defense professor should achieve his aims on 2 levels. Hogwarts would have a competent professor at the defense helm, and then Harry wouldn't need William Weasley's services anymore. Albus was going to need every bit of the time he was sure he had. Easing himself into a position where Harry trusted him wasn't going to happen overnight. Albus was currently aiming for 4th year. That should still give him time enough to influence Harry the way he wanted, for the greater good of course. Emma couldn't believe the change in her daughter, and she wasn't referring to the miraculous healing the goblins had performed on Hermione. When this had happened before, she had been shattered, almost afraid to leave the house. Here she was, chatting and laughing with her friends as if nothing untoward had happened earlier today. That Harry wouldn't let go of her hand, even as the healer worked on her mouth, had certainly played a part in this new positive attitude. There was also a hint of anger directed at herself. Hermione had a strong desire not to be seen as some damsel in distress. Emma envisaged her daughter pushing their training even harder from now on. After returning from Gringotts, Emma was in no mood to cook and none of them had felt like going out for dinner. The menus had come out once more. Sirius, professing a love of Chinese food, courtesy of being introduced to the cuisine by one Lily Potter, made the decision an easy one. Emma went to answer the door and pay the delivery driver. A loud roar informed the house this probably wasn't their Chinese food arriving. An enraged Vernon Dursley burst into the dining room, his face almost purple as he sought his target and snarled. Where is the little freak? I'll teach Lord fucking Potter not to attack my son. Dan and Sirius sprang at the enraged behemoth, only to be brushed aside. It wasn't Vernon who knocked him out the way though. A golden Harry smacked into the intruder so hard, he actually knocked his obese uncle over onto his back. Dursley's veins on his forehead were visibly pulsing with his volcanic temper, but at least he had stopped bellowing like a constipated bull elephant. The cause of this sudden silence though was currently a matter for debate. It could have been his armored nephew hitting him so hard, Vernon had no breath left in him to scream. Then again, Harry kneeling on his chest with a golden gauntlet squeezing his obese uncle's throat would certainly have to be factored into any calculation regarding his clearly enforced silence. Betting favourite though was the wicked goblin knife, a knife which was currently held rock steady by Harry's other hand about an inch from Vernon's left eyeball. Petunia Dursley then ably demonstrated that her younger sister inherited all the intelligence in their family by proceeding to start hitting Harry with her handbag. Leave my Vernon alone, you bully. Beating up my poor little Dudekin's not enough. Thankfully, for the sake of Vernon's eyesight, Harry's armor meant she might as well be hitting him with a hyacinth as her handbag. Emma quickly pulled the skinny bitch off him though, just as Harry asked her a question. Emma, did you invite them into your home? No, I bloody didn't, the fat pig just pushed right past me. The smile on Harry's face at that news was terrifying, especially if your name was Vernon Dursley. Listen closely, Dursley, I have no intention of repeating myself. You have forced your way into this house uninvited, that this house is under my protection means I can legally kill you right this minute. The only reason I don't is we're just about to eat, and it would put the others off their food. Know this though, I was raised by the goblins you left me with. I could quite happily slit your throat and then use your dying body as a sofa while eating my chicken chow mein. The fact that everyone in the room could now smell urine was enough of a clue that Harry was being believed. This house and this family are under the protection of my people. Your fat son goes anywhere near Hermione again, he'll simply disappear. A dragon doesn't leave much of what it eats, though its dung has a wonderful effect on your garden. If you don't want your precious Dudekins to become fertilizer for Emma's roses, make sure he calls his friends off too. Harry stood and actually managed to drag Vernon to his feet. Have you anything you'd like to add, Lord Black? Only that your mother would be extremely disappointed in her sister Lord Potter. Apart from that, they're not worth bothering about. We're done, Dursley, you both made that decision over a decade ago. I was prepared to give your son the benefit of the doubt, he blew it. Like you, he charged right in and got his ass handed to him. My father only has one regret over my adoption, that he didn't gut you that day in his office. You should have seen his face when I told him your son and his gang attacked us. He's very fond of Hermione too, so the name Dylan is probably joining yours on his shit list. Dan had a final word for the now clearly frightened couple. You have no idea what you're dealing with here. Any of those kids could have wiped the pavement with your son and his gang of thugs. Take Lord Potter's advice and stay well away. His father is not a goblin you want to mess with. Dan and Emma marched both Dursleys out their house, returning to see Sirius casting cleaning charms on the carpet and that an unhappy Harry had shed his armor. Are you okay, Harry? No, Emma, I'm not. This is the shirt Hermione gave me for Christmas, and now I've gone and ruined it. The girl in question slipped the shredded shirt off her best friend, leaving Harry bare from the waist up. Hermione then took out her wand and cast a reparo spell at the garment, leaving it as good as new. This saw her hoisted into the air by a now delighted Harry. Looking at Harry's bare torso saw a question being asked by Emma. Harry, you're clearly quite a strong young lad. How the hell did you manage to drag that fat idiot up off his ass? Harry put Hermione down but didn't put his shirt back on just yet. When the director placed my armor bands on me, he said, may they bring strength to your arms in times of strife. Centurion armor is known to add strength to a warrior's sword arm, but I am the first non-goblin ever to wear this armor. When it's active, I've discovered I can ask my magic to make me that little bit quicker or stronger. In my armor, I could probably hold my own arm wrestling Hagrid. His armor once more covered his body as he proceeded to demonstrate by lifting the oak dining room table. Knowing he and Sirius would struggle to accomplish that feat between them, this led to Dan shaking his head. I was already struggling with the whole wizard-goblin thing, now I've got Iron Man and the Hulk to add to the mix. The look of confusion this comment was met with by Harry brightened Dan's evening. Oh, I need to introduce you to Peter Parker too, I've got quite the collection. Hermione and Emma's groans left Harry not knowing what to expect. The doorbell ringing saw Dan going to answer it this time, with Sirius standing right behind him. They all enjoyed a lively dinner while Dan informed Harry about the wonderful world of comics. Hermione saw Harry lying on his bed, studying a Spider-Man comic her dad had given him to read. Their eyes met and both voiced the exact same question. Are you okay? This saw Hermione smile and sit on the bed beside her best friend. I'm fine, Harry, your healers saw to that. I'm more worried about how you are, after meeting the Dursleys. It took a minute for Harry to put his thoughts into words. Disappointed is probably the best description of how I feel. I had dreamed of confronting those people for years, reality didn't come anywhere near my dreams. Having already met the sun, I should have been prepared for the disappointment. Hermione's hand slipped into his before he continued. I think Sirius said it best, they really aren't worth bothering about. They are no family of mine, and I happen to think the family I do have are brilliant. You've had the unfortunate experience of growing up beside Dudley, for that I'm really sorry. That's not your fault, Harry. I agree, none of the Dursleys are worth bothering about. I also know you were holding back today, that couldn't have been easy. Actually, it was a lot easier than you might think. I'm a centurion, Hermione, that means what I do reflects on that position. I would be letting not only myself down, but the director, my father and my friends. Being a centurion is a great responsibility, even more so for me with the background I have. There are both goblins and wizards waiting to see me fail, I hope to keep them waiting for a long time. Revenge on the Dursleys is certainly not worth the price. I think I understand, Harry. I also happen to think the friends I have now are brilliant too, and would hate to let them down. This led to some blushing smiles before Hermione changed the subject. How are you getting on with Spider-Man? I don't really understand it. What's a radioactive spider? I've never heard of that species. Do they have them at Hogwarts? Hermione held her laughter, instead thanking Providence her dad hadn't started Harry off with the Fantastic Four. Budge over, this is going to take a while. Explaining the marvelous world of Marvel to a goblin was not a 5-minute job. Dan and Sirius found Emma leaning on Harry's door jamb, a beautiful smile on her face while tears slowly ran down her cheeks. Both men were concerned. Those concerns vanished the instant they glanced toward where Emma was staring. Hermione was snuggled into Harry, a half-read Spider-Man comic laying across the sleeping pair. Emma's voice was quiet but still conveyed her sense of wonder. Do you remember what she was like the last time that ass punched her? Keeping his voice as quiet as his wife's, Dan's answer conveyed a different set of emotions. She cried herself to sleep for nights after. I wanted to strangle the little shit. They look so peaceful, especially after the day they've just had. This drew an answering nod from Emma. That's what brought me here. I wanted to check that Harry was okay. It would seem Hermione had the same idea, and got here first. She also seems to have done a far better job than I could have. Sirius was struggling to take his eyes off the young couple, and to understand why these two parents weren't in the least angry at the sight before them. Hermione was snuggled into Harry, her head resting on his chest. His godson had his right arm around Hermione, while his left had clearly held the now-dropped comic. Both looked incredibly peaceful, and Emma obviously decided she wasn't going to disturb them. The comic was placed on Harry's nightstand before she removed a blanket from a drawer, covering both of them. His father had told me how close these two were, but you really need to see it for yourself. Sirius, that is my little girl lying sleeping in your godson's arms. Don't ask me to explain it, but I'm not even concerned, never mind angry. Now perhaps you'll understand why I said we would be seeing a lot of each other over the coming years. It was strange for Sirius to see Dan smile as Emma kissed both sleeping kids. Barchoke was the first to see their connection, and explained how unusual it was for Harry to reach out to anyone like that. Hermione is exactly the same. We thought it was a different girl sending those letters home with that beautiful white owl. It's clear to see their friendship is helping both of them, and is something that Emma and I wholeheartedly approve of. Anything else, we will deal with as they get older. I can only hope they're a lot older before we even have to think about that. Dan, I am so out of my depth here, I have absolutely no idea of what to say or do. In all honesty though, the two of them lying there so peaceful, so content is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. Emma was now gently shooing both of them out the room. I agree, Sirius, and so does Big Bad Dan here. He's just annoyed about having spent years working on his protective father routine, only for some boy to render it obsolete before he even got a chance to use it. He adores your godson as much as I do, Dan's just not ready to admit it yet. Dan quickly changed the subject. Never mind that, what are we going to do about the Dursleys, and the Dylans? We both know Petunia and Vernon are barely tolerated in Crawley. That obnoxious horse-faced bitch talks about everyone behind their backs. Well, I intend to make sure our version of the truth gets out there, and is the one being believed. Sirius was amazed at how this woman could go from being so tender and gentle with the kids, to now ready to rip the Dursleys to shreds. Dan though had a question. Our version of the truth. Well, it will be mostly true. How we were sick of the bullying and sent Hermione to a private boarding school, a school where she met her best friend, Lord Harry James Potter. An orphaned child who the Dursleys refused to care for, despite him being their only nephew. I also intend to let it be known that Tony Dillon punched our daughter in the face for the second time, and got his injuries running away. I'm sure Barchoke could provide us with receipts for the exclusive and private medical treatment Lord Potter arranged for his best friend, just to make the Dylans think twice about running to a lawyer. Okay, that's all mostly true. Dan knew how protective they both were of Hermione. Emma apparently had just extended the protection to include Harry. The Marauder though had something to add to the conversation, a conversation that was still held in whispers. They were currently standing on the bedroom landing and there were 3 sleeping children in the house. You may think that's enough, but I doubt if Barchoke will. I am sure the Dursleys have trouble coming their way soon, these Dylans too if they start anything. You two were obviously concerned with Hermione but, as Harry said earlier, Barchoke was every bit as angry as his son over her injury. After quiet goodnights were mumbled, the adults then all made their way to their respective bedrooms. It was a slightly hungover, and very nervous Vernon who answered the door next morning. It was almost a relief seeing an irate Callum Dillon standing there. He led the man into the kitchen where he'd just left his 3rd cup of coffee. Dudley was also there, sitting in his Y-fronts and eating his large breakfast. The reason for his lack of attire was instantly obvious. His mother was currently rubbing lotion onto a wicked bruise that spread over most of his hip and thigh. This was all Callum needed to see. He was barely containing his temper as it was. I've spent most of last night at the hospital. Deirdre is still there. Tony spent hours in surgery. They had to rebuild his knee and wire a cracked jaw. That's not counting his broken teeth and nose. My son looks as if he's been hit by a bus and the police had the nerve to say they won't be pressing any charges. They're claiming my Tony attacked the Granger girl, and his injuries were accidentally inflicted as he tried to run away. I was planning on heading round there to give the Grangers and the guests a piece of my mind. I stopped by to ask if you wanted to come too. Vernon's large body gave an involuntary shudder at that suggestion, and he decided that the coffee wasn't helping in the slightest. He pushed it away and went for the Glenfiddich, returning with the bottle and 2 glasses. Vernon poured one for himself and indicated for their visitor to help themselves, to a seat and a drink. Callum, we were round there last night, it wasn't pleasant. Vernon needed a swig of his 12-year-old single malt before he could continue. We know of the boy who did this, how could we not? He's Petunia's nephew. Over 10 years ago they tried to dump the brat on us after his parents were murdered. We wouldn't stand for it and put him up for adoption. That was why we moved to Crawley, in the hope they wouldn't find us. Petunia and I decided last night it was time to move again. The man this brat now calls father is not someone you want to cross. He would give the mafia a bad name. Another shudder was treated by administering more single malt. There's even a godfather on the scene as well. When we were considering moving house 10 years ago, Petunia made some inquiries about him. He was slapped in a high-security prison for committing multiple murders, yet now he's clearly out. So you see, Callum, there is more chance of me winning Slimmer of the Year than going back round to the Grangers. Your Tony actually punched the daughter in the face, a daughter whose hand this boy was holding as they walked around Crawley. Go if you must, but you might not get out of that house in one piece. Callum reached for the bottle and poured some of the liquid gold into the glass provided. What the hell was he supposed to do now? At the Grangers, the house woke once more to the thwack of Harry and Hermione practicing in the back garden. Sirius was nursing his cup of coffee while standing to the side, watching these two go at it with their wooden practice swords and shields. Their concentration seemed immense, so out of place for people their age. The marauder thought this scene needed lightening up, so fired a mild stinging hex at his godson. Sirius yelped in surprise, and then pain, as his stinging hex was reflected straight back at him. He'd spilled hot coffee all over his hand too, dropping the cup onto the decking in the process. His wand soon joined his spilled coffee and cup. Hermione had spun and whacked his other hand with the tip of her practice sword. The thankfully rounded wooden tip was now resting on Sirius' chest as a confident young witch spoke to him. Harry said that if you take away a wizard's wand, they're helpless in a fight. It would seem he was right. Sirius though had another trick up his sleeve. Padfoot made an appearance and was about to pounce on the surprised girl. The mutt never even got to move. Harry's knife sprayed strange-looking ropes out the blade, wrapping the big black dog up like a belated Christmas present. Harry. I was trying for a web, you know, like Spider-Man. Cursebreaker Weasley is always telling us magic is all about intent. Looks like I haven't quite got it yet. No Harry, where the hell did the dog come from? Is that still Sirius? I assume he's an animagus, just like Professor McGonagall, except a dog. There's not much more I know. It's a form of transfiguration goblins are physically unable to perform. Because of that, we don't exactly have a lot of books on the subject. The whining now coming from the dog saw Harry release the bindings, and Sirius was soon with them once more. That was bloody brilliant, you two. I can't tell you how impressed I am at that. You fairly and squarely disarmed an adult wizard, and I would never have tried that move against your real sword. Well done, Hermione. Sirius could see the girl stand that little bit taller. Her confidence had taken a blow too yesterday. Dan had also been watching and couldn't help but proudly smile at the way his daughter had reacted. Here was another reason Hermione hadn't cried herself to sleep last night. His little girl could now look after herself. After extracting a promise from Sirius to tell them everything he knew about becoming an animagus, Hermione raced Harry up the stairs to take their showers. They were finally joined by Padma and the trio were soon at the breakfast table, where they were greeted by Emma, wearing a satisfied smirk on her face. That was Martha Jenkins just off the phone, supposedly inquiring how Hermione was. The story is apparently all over town. What she really phoned for was to discover if the rumors were true, and we actually do have a lord staying with us. When I told her no, we had to, she was practically salivating down the phone. We're all invited to her New Year party. When the story spreads, and it will, I expect a few more invitations to be coming our way. You can also bet the Dursleys won't be receiving any. I may have mentioned how they placed their only nephew up for adoption. Hermione's nose was wrinkling in distaste. I don't want to go anywhere if we're only invited because Harry's a lord. This drew laughter from Sirius. I think you better get used to that, Hermione. The Minister of Magic was desperate to invite Harry to the Ministry New Year ball, only to discover he couldn't. That news generated laughter from Harry. Our nation would refuse any invitation coming through the Department for Control of Dangerous Creatures, and their own laws prevent any other department from doing so. That was why I asked Susan if her Aunt Amelia could talk to my father. With us not being at school, they don't have that option. Then Sirius dropped the bombshell. Your father thinks the rules may be changed, allowing you to be officially invited to the Ministry summer ball. Won't we be on holiday? Hermione's words died in her throat as she spotted the change in Harry. He was clearly working out the implications of this, and liking what he found. Hermione, this is huge, even bigger than huge. If me getting dressed up and smiling for the minister one summer evening can change things for my nation, you better believe we will be there. This drew a wide smile from Sirius, and none of those present at breakfast had missed Harry's, we will be there, either. Just as well your father arranged a new tutor then, you need to learn all the do's and don'ts associated with being a lord. Augusta Longbottom has probably been instilling this into Neville since he was old enough to listen. We still want him to attend lessons though, we'll need 4 when practicing dancing and such. This certainly held the girls' attention, though Harry's thoughts had gone off in a different direction. There was something fishy here, and who did my father get to teach us this? Sirius couldn't contain his smile. Me, you're getting Lord Sirius Orion Black teaching you all about wizarding traditions and customs every weekend. Neither Dumbledore nor the Ministry will dare object to this. Merlin, both would probably pay for it out their own pockets. You still get Bill in the morning for defense, and then me in the afternoon. There is so much I need to teach you. Sirius had his wand out underneath the table as the 3 kids listened intently. It was time for a payback prank to make up for getting his ass handed to him earlier. Harry could practically feel the heat generated from having a blushing witch sitting either side of him. He was struggling to determine the cause, until he looked up. Mistletoe. Hermione was bright red as she asked her question. You know what that is, Harry? Yeah, a parasitic plant. Why would you want it in your house? Padma tried to help her friends. When a boy and girl are under mistletoe, it's customary that they kiss. Harry shrugged his shoulders and kissed Padma on the cheek, turning then to do the same for Hermione. Padma's blush got even deeper. Not a kiss like that, Harry. Harry already thought Sirius was setting him up. He'd drawn his knife while turning round to kiss Hermione. Hearing this decided his course of action. Wheel, that leaves only one option. Harry transfigured the mistletoe into a live bat, a bat that immediately chased his godfather. Sirius, not being able to fire off offensive spells indoors, had to race out the back garden before being able to deal with the creature. Dan and Emma had sat enthralled at this drama being played out before them, they now fell about with laughter. Harry leaned over and gently kissed Hermione on the lips. Neither of you need mistletoe, you are both beautiful witches. Sirius surveyed the scene from the back door and thought Godfather 0 Godson 2. He actually couldn't be happier with that score. Clearly he wasn't going to have to teach his godson how to woo witches. Harry may be blushing, but his godson was already way ahead of either Padfoot or Prongs at the same age in his dealings with the fairer sex. Dan had just watched a boy kiss his daughter but still couldn't stop laughing. Harry had reversed Sirius' prank brilliantly. Anyway, it wasn't every day you got to see someone chased away from their breakfast by a live bat. The kids were only going to be here for a few more days, but Dan was willing to bet those days would be ringing with even more laughter. Smeeta could hardly believe the reaction they got when stepping onto platform 9 3/4. It spread like ripples in a pond. Within seconds everyone knew they had arrived. Padma had tried to prepare her for this, but mere words didn't prepare you for an entire railway platform stopping and staring. Harry and Hermione had stayed at the Patil house last night, allowing their home to be warded and leaving Ramrao and Smeeta to get everyone to King's Cross. Her daughter had also explained that they would be showing a united front, this being the first time they had appeared in the wizarding section of Britain since those trial pictures of Harry were published after Christmas. Padma and Hermione had their dueling robes on, with the Muggle-born witch wearing her sword for the first time in public. Harry had shrunk all their trunks and tucked them in his bag, their only luggage being Hermione's cat carrier. The group was soon joined by Neville, also wearing his dueling robes, before the first flash signaled the press interest. Harry stood for a moment with his friends while pictures were taken, though refused to answer any questions. Ramrao then put a stop to the press intrusion, allowing Smeeta and Augusta to get the 5 of them on the train. The goodbyes were short so they could get to the safety of a carriage. It was going to be almost 6 months before they all met again. Their summer schedule had been worked out and the Longbottoms and Bones sent a copy. The Patels had all sat last night as Padma excitedly explained where they would be going, and when. Ramrao and Smeeta wouldn't allow their twins to be apart for an entire summer, and this was not a situation the girls would want either. Both were delighted to see plans being made to include not only them, but Parvati too. Padma obviously wanted to spend as much of the summer as possible with her friends, and they were looking to be joining them after the first 3 weeks. They hoped to stay for 2, with Parvati remaining for the final week too. There were a lot more details that would be required to be sorted out, but both Patil parents had provisionally agreed to the plan that would see Padma, Harry and Hermione spending 6 weeks of their holiday together. Smeeta had to hide her smile when Harry put his foot down and declared the guest list for the summer was now full. She had spoken with Parvati about trying to moderate her exuberance around the group. Unfortunately, that natural exuberance jumped a few notches when in the company of her friend, Lavender. By making that declaration, Harry had effectively excluded Lavender before Parvati could even bring her friend's name up. Amelia Bones joined them as Susan and Hannah headed onto the Hogwarts Express. The parents and guardians chatted away until the shriek of the steam whistle signaled it was time for the train to leave the station. None of the 4 standing there knew what 1992 would bring, although thought it would be different because of now knowing a certain Harry Crow. Thanks for reading. Memories of a Terrible Night. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, Harry Potter belongs to JKR. I write purely for fun and it's posted here so anyone can read my efforts, free of charge. Anybody wishing professional standards of writing should go and buy a book. Joe has a new one out, though I haven't read it. Chapter 24. There was a certain apprehension of expectation hanging heavy in the air, a tension that had been felt on the train but assuredly climbed in intensity as the 4 friends entered the Great Hall. The friends appeared to be the only ones unaffected by this apprehensive atmosphere, chatting amongst themselves as to why 3 of them could see the Thestrals, yet Neville could not. The group was sitting at the Ravenclaw table, discussing whether watching as Harry saved Hermione and Padma from the troll counted as seeing death. The troll certainly ended up deceased. They were deliberately paying no attention to what was happening around them. That couldn't be allowed to continue. Big brass ones, Fred. Brass. Our Harry here wouldn't settle for anything so coarse and common as brass. Pure diamond, hardest substance known to man. Our gentlemen, well Fred and George, how was your holiday? Obviously not as exciting as yours. Harry laughed at that. Guys, you don't know the half of it. Now a certain Padfoot wondered if the best pranksters in the school might just have come across an old piece of parchment that belonged to him. Gobsmacked was a new look for the twins, but they seemed to have no problem pulling it off. If so, he was also wondering if you would consider passing this piece of parchment on to the son of Prongs, namely yours truly. Yes, both Fred and George could now claim to have mastered the gobsmacked look. Enjoying watching the twins in this state, Harry used his most officious voice to deliver the final part of his message. If the answer to both of those questions were to be yes, I'm authorized to set up a meeting between yourselves and the aforementioned marauder, Padfoot. Harry found a piece of old parchment being thrust into his hands as the twins sank to their knees and bowed. Oh mighty son of Prongs, we are honored to be in the same castle with one such as you. Can we really meet Padfoot? This was too much for Harry and he started to laugh. How does Saturday grab you? It was Harry who found himself grabbed by 2 emotional twins. You wouldn't play a prank on us about this. Quote ellipsis. Because that would be seriously unfunny. Hermione was the one who put their minds at rest. Well, kicked those devious minds into overdrive actually. Guys, he stayed at my house for most of last week. I don't think I've ever seen my parents laugh so much. The prank war between the 3 of us and him really escalated. Staying at Padma's last night was the first time I was able to sleep with both eyes closed this week. The twins wanted details but the staff entering meant they and Neville had to head over to the Gryffindor table. Told you George, that boy is a diamond. We need a better name than Budgie, for the son of Prongs though. Roger, like most of the hall, had been watching Harry. It really doesn't bother you that Dumbledore is going to be sitting just up there. If it did, Roger, I wouldn't have returned. My issues with the old man are still the same as they were in September. There may be 1 or 2 more questions I would like a truthful answer to but, apart from that, nothing has really changed. You really think holding a sword to Dumbledore changes nothing? For me it doesn't, Harry honestly answered. The man pulled a wand on an unarmed member of my family, not something I was ever going to stand there and allow. Problem dealt with and over, I'll bet Dumbledore wants to forget all about it too. This saw Roger shaking his head. I never thought I would agree with the Weasley twins, but definitely Diamond, Harry. When Dumbledore stood, welcomed everyone back and began the feast, it was like pulling the plug in the bath and the tension began to drain from the castle. It would appear Harry was right, and the headmaster wanted nothing more than to forget all about that humiliating picture. It was a different picture that had sent tempers soaring at Malfoy Manor. The sight of Crow wrapped in the new Lord Black's arms put the final touch to what had already been a pretty dismal Christmas. Normally, the Malfoy family would have to decide which parties or balls they would grace with their presence. This Christmas they hadn't received one single invitation, not even to the annual Ministry New Year ball. With no goal to even consider holding one of their own, and dreading facing the possible indignity of no one bothering to attend if they had, it was easily the worst Christmas of Draco's life. Then to see any hope of receiving the black inheritance disappear, on the front page of the Prophet no less, was just kicking someone while they were down. It was now obvious why his mother could never access the black vaults. Sirius must have named someone as his heir. The reaction of both parties shown in that photograph made it pretty obvious just who that someone was. Not content with freezing the Malfoy fortune, Crow had now stolen his black inheritance too. His father had instructed him to keep an eye on Crow, and especially those around him. Draco would have done that anyway. What he needed was someone to wind up and point at Crow. The problem with that idea though was Draco couldn't think of anyone stupid enough to actually do that. The whole of magical Britain must have seen his sword at Dumbledore's throat. As if that wasn't bad enough, the mudblood bitch was now walking about with a clearly goblin-forged blade on her hip too. Draco would have loved to get her into trouble for that but was sure they would have checked the Hogwarts handbook and found some loophole that allowed it. If someone else wanted to put forward a complaint, Draco would sit back and enjoy the show. His main objective at Hogwarts though was to stay out of Crow's way. With his mother paying tuition and board for all 7 years, he really had no other options. Hermione rhapsodized over the charm work involved in making the Marauders map. Padma's eyes twinkled wickedly as she claimed they could spy on who was using all the schoolroom cupboards. Harry though had an entirely different approach from both his friends. He thought of the wonderful tactical advantages the map supplied, and wondered if any of the staff had similar items. This drew a harumph from Hermione. Why does everything have to be about battles and tactics with you, Harry? He pointed toward where Moonlight was currently stalking the tasseled end of a woolen scarf, hanging over a sofa in the common room. Would you say your kitten was having fun? Of course she is. Quote ellipsis. Yet at the same time Moonlight's practicing skills she will need as she grows into adulthood. Goblins are a warrior race, so what they teach their children has practical uses. Gaining an advantage over an opponent, whether in banking or combat, is a skill that needs to be nurtured. Just like you would be taught not to touch hot things, or eat stuff that would do you harm, we just have a different set of survival skills. Padma or I wouldn't have a clue how to cross one of your busy London roads without getting knocked down. I'll bet that was something you were taught from a very young age. Yes, we had the Green Cross Code man. The actor then went on to play Darth Vader in the Star Wars series. Okay, I'm with Harry on this one. Basically because I didn't understand a word of what you just said. Well, that's not exactly true. I recognized it was English, even most of the words. It was just the order you used them in that confused the hell out of me. Hermione appeared ready to go into far greater detail until Padma put her finger against her friend's lips. Stop, Hermione. You telling us more about Green Vader or Darth Wars isn't going to help. We simply don't have anything to compare it to. She admitted defeat, for now. Hermione promised both of them would be watching Star Wars just as soon as she could manage it. It was time for bed after a tiring day. The week seemed to drag as they waited for the weekend. Saturday finally came and they briskly headed off for their extra defense lesson. Harry and Hermione had kept up their exercising throughout the holidays so picked right up where they had left off. Padma and Neville weren't so lucky. Professor Weasley pushed them hard. With Professor Flitwick attending for the second half of the lesson, both of their swords got to see some action. Phileas was full of praise for how quickly Hermione was progressing, but was left speechless in his battle with Harry. As their blades clashed while both fought for the advantage, the charms professor suddenly found himself with a long stalk of celery in his hand, where once had been a sword. This was sliced through before Harry's blade shot out strange ropes that wrapped the shocked head of House up tightly. How did you do that? Was all Phileas could manage to say. I don't know, sir, but ever since that fight at Sirius trial I've been able to cast with my sword. I would tell no one about this, Harry. It could be a big advantage for you. My father is already excited at the prospect of my next duel with Master Sharpshot. He wants a copy of that memory for himself, and the director. After lunch, it was finally time for the lesson they had all been looking forward to. Sirius didn't disappoint. He went over the basics of polite behavior before changing the environment into that of a dance. He also had one more trick up his sleeve. Professor Hobson was invited along to be his dance partner. They demonstrated the steps and then had both couples emulate their actions. Harry and Hermione were both quick learners but Neville struggled, probably from having the young witch in his arms. Sensing this, Padma took action. So, Longbottom, you're fine with firing curses at me all morning, but can't handle putting your hand on my waist. What? No, well, not really. Neville, we're friends. Relax and let's enjoy dancing together. If your hand goes somewhere inappropriate, my knee will let your groin know. This had Neville laughing and soon saw him relax. He did ensure his hand didn't slip in the slightest though. Neville was positive Padma wasn't joking about that knee. Harry and Hermione were sure this would be their favorite lesson of the week. Holding each other as they learned to dance was just fine as far as they were concerned. Sirius though threw a spanner into their works. At a formal ball, you will be expected to dance with other people too. Sirius said this while cutting in on the best friends, leaving Harry dancing with the professor while he twirled Hermione around the floor. Harry, I know I'm not Hermione but it is customary to at least pay your dance partner some attention. Sorry professor, I've kinda lost my enthusiasm for balls if it means I have to watch Hermione dancing with other people. I have no problems with family or friends, but does this mean anyone can just walk up and she has to dance with them? Henrika just had to laugh. This was so strange for her. She had a young man in her arms, yet he was worried about who his girl was possibly going to be dancing with. For the Vila, this was simply priceless. It was usually the ladies who were worried about the gentleman she was dancing with. Harry, you really are something else. If Hermione were to attend a ball as your date, any gentleman would have to ask your permission to dance with her. I'll make sure Sirius teaches you the ins and outs of that maze of social quicksand. Even though you may think she's worth it, I'm sure the director wouldn't want one of his Centurions starting a Goblin Rebellion over Hermione's dance card. While the mere thought of someone like Malfoy or Ron Weasley with their arms around Hermione had him wanting to draw his sword, this news drew a smile from Harry. He was a Centurion though for a reason. Why, Professor Hobson, are you teasing me? I noticed you were very close to my godfather, should I be worried? She couldn't help but smile at his comeback. It is rare to find men who are unaffected by my allure, but two in the one family. Thankfully, your godfather is neither my employer nor 11, even though he appears to act younger than you sometimes. I heard that. Did you miss me? When I had such a charming replacement? I hardly think so, Lord Black. Unfortunately, this young goblin did miss his dance partner, leaving me heartbroken and stuck with you. This was all said with a smile as the dancing resumed with the original couples intact. You seemed sad when you were dancing, Harry. I thought every male in the castle wanted to be in Professor Hobson's arms. She was explaining that there are rules for balls and dances. I didn't like the idea that whoever wants could just come along and we would have to dance with them. Sirius will need to teach me the rules before I end up having to fight duels for telling folk to get lost. There must be a polite way of refusing without having to draw my sword. I'll just have to learn it. Hermione found her head resting on his chest. My protector from trolls, even those in dress robes. We really do need a better name for you than Budgie, I think. Swift fits the bill, and it's still a bird. I think we need to swiftly dance with Padma and Neville, before Sirius decides to split 'em up. Neville's just beginning to cope with Padma. Professor Hobson would blow his mind. Harry enjoyed dancing with Padma, and could see Hermione and Neville having fun together too. He could imagine a group of them going to a dance and having a ball together. Harry began to relax after realizing things were nowhere near as bad as he first thought. It was a happy group who left the room of requirements, to find Dumbledore waiting for them in the corridor. Sirius, Henrika and especially Harry were all instantly on high alert. Dumbledore attempted to be as non-threatening as possible as he held out the parcel in his hands. Albus needed this to work and had studied what he was going to say closely. He'd noticed the lad always referred to Barchoke as his father, while James and Lily were mum and dad. Even a little thing like this could be the difference between making a connection with the lad or being rebuffed again. Harry, your dad left this with me. I think it's time it was returned to its rightful owner. It was with great caution Harry took the offered parcel. He even used his knife to slice through the wrappings. The shimmering material the parcel held drew an audible gasp from Sirius. Harry, that's your father's invisibility cloak. He got it from his father. It's been in the Potter family for generations. His face could have been carved from stone, but Harry was living up to the twins' billing. The young Centurion's eyes were like diamonds that were cutting into an uncomfortable Dumbledore. Can I ask how this came to be in your possession, Headmaster Dumbledore? For the life of him, Albus couldn't understand the hostility that was simply pouring off the lad. What had he done wrong this time? I asked your dad if I could borrow the cloak to study it. I never got the chance to return it. At that, Harry turned his back on the headmaster. He needed information from his godfather. Sirius, my father says my mum and dad were a very smart couple. Would you agree with that? Your dad was very smart, Harry, but your mum was simply brilliant. Then please help me understand, Sirius, because this makes them appear like a couple of idiots. Why would these two clever people give up a potentially life-saving tactical advantage, just so Albus bloody Dumbledore could study it? Harry's hostility had switched to absolute fury, and only one person had any hope of containing the explosion. His best friend had her hand back on his arm and speaking in the gentlest voice she could. Harry, we don't understand what you're trying to say. Can you explain? He seemed transported to another time and place. It was also as if he and Hermione were the only two people in the entire world. Quick as a flash, Harry had the cloak around her shoulders. Lily, take Harry and go. It's him. Go, run. I'll hold him off. Hermione was instantly caught up in the moment too, mesmerized by the intensity in those green eyes. I don't think I can leave you. You can't ask me that. You must. Our son will need one of us. Harry's forehead was now resting on Hermione's as he pleaded with her, before leaning back and flicking the cloak's hood up. Hermione may have disappeared, but no one was looking in her direction anyway. All eyes were on Harry. It took 3 attempts before Sirius managed to get his throat to actually make some noise. Dear Merlin, Harry, do you remember that night? The young lad was bereft of emotion as he glacially answered his godfather with words he'd not spoken since being a scared little child, being wakened from a nightmare. Not Harry, please not Harry. Stand aside, you silly girl. Stand aside now. Not Harry, please no, take me, kill me instead. Not Harry, please, have mercy, have mercy. An invisible sobbing girl smashed into her best friend, shocking him back to the present. Harry noticed there wasn't a dry eye in the corridor, even Dumbledore had tears on his cheeks. That didn't stop Harry focusing on the old wizard, though his rage was back under control. My mum and dad could have gone anywhere in the world, yet they stayed in a cottage and hid behind an obscure spell. They had a means of escape yet handed it over to you. These are not the actions of the smart people everyone tells me they were. There is not one shred of doubt both of them loved me. My dad and mum gave their lives so I could live. As their son, I swear I will get to the bottom of what happened that night, and any part you played in it, Headmaster. I thank you for returning my property. It was disconcerting, and downright weird, seeing a pair of arms that had emerged out of nowhere and circled around Harry's torso. Just as Harry seemed to have his arm hanging suspended in midair, right about where the sound of sobbing was slowly stopping. Sirius, I'm not really up to dinner with the twins, and you did promise. I'll see you for lessons tomorrow. Harry walked away, whispering to a still invisible Hermione as he went. Padma was holding on to Neville and crying too. Henrika was watching him closely. Sirius didn't know whether to cry or hit someone. Dumbledore nearly made his mind up for him. Sirius, surely you don't think I had anything to do with I wouldn't believe Albus bloody Dumbledore if he said tomorrow was Sunday. I can promise you this though, you'll find a goblin blade in your gut if you did have anything to do with James and Lily's deaths. Whether the hand holding that blade is Harry's, his father's or even Miss Granger's is something I hope you never have to discover. Henrika helped her 2 students along, with Sirius following on behind. Albus was left standing in the corridor alone, with his plan shattered into a million pieces. What was worse, he had absolutely no idea of what had just taken place. How could a simple gift go so horribly wrong? Hermione was using a hanky to wipe her eyes, and trying to lighten Harry's mood. Your dad and your godfather would be very proud of you. You've not had that cloak an hour yet, but already used it to smuggle a girl into your room. He did try to smile, but Harry's heart wasn't really in it at the moment. Not when they found out I'd made that same girl cry. Hermione was soon sitting beside him, and slipping her hand into his. Oh Harry, you didn't make me cry. It was just discovering you could remember that horrible night that shocked everyone. Our healers think it's a consequence of having a part of Voldemort inside me, even if only for a few days. They couldn't tell whether they were my memories, or the last few seconds of his. My father was offered the chance to remove them but declined. I'm glad he did. Those memories might not be very nice, but they're all I've got of my mum and dad. I couldn't lose them. Those memories are also the reason I will finish off Voldemort, not because of some stupid prophecy. Hermione just squeezed his hand. What other answer could she give? Harry asked Hogwarts if she could let their friends and Sirius know they were fine. The castle took it a step further and provided them both with an evening meal. They enjoyed a quiet night together before using the map and cloak to smuggle Hermione safely, and unseen, back to her dorm. Things were back to normal by their run and exercises next morning, though Padma drew a few strange glances in the common room when she flew into Harry's arms as they met before going down to breakfast. I'm fine, Padma. I hadn't thought of that for a while. It kinda jumped out on me. I'm just glad you took Hermione with you. No one should have been alone after remembering that. The hat put me in Ravenclaw for a reason, Padma. It would have been an incredibly stupid idea not to have Hermione with me, and a stupid Ravenclaw is a contradiction in terms. There's also the matter of needing a crowbar to get her arms to let go. A hand slipped into its usual place on his arm. You wish, Crow, you wish. Hermione being the one doing the teasing generated smiles from both Harry and Padma as the trio headed off for breakfast, and to meet Neville. Albus and Henrika were both pleased to see Harry appeared back to his normal self, though for different reasons. The young history professor had been as shocked as anyone last night at Harry's revelations. It had taken a dinner with Sirius and the Weasley twins to lift her spirits. It would seem an evening with Hermione had fulfilled the same function for the young centurion. It was more relief that Albus felt, relief that he didn't seem to have done any more permanent damage than what transpired last night. The young man now sitting with his friends at the Ravenclaw table looked the picture of health and contentment. Had Harry sat there sullen, and staring daggers at his headmaster, it would have led to questions Albus didn't want to answer. His biggest question though was where did he go from here? Albus was going to have to rely on Providence presenting an opportunity for him to exploit. He had nothing else left at his disposal. After their lesson with Sirius, he asked for some time to chat with his godson. Professor Hobson took the other 3 along, leaving the pair to say what was needed. I spoke to your father last night. He told me about the nightmares when you were younger. I was 3 or 4, Sirius, I've got over it. Just thinking how they could have used my dad's cloak brought it all back. Spending some time with Hermione helped me put those memories back in their box. Seeing his godson didn't want to talk about it, and being warned by Barchoke to expect this reaction, Sirius changed the topic. Henrika told me you were worried about other guys trying to muscle in on your date. Well, there are quite a few ways you can put a stop to that. Harry was now all ears as the castle once more provided food, just as well as the time appeared to fly away. Now, when speaking to your father last night, he was totally unaware of the very important date that's just over 4 weeks away. From that, I assume that you've never heard of Valentine's Day either. February the 14th is a day that can make or break you, so there has to be some thought goes into it. The worst thing possible is to be running around at the last minute, trying to pull something out the fire for your loved one. We both know Hermione deserves better than that. Sirius, if this is a prank, I swear I'll ask Neville, and then decide what you want to do. My offer of help extends to him too. Being raised by his gran might not have prepared him for this. I promise I won't make a fool of you. It might not be a wooden sword in Hermione's hand next time. Harry wouldn't commit to any more just now, not at least until he had spoken to Neville about it. Oh, I meant to say to you yesterday. You can relax, all those nasty betrothal contracts have been refused. I just wrote a standard letter for all of them and your father arranged the delivery. Sirius stopped talking as Harry had a worried look on his face. The Marauders map was soon spread in front of him. Harry, what's the matter? I hope nothing. Oh shit, I really should know better. My luck seems to be running about its usual level. Please tell me those weren't 2 of the names you refused. The map clearly showed Hermione and Padma moving along to Ravenclaw Tower after dinner. What neither of the girls could see was that Marietta and Cho appeared to be standing waiting for them. Both girls had really enjoyed their extra lessons today, and were giggling amongst themselves at how well Sirius and Professor Hobson were getting along. It already seemed a sure thing that Sirius would be there if and when she joined them on their summer holiday. They were also sure Sirius could cope better upon seeing the beautiful blonde in a bathing suit than Neville would. It was also wrong to giggle at the thought their friend's head might actually explode from embarrassment. That didn't stop them giggling though. It was only after they were spoken to that the girls noticed they had company. We have 2 happy witches here, Marietta. Looks like this pair never got sent letters saying they weren't wanted. Yeah, we never even got a chance. These 2 had their hooks into him since that first night. Not bloody fair. My father is angry and accusing me of not really trying. What was I supposed to do? Hermione tried to stay calm, and prevent this escalating into a fight. It wouldn't have made any difference no matter what you would have done. Jo jumped right down her throat before she could say any more. So sure of yourself, aren't you, Granger? It's no wonder no one else can stand you. There was a time those words could have decimated Hermione, but she now knew they were merely said out of spite. The girl currently by her side had stayed right there on more than one sticky occasion, and showed no inclination to run away here. Hermione was also good friends with Neville, witches and wizards from all four houses, and then of course there was Harry. Just thinking about him gave her the strength and confidence to say what she intended. If you would just shut up and listen, I'll give you the information you're missing. Goblins don't use betrothal contracts, believing their children should choose their own mates. Lord Black refused all the betrothal contracts his godson had received. This caused Marietta to stop and think, but Jo had already assigned a name to all her perceived injustices and woes. That name was Hermione Granger. You still think you're going to stroll into Hogwarts and waltz away with the big prize? The boy who lived is not for the likes of you. Padma was wishing they hadn't swapped their dueling robes for the dancing lessons. That didn't mean she was going to back down though. Oh, I don't know, Jo. Hermione's just spent the last few hours waltzing in Harry's arms. He didn't seem to mind at all. Jo knew her family were counting on her snagging the boy who lived. The prestige, not to mention the fortune, would catapult the Changs straight into the top echelon of British magical society. To have all that snatched away from her by this plain little witch with no breeding was not something she was going to stand for. I'll show Harry who the better witch is. Defindo. Jo cast the cutting curse with enough force to slice through clothes and draw some blood. All the blood drained from her face as the curse just bounced right off. Hermione had every confidence her bracelet would protect her from anything Cho Chang was able to cast. That was why, instead of dodging, Hermione took the decision to take the hit while she drew her sword. As the spell rebounded, Cho stood there stunned for a second. This was all the time Hermione needed. Her sword whispered through the air, and removed the top inch and a half of her attacker's wand. Marietta stood with her hands up and held palm outward, the universal sign she was unarmed. Padma now had her wand out, covering Marietta so she wouldn't interfere. Harry had easily outrun his godfather, arriving on the scene as the point of Hermione's sword had a now terrified Cho pinned against the corridor wall. Padma had her wand out, covering Hermione's back as they had begun to draw a crowd. Are you both okay? We're fine, Harry. Cho here wanted to prove to you and the school who was the better witch. I think Hermione just settled that argument, don't you? Padma wanted no one to be in any doubt who had won here, though a clearly terrified Cho was a rather large visual clue. McGonagall soon bustled along the corridor. Kindly lower that blade this instant, Miss Granger, and I would appreciate an explanation. The deputy headmistress's tone told everyone this was not a request, rather a demand. Hermione sheathed her blade, disgusted with herself that the look of terror on Cho's face had initially excited her. Hermione Granger was no bully. We had a private disagreement, Professor. It should not have escalated to this, and for that I apologize. I want to know what this private disagreement was about, and also why you resorted to using a sword on a fellow student. Not wanting Cho's personal business broadcast all over the castle, Hermione dug her heels in. The first part is not mine to tell, Professor. I drew my sword purely for defense, and it's against Hogwarts rules to use magic in the corridors. Harry had a quick whispered conversation with Padma and had his suspicions confirmed. He stepped beside Hermione. Professor, perhaps I can offer an explanation. Were you involved in this too, Mr. Crow? Not directly, but I believe a misunderstanding may have been the cause. I would like to clear up that misunderstanding, to make sure this doesn't happen again. McGonagall couldn't really say no to that. The last thing she needed was students fighting in the corridors. Goblins don't use betrothal contracts, Professor, and there were quite a few in the name of Harry Potter lying in Gringotts. My godfather, Lord Black, has respected my wishes and politely declined every single one of them. This was no slight on anyone, be it by blood status or anything else you care to think of. With no access to my vault, I don't even know what names had been put forward. I'm sorry if anyone is disappointed at that, but my best friend was in no way involved in this decision being made. Jo felt humiliated and wanted some payback. Granger destroyed my wand. What's going to be done about that? McGonagall looked to Hermione for an explanation. She duly obliged. Miss Chang fired a cutting curse at me. I didn't want her firing another. As I said, it's also against the castle rules to use magic in the corridors, so I used my sword to disarm my attacker. The concern in McGonagall's voice was clear to hear. Are you hurt, Miss Granger? Do you need to see Madame Pomfrey? No, Professor. Our extra defense lessons with Professor Weasley just kicked in. He really is a brilliant teacher. Quote ellipsis. But I saw my curse hit her, right across her chest. It was only then it dawned on Cho that perhaps she shouldn't be saying anything. McGonagall dragged her and Marietta away, warning Hermione and Padma that Professor Flitwick would talk with them on this matter later. It was only as the crowd dispersed that Sirius approached the trio. Well done, you three, you handled that brilliantly. Hermione, I'm glad it was only your practice sword you used on me. Good tactical awareness. Padma, you had your wand out and Hermione's back covered. Sorry, Harry, but I should have foreseen this problem. Just because we explained our reasons to the fathers, that doesn't mean they are going to pass those reasons on to the daughters. Your explanation should be all round the castle by the morning. Sirius had underestimated how fast news travels in the castle, certainly quicker than Neville and Parvati as they ran toward the group. Looks like we missed it again, Parvati. I really need to get transferred to Ravenclaw. All this running is killing me. Parvati was in her twin's arms, with no breath left for speaking. Hey Parv, we're fine. That bitch Chang decided to make her play and Hermione owned her ass. She also sliced clean through Chang's wand. The other bit must be lying about here somewhere. You want it as a souvenir, Hermione. Harry currently had his arm around his best friend. Hermione had fought back and, for the first time she could remember, had actually won. She didn't know what she was supposed to be feeling at the moment. Hermione was quite sure she shouldn't be shaking though. It's just the adrenaline leaving your system. You'll be fine in a few moments. Remember what happened to me? No, that was stupid. Please forget all about what happened to me. We don't want to be visiting any toilets for that tonight. This brought a slight smile to Hermione's face, which was Harry's aim. He really had no wish to see her throwing up in a toilet over this. I am so proud of you for the way you handled that. My father will be ecstatic that you took her out using your sword. Your mum and dad will be over the moon too. I can see a few more Spider-Man comics heading in my direction over this. Thinking of her parents, and how well Harry got on with them, put a genuine smile on Hermione's face. Looking at Neville leaning on the wall, he'd practically burst a gut to get here. Padma had her arm comfortingly around her twin, but her friend had stood beside her once more. The arm around her shoulders, though, was the most important. Harry not only gave her the confidence to deal with these situations, he provided the training and even supplied her sword. One glance at a grinning Sirius and Hermione knew she was going to be fine. With such a support group in place, how could she not be? I was already heading to Crawley to tell your mum and dad how your weekend went. Wait until they hear this story. No embellishing the story, Sirius. My mum and dad worry enough over me being here. They don't need to hear stories of the daughter wielding her trusty blade against hordes of attacking witches. Sirius appeared crestfallen. Or, Hermione, please. You, wielding your trusty blade against hordes of attacking witches is just too good not to use. I could have Dan and Emma on the edge of their seats. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm afraid of. Them getting off those seats to drag their only daughter out of Hogwarts. Chang fired one curse. It was shielded before I sliced her wand in two. Quote ellipsis. But Hermione, where's the excitement, drama and tension in that? Padma was gradually getting used to the marauder, and comfortable enough to joke right back. There was drama and tension enough for me, thank you very much. For excitement though, Harry taking 9 of them down in as many seconds really takes a bit of beating. A laughing Sirius reluctantly bade him a good night, until Harry asked what he had planned for the rest of the week. I'm hoping to find an old friend. Seeing his godson's concern at that remark, he quickly put his mind at rest. No, not that one. Your father persuaded me to let the authorities deal with that. Your father can be quite persuasive when he puts his mind to it. Barchoke had actually sat him down for some straight talking, saying Harry needed him in his life. Pointing out that he'd let his godson down before may be true, but Sirius definitely thought that was a low blow. He accepted it though as he got to know the goblin better. This was a father who would do anything for his son. Since that son was his godson, how could Sirius possibly argue with that? Peter had cost him 10 years with Harry, and any chance of raising his godson. That both Barchoke and Harry wanted the marauder as part of their lives was an unexpected and wonderful opportunity, an opportunity he had no intention of throwing away over chasing a rat. The rat in question was currently rising from its cozy shelter, behind the brick wall that was part of a London Underground tunnel. Peter had excavated a nice little hide for himself, once he could ignore the sounds of the trains racing past. He was less than 100 yards from Leicester Square Underground Station, and within a quarter of a mile of both Diagon Alley and the Ministry of Magic. Not that he wanted to go to any of those places, information though could be as vital as food. There was no shortage of food available to him, not if you were prepared to rake through the bins. This was no problem to Peter, spending so long as a rodent had dulled what little piece of self-worth the wizard known as Peter Pettigrew had. Once he had dreams of grandeur and power, only for that power to be corrupted into him being forced to betray his friends. The former marauder had then surprised himself at how well his play had worked against Sirius. While Black had spent a decade in Azkaban, he lived a life of relative luxury as a young boy's pet. Peter had even spent the last 4.5 years living in the Gryffindor dorms, bringing back memories of happier and more innocent times. That all changed when Sirius Black had been freed from Azkaban, forcing Peter to flee his safe haven. Only the involvement of Harry gave him time to escape. Had they plastered all over the front of the prophet that he was a rat animagus, Peter doubted if he could have made it out of the burrow. What was that news though in comparison to the boy who lived holding a sword to Dumbledore? Peter thought he was safe for the moment. How long that would last was anyone's guess. He was a 30-year-old wizard who'd now spent a third of his life living as a rat, and who knew how much longer that would have to continue. The dark mark that was burned into his arm all those years ago changed his life forever, and not for the better. Thanks for reading. 2 I would like to dedicate this chapter to one of my readers. This young lady spent her flights to and from the UK reading a number of my stories. That she lives in Australia gives you some idea of what a marathon feat this was. A personal, thanks for reading, to Roperta from me. Robert. Love is in the air. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, since I still have to drag myself to work every Monday to Friday, that should be proof enough that I am neither a professional author nor do I own Harry Potter. Robst is just someone having a bit of fun during the long, dark Scottish evenings by playing in the world JKR created for us. I also don't own any of the words used in this chapter, and claim only the order I placed them in as my own. Chapter 25. Harry's declaration regarding his betrothal contracts actually made it into the prophet. Instead of buying him breathing space though, every witch in Hogwarts took this as an invitation that the boy who lived was still there for the taking. Not quite the effect he was hoping for. The lessons with Sirius were paying dividends too, unexpected ones. Harry could now see that his actions had painted a large target on Hermione's forehead with the other witches in the castle. His task now was damage limitation, while standing squarely beside his best friend. A part of him hated that he'd caused Hermione all this trouble, a much greater part couldn't imagine a life without his wonderful best friend in it. Now he had to walk the tightrope between making Hermione's Valentine's Day special, and not heaping more scorn on her from the other witches. Harry was coming to rely on his godfather's advice more and more, something that pleased both of them. Hermione's takedown of Cho had won her deserved respect across the castle, as had her attitude afterwards. Hermione had taken the view that Cho was understandably upset at her betrothal refusal, the second year had reacted without thinking, and also out of character. Giving Cho the benefit of the doubt saw Hermione claim the moral high ground, leaving her opponent with no other option than to apologize. After Professor Flitwick had investigated the matter by speaking with all 4 witches involved, Cho found herself in detention for a month while Marietta merely lost house points for initial poor judgment. News that Harry would be spending his summer hopping around the world, along with his invited friends, was soon common knowledge. Parvati would obviously tell her best friend, and Lavender would obviously tell the entire castle. That Miss Hobson was also rumored to be attending at some point over the summer saw Harry face an almost constant barrage of witches and wizards wrangling for invites. Spending some of the summer with the Weasley twins or Roger Davies might be appealing but, by and large, Harry was really glad he'd locked the numbers where they were. Ravenclaw House had soon buckled back down to studying after the holiday, though Penny almost unintentionally started a riot. Percy had owls this year and, citing the poor teaching on offer at Hogwarts, had asked his elder brother for some defense tuition for him and his girlfriend. Penny getting extra defense tuition, from the same teacher the first years raved about, saw Bill Weasley inundated with requests to join these classes. This saw Bill approach Minerva about the possibility of running an owl revision defense class on a Sunday afternoon, only to be asked if he could do the same for Newt-level students on a Saturday too. Bill had to get back to Gringotts about that. Barchoke was looking for a favor from Minerva, so was delighted to have this carrot to dangle in front of her. There was also the added bonus of even more Gringotts influence inside Hogwarts Castle to be considered, something that would surely get right up Dumbledore's crooked nose. Since the favor Barchoke requested was permitted under Hogwarts rules, providing the proper forms were completed, Minerva was delighted to comply. The notices of extra owl and Newt defense tuition would be posted in the common rooms before the end of the day. She expected there would be a large uptake. Minerva couldn't remember when things had run this well inside Hogwarts, nor when the students had gotten a better education. The goblin influences in history, potions and defense were certainly having a positive effect on the castle. Even the Weasley twins were often observed studying the wonderful potions Bookmaster Pitsley provided. The Minister of Magic could hardly contain his excitement while waiting on the department head he'd just summoned. Cornelius had been lying in the bath last night when his eureka moment struck, and he didn't even wet the floor. The ministry needed a way to officially contact the goblins, a way that he would be able to justify to the Wizengamot, and he may just have found it. He, Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic, solving problems, this was exhilarating. Why did he ever listen to people like Malfoy or Dumbledore in the first place? A knock at the door brought the man he wanted to talk with into his office. Come in, Arthur, take a seat. There is something I'd like to run past you, though I must emphasize this needs to remain top secret at the moment. Arthur Weasley could only nod in agreement, having no idea what Fudge was up to. The whole Crouch Black matter was only solved by the goblins passing messages on to Amelia's niece through young Harry. I think we would both agree that's a pretty unsatisfactory method of communication between governments. What I'm proposing will see your department abolished. Arthur's heart sank at that. How was he supposed to go home and tell his little girl she couldn't go to Hogwarts now? Quote ellipsis. And replaced with one which handles all our liaisons with both the Muggles and the Goblins. I have you earmarked to head this new department, but only if we can pull this off. Arthur felt as if he was on an out-of-control broom. He'd just corkscrewed to the depths of despair before racing to the dizzy heights of a possible promotion. Of course there had to be a catch. Minister, I could hardly be considered a goblin expert. You know as much about goblins as I do, but you have an amazing resource at your disposal that I don't. Your eldest son not only works for Gringotts, he's a personal tutor of Harry's at Hogwarts. Minister, my son takes his work for the goblins very seriously. The chances of him passing on any information are nil. Very admirable of him, Arthur, and exactly what we're after. The ministry aren't looking for goblin secrets to be exposed, rather that a dialogue between us can hopefully be established. Both of us know how difficult this could be to get past the Wizengamot. It would be political suicide if the goblins weren't on board first. I need your son to pass this general idea to the goblins and discover what they think about it. Unless we get positive feedback, this conversation never happened and the matter ends here. Having Bill sound the goblins out on this idea was something Arthur approved of. He also understood the minister's stance on saying nothing just now. To push this through the Wizengamot, only for the goblins to then reject it, would end the careers of everyone involved in this new measure. I hope we can count on your son's discretion to act as a go-between. The ministry and the goblins need to agree on this deal before we go anywhere near the chamber with new legislation. This could be potentially a massive step for both leaderships. Well, what do you think, Arthur? The more Arthur thought about it, the more excited he became. I think it's a brilliant idea, Minister. I would like to have at least the framework in place by summer. If we can invite Centurion Crow to the ministry summer ball, the Wizengamot would then face public pressure to vote in favor of these new measures. Arthur left the minister's office with his head spinning, not least because it was Cornelius Fudge who'd come up with this idea. He needed to contact Bill at once. Hermione was a bundle of nerves this morning. She didn't know what was going to happen, and that always worried her. It wasn't as if Hermione was an expert on Valentine's Day. She'd never received a card in her life. She was hoping for one today though, but understood that Harry being a goblin might scupper that actually happening. Hermione would certainly not stoop to dropping any hints. Having Harry at her side for the day was more than enough for Hermione, but she knew every witch in the castle would be casting their eyes in her direction today. She had of course gotten Harry a card, but even that presented a dilemma. What if she gave him the card and he hadn't gotten one for her? It wouldn't be much of a Valentine's Day if Harry spent it berating himself for not getting her a card. Harry solved all her problems the moment they met. Giving Hermione a hug, followed by a kiss on the cheek was a good start. Happy Valentine's Day, Hermione. Would you do me the honor of spending the evening with me? This left Hermione a very relieved but now puzzled witch. Don't I spend every evening with you? Ah, but not like this. Harry's mischievous smile would melt hearts of stone. So, do we have a date? The use of the D word had Hermione's head in a spin. She quickly agreed to anything before they headed off to exercise. Hermione handed Harry his card before they went down to breakfast, and emulated his hug-kiss combination from earlier. It was only when she stepped back that Hermione noticed the beautiful yellow rose that was now pinned to her robes. How? When? Magic, Hermione, simply magic. Hermione sat at breakfast with her rose pinned to her robes and a permanent smile on her lips, much to the indignation of Padma. How can you sit there grinning like an idiot with that happening beside you? Glancing to her other side revealed a long line of owls delivering cards and presents to Harry, causing Hermione to shrug her shoulders. I've already given Harry my card, and he's taking me on a date tonight. Date. Padma could have bitten her tongue off for saying that too loud, but Hermione didn't seem to mind. She just nodded her head in confirmation while her smile got wider. This would be enough to start tongues wagging, and that information would be all over the castle by the time breakfast finished. On Hermione's other side, Harry was amassing quite the collection of cards and chocolates. Someone's very popular today. Looks like Honeydukes has been cleaned out. Help yourself, Roger. I'm not really a fan of chocolate. Why don't you start passing them around the table, let everyone enjoy them? This proved to be a popular decision as many hands made light work of Harry's haul. Padma had helped herself to a couple of chocolate frogs when a warning look from the boy they were sent to saw the amphibian-modelled confectionery disappear into her bag. The warning bell rang and it was time to head to potions. Harry's glance led Padma to believe they might be testing chocolate today. They were less than halfway through their potions lesson when the class was interrupted by a delegation. McGonagall, Flitwick and Dumbledore all appeared concerned. It was Phileas who took the lead. Excuse this intrusion, Master Pitsley, we needed to check on your students. Ravenclaws all over the castle have been acting peculiar. Our first years though seem curiously unaffected. Could I have a bit more detail than peculiar, Master Flitwick? It doesn't give us much to go on. Phileas knew what reaction this news would bring. He still needed to say it though. It would seem a number of my house have been affected by potions that affect their emotions. We suspected some of the chocolates Centurion Crow received may have been tainted, but the entire first year uninfected would appear to dispute that. Almost all the first years were seen to help themselves to the free sweets. Phileas stopped because Padma placed her chocolate frogs on the bench, closely followed by Mandy, Morag, Terry, Michael and Anthony doing the same with their hordes of free chocolate. Hermione felt she needed to justify her lack of confectionery. My parents are dentists, we don't eat chocolate in our house. She didn't want to admit there were other things running through her mind while everyone else was helping themselves, namely her date with Harry. Mandy broke next. I saw Harry give Padma a warning look. She then put her chocolate in her bag. That was good enough for me, so I did the same, and then told Morag. The little Scot quickly volunteered that she'd pass the exact same advice on to the boys, though no one else was willing to take notice of her concerns. Terry spoke for all the first years. If Harry's being cautious about something, that's good enough for me. I could always eat them later. This left Minerva to ask the question Harry had known would be coming from the moment they entered the potions class. If you suspected something, Mr. Crow, why didn't you say so? This morning I received 14 separate gifts of sweets. The odds of at least one of them being tampered with were good. What was I supposed to do, Professor? You witnessed what happened over the betrothal refusal. Don't you think it would have been worse if I started having the gifts tested to see if I wasn't being slipped a potion? Duels have been fought over far less insulting behavior than that. The staff must have seen all those deliveries. Did it occur to any of you to check there was nothing harmful amongst it? None of the three could answer that, though Dumbledore of course had something to say. If you suspected in the least, you should not have let your housemates eat tainted chocolates. Supposing there was poison in some of those sweets. I assume there are wards in place to prevent that. It is after all your job to keep us safe, not mine. You were in the hall and did nothing. Do not come in here blaming me for your mistakes. I also assume the DMLE has been contacted. Dumbledore was once more on the defensive. For a school prank, don't be ridiculous. When the people who did this are found, they shall be punished with detentions and lost house points. This led Harry to shake his head in disappointment. Master Pitsley, what is the penalty for even attempting to poison a goblin with a love potion? Beheading. It was an enraged potions master who provided even more information. No one has ever been stupid enough to attempt poisoning a centurion with that filth. I would imagine their punishment would be even more severe. Minerva had her hand protectively at her throat. How do you get more severe than having your head removed? It was Harry who gave her the answer. It depends who or what is doing the removing. A goblin blade would be clean and quick. A dragon might decide to chew on you a bit first. Are you going to contact the Auras, headmaster, or shall we do this the goblin way? Once the process of goblin justice has been started, it can't be stopped until it reaches its conclusion. The goblin potions master was already halving all the chocolate, meticulously labeling and bottling each sample. I will leave a set that can be examined by your own potions master, though I would expect the perpetrators of this to be easy to find. All we need look for are the witches being pursued by lovesick Ravenclaws. That would not necessarily be a marker of the guilt. As I mentioned before, we can't discount this being a prank. Harry removed some cards from his bag and began writing in the corner. These are the cards that came with the sweets. I've marked in the bottom corner what chocolate came with that card. The handwriting might match the girl who I was supposed to fall for. It was then his head of house broke the bad news. We think at least 3 separate girls were involved. There have been fights breaking out around the castle as suitors fought for their new love's attention. Classes have been cancelled for the rest of the day to allow the staff to deal with the situation. Professor Snape is currently brewing flushing potions for those affected. Not all of them are wizards. Harry immediately focused on McGonagall. Does this mean we can leave early? I think I really need to talk to my father about this. We plan to make an announcement at lunch. You're free after that. She then immediately turned her attention to the headmaster, preempting his objection. All the relevant parchment has been completed, headmaster, and this is within my remit. Master Pitsley handed Dumbledore a bag containing half the samples. I would advise you to get your auras here as soon as possible. If these samples result in a positive test, Barchoke will demand justice on those who attempted to poison his son. Students, I shall see you next week, assuming Centurion Crow is still attending Hogwarts. The 3 members of the senior staff accompanied the class back to the Great Hall, where bewildered students were milling about, wondering just what was going on. As Dumbledore left to contact the DMLE, it was McGonagall who took to the podium. She was greeted by silence as everyone wanted to know if the rumors were true. Students, it would seem some amongst you took the spirit of Valentine's Day to an unacceptable level. We are currently having samples of chocolate analyzed for the presence of love potions, and the headmaster is contacting the DMLE. There are some students already in the infirmary, and classes have been cancelled for the rest of the day to allow the staff to investigate this very serious matter. Normally, any announcement about cancelled classes would be greeted by cheering, not this time. Total, stunned silence. A silence that was broken by a single voice. Professor, can I say something? Harry was standing on the Ravenclaw bench, and asking for permission to speak. Minerva gave him that permission. It looks like some of the sweets I was sent today may have had some form of love potions in them. Fortunately, I didn't eat any. If I had, the people who sent them would be facing goblin justice. For this crime, a guilty verdict carries a death penalty. Since this information wasn't known, and I didn't eat any of the sweets, the DMLE will deal with the incident, this time. Oh, that law also applies to friends of the Goblin Nation. This was also greeted with silence as Harry sat back down. McGonagall thought there was one more thing she needed to add. One of the most important lessons you will learn while growing up is that our actions can have consequences. This may be a prank that went horribly wrong or something more sinister. Either way, there will be consequences. It's only how serious those consequences are that have still to be determined. Ingesting multiple love potions can prove fatal as they compete for dominance inside the victim's body. Thankfully, it would appear we have been spared the terrible fate this time. Lunch appeared on the table, but there didn't seem to be much appetite for it. Only Ron Weasley was eating with his usual gusto. Harry took Hermione's hand and led her out the hall, pausing only to let their friends know they would see them later. I'm sorry, Hermione, this is not the day I had planned for you. Can you grab a dress, and whatever you need to go with it? We can get ready at my place later. I need to get to my father before he explodes. No problem, Harry, but why the serious rush? You didn't eat any of the chocolate and are perfectly fine, or am I missing something here? You know goblins only have one mate, and that mate is for life. Hermione was nodding at this but still missing the point. Can you imagine how a society with those beliefs would react to a potion that could cause goblins to break sacred bonds? Nothing is hated in the nation as much as these potions, except perhaps those who would use them. This is an aspect of Valentine's Day Sirius didn't mention to me. So you didn't know your sweets had those potions in them? Hermione, only a fool would eat something when you didn't know who sent it. To then test the gift would be a great insult. I suspected they might be pranked, nothing like this though. Oh, I'd better warn you, my father can be quite scary when he's really mad. What you need to remember though is he's not mad at us. This drew a smile from the girl. Don't worry, Harry, my mum and dad can be the same. So, where are we going tonight? Harry's father was currently in a meeting with the director, a meeting Ragnick appeared to be enjoying. So Barchoke, it would appear your ploy has not only borne fruit, it's providing us with a whole orchard. He tried to insert a note of caution. We're still far from equals though. Placing goblins on a par with muggles is not such a step up in the eyes of a lot of purbloods, they think muggles a little more than beasts too. That may be true, and probably why the minister thinks he can get this passed through the Wizengamot. If he tries for too much in the one bite, both he and his policy will be thrown out. We need to tweak this policy so that it reaches a level that I can then take to the nation, without causing a revolt. Neither side were ever going to get all they wanted. What we need here is a middle ground that we can both accept, and sell to our subjects. Barchoke was also worried about the timescale involved here. Negotiations like this usually take years. This will alter treaties and laws. Is it feasible to even consider the timescale the minister is hinting at? The director couldn't help but let his grin show through. That all depends on whether the right people can be put in position, and what form these negotiations take. I intend to suggest Weasley as the ministry representative meets directly with a member of the nation. An ambassador, if you will. Looking at the director's grin actually widening, Barchoke had a bad feeling about this. That sounds fine. Did you have someone in mind? The grin had become a chuckle. Why Ambassador Barchoke, can't you guess? Director, I am already very busy. I am just about to change that. Apart from the Potter account, all others will go to account managers of your choice, no more than one per manager though. I see your new duties taking up all your time for the next 6 years. That number was hugely significant, but Barchoke wanted to ensure he was reading the correct interpretation into this clue. Director, why 6 years? By then you should be able to fulfill a goblin's lifelong ambition, and hand your duties over to your son. Ambassador Lord Harry James Potter has quite the ring to it, don't you think? He would represent the nation, yet be respected in both worlds, if his father can pull this off. Barchoke was now kneeling before his leader in respect. He had no words to say what this represented for him, and his son. Weasley has our curse breaker to rely on for information about us. Make sure he knows to comply with his father's wishes. You have your own son, off learning the ways of wizards. You also have Miss Granger, friend to the nation and an invaluable source for all things Muggle. I can't think of the last time I felt so positive about the future of our nation. The kneeling goblin finally found his voice. Director, you have my vow that this venture will not fail due to any lack of effort or guile on my part. As you yourself said, this would see me fulfill an ambition I thought was merely an impossible dream. I know my friend, and it would be well deserved. Let's keep your supposed success's identity a secret for now. We can let it slip to Weasley if the negotiations falter. I'm hoping to keep that news to ourselves, and use it to wring more concessions out them later. With the prospect of their boy who lived accepting his lordship, your son shall be our ace in the hole once more. What of my son, can I tell him? I don't like keeping secrets that concern him. This is not a secret, yet. Until you become ambassador, there is no secret to keep. Once you have achieved that feat, you may of course tell your son. As he gets older, he will need different training to cope with this new role we both want for him. I am delighted you have already started his tuition with Lord Black. Between that, Hogwarts and his involvement with the Grangers, our young centurion should have a good grounding to undertake this most difficult of roles. Barchoke could agree to that. Until the deal was done, there was no job for Harry to aim for. What of the Dark One? His disposal still remains one of our nation's top priorities. We cannot put our lives on hold, however, waiting on him gracing us with an appearance. You have my promise that when he does, everything we have will stand beside your son in his efforts to finish this once and for all. We want a respectful peace between our nation and all others. He will destroy peace and everyone who doesn't bow before him. The Dark One must be destroyed for all our sakes. It was a relieved Harry who discovered his father in an incredibly good mood. He almost hated spoiling it with his news. Harry also discovered just how powerful the charm of Rowena Ravenclaw's really was. Hermione blushing like a beetroot at his father's string of obscenities indicated she still understood the goblin language. Father, Hermione probably doesn't know what a clabot is, far less that it has a puzzle that should be transferred to these witches. This allowed an enraged Barchoke to regain control. That was no language to use in front of a young female. I apologize, Hermione, I hope my son has explained why we despise these potions so much. Yes, sir. Had I been forced to watch Harry kissing one of those witches, I would probably have agreed with your hag comment too. Harry tried to get his point across. Madam Bones will deal with it. You told me yourself she was a fair-minded witch. Sirius can handle anything else that comes up over this. The whole school now knows our views on these potions, let them deal with it this time. His father also knew the incident would give them a little more leverage in the dealings with the ministry. Something like this would not remain out of the profit. Very well, but there will be a condition. If this is just the actions of some silly witches, the ministry can deal with it. If we find others behind this, Gringotts may take action against those individuals. Publicly locking down the Malfoy vaults made a lot of purebloods sit up and take notice. Locking down a vault would be the minimum punishment for attempting to use one of these potions on a centurion. Knowing this was as good as he was going to get, and better than he had hoped for, Harry quickly conceded that condition. Now all he had to do was contact Sirius about their change in plans. Hermione was sitting staring at the mirror, and wishing her mum was here. She had applied some makeup to her face in an attempt to highlight her eyes. The effect was rather panda-esque. The knock at her bedroom door saw the last person Hermione expected entering, and they were dressed as if for a date too. Professor Hobson, what are you doing here? This drew a smile from the blonde witch. Hermione, when we're outside Hogwarts, it's Henrika. Did you really think we were going to let a couple of first years loose for an evening in London? You're coming too. Oh, this is great. Do you know where we're going? Harry won't say. Must run in the family, his godfather wouldn't tell me either. All I know is that it involves dinner and dancing, and we had to pop here to pick you both up. Can I help you get ready? Hermione was extremely grateful for the offer, and quickly accepted. She trusted Henrika not to steer her wrong. Too many young girls just can't wait to grow up. It's you Harry's asked on a date tonight, not someone you think you need to be. Henrika's wand left Hermione's face free of makeup, and her complexion glowing with health. I can use a Veela spell to help you though. Hermione watched in utter amazement as her frizz was slowly replaced by soft curls. You have got to teach me that. Quote ellipsis. And you have got to get moving, I left some nervous wizards to come and get you. Hermione watched Harry's face light up as she entered the room. She was concentrating on that so much, the well-known voice surprised her. Doesn't even look at us, Neville, probably never even noticed we were here. Padma, Neville, what are you doing here? Well, since Mr. Longbottom asked me to spend the evening with him, I said yes. Neville gave me a card and asked just after you two left. Oh, this is brilliant. Do you have any idea where we're going? Harry was right by her side. Now Hermione, why would you want to spoil the surprise? It's time to go anyway. The three couples caused quite a stir as they left Gringotts to head for the leaky cauldron. Hermione was reminding herself that the cauldron didn't do dancing, but was still relieved to discover they were merely passing through. The limo sitting outside couldn't have been for anyone else. Harry opened the door for her as the surprises just kept coming. She found herself engulfed in some very familiar arms. Mum, Dad, you too. Hermione was now looking forward to her night even more. There was barely time to bring everyone up to speed on what had been discovered at Hogwarts. Two fourth-year girls had done it purely as a prank, both only wanted a kiss from the boy who lived on Valentine's Day. They received a week's suspension from Hogwarts, were put on probation for a year and then escorted home by auras. Both girls were mortified at the trouble they had caused, and the trouble they were now in. A third-year Slytherin had received a package from home, a package she was told to send to Harry. The auras were currently visiting her parents. The limo soon dropped them at the destination, the Thames Embankment, just along from the Houses of Parliament. All the ladies were delighted with their surprise, a dinner dance cruise along the Thames. They were soon shown to their table, a table that had a fabulous view of London by night. Even Dan and Emma were impressed. This is wonderful, Sirius, how did you think of it? I didn't know you were so well up on our world. I'm actually not, Emma, I just remembered something from many years ago. James and Lily did this one Halloween, it was getting too dangerous to go out and celebrate in our world at the time. Come to think of it, I'm sure we celebrated Harry's birth 9 months later. Sirius's attempt at embarrassing his godson failed miserably, no one minded though after witnessing the result. The expression on Harry's face was one of wonder and amazement. My mum and dad did this. Maybe even sat on this very boat. His friends and family got to see Harry with all his defenses down, Emma though this was the first time she had seen this side of the lad. The mother also couldn't fail to notice that her daughter was, if anything, even closer to her best friend. When Sirius had approached them with this idea for Valentine's Day, they had both quickly agreed. Dan may think his little princess was too young to be even thinking about a date, the fact that he was going to see Hermione again quashed any argument before it got started. After a lovely meal, the band had barely began playing when Harry asked Hermione to dance. Padma and Neville were soon following them onto the dance floor as Dan slipped his arm around his wife. I just can't get over how confident she looks, or how well they fit together. Sirius, Henrika, you've done a wonderful job in such a short space of time. The young professor may be having to keep her Veela allure as screwed down as tight as she could, but Henrika was still enjoying herself. It's an absolute pleasure to teach such willing pupils. I sometimes help Bill with the defense lessons too. Harry is an extremely motivated young man, and his friends have a fierce determination to keep up with him. I think your daughter fears being left behind. Even in the short time I've known her, I feel confident in saying that will never happen. Watching as the young couple waltzed around the dance floor, it was hard to refute that claim. Hermione held her birthday on the astronomy tower as the most romantic event in her life. That would have to be changed. Dancing in Harry's arms on a ship sailing down the Thames on Valentine's Day was simply unbelievable. She had hoped for a card, and Harry had made her feel like a princess. So, do you like your surprise? Oh Harry, I absolutely love it. Thank you so much. Well, this is just the first part of it. We're all staying at your house for the weekend. Give your mum and dad a chance to see our lessons too. Cursebreaker Weasley will come to your house in the morning, and you'll need to add a certain history professor to the ward access. Professor Hobson will be there in the afternoon. I think Sirius and her are getting quite close. Hermione's eyes now glistened with unshed tears. That these were happy tears was never in doubt. She had something that was bothering her though, and for once just blurted it out. Why are you so good to me, Harry? This drew a smile and an easy answer from the boy in question. Quote ellipsis. Because you're my best friend. That earned Harry a rather chaste peck on the lips, leaving both of them happily blushing. Henrika was again having the unusual experience of dancing with someone and not having their full attention. At least this time she was sure it was not through lack of interest on her dance partner's part. Harry's fine, serious. If anything, it should be Dan Granger keeping his eye on them. I just want the night to be perfect for them. I wasn't around when he was younger and then, first thing he asks me to do when I'm back, Hermione gets jumped in the corridor. Sirius, please listen to me. Harry will love his godfather tomorrow, no matter what, just as you will him. That's the way these things work. A few days out of the castle will probably suit him down to the ground, given what happened in Hogwarts today. Now, I thought this was a date, or did you lure me here under false pretenses? Sirius realized this woman deserved nothing less than his full attention. Oh, this is most certainly a date, Miss Hobson, a date I have been looking forward to. And thanks for reading.